Rankings define a person's status and awaken their deepest desires. Power, intelligence, connections, money, jobs, absolutely everything in this world has a ranking. It is precisely in this setting that the journey of a young boy in Tori village begins. This young man is Lao, who is currently 16 years old. Lao finally finishes chopping the firewood for the day, but immediately after, he is asked for another favor, to give a foot massage to one of the villagers. But out of nowhere, a girl appears and lands a flying kick right on top of this man. This is Yuna, who arrives complaining and telling the villager not to abuse Lao's goodwill, making him do everything for everyone. The man defends himself, replying that Lao just idles around and always has that look on his face like he's doing absolutely nothing. Yuna argues that he was just born that way, a bit more detached. She gives Lao a shake, telling him that this is exactly why the people in the village treat him like a doormat. Lao simply replies that he doesn't mind, but Yuna counters that that isn't the main point. She knows he is kind, but suddenly, Yuna remembers something important and asks if Lao wants to leave the village with her, revealing that she found a hidden path. At that exact moment, an ugly, wretched old hag appears, saying that no, by no means are they leaving that place. She asks if Yuna forgot the village rules and orders the girl to be detained immediately. Yuna actually ends up being carried away by the villagers, complaining and calling it ridiculous, questioning why things always have to be that way. Meanwhile, yet another person asks poor Lawa for help. This villager comments that Lawa and Yuna are the only young people of the same age in the village, and despite that, they are completely different. He tells Lawa that he can rest once in a while and asks if the boy doesn't have his own desires. Lawa replies that he will help anyway. He explains that when his parents died and he was left all alone, the entire village treated him like family. He knows very well the sacrifices everyone made for him, which is why he makes sure to give back. Lawa states that he loves the village and everyone who lives there way too much. The man then asks if he wants to live at his house, wanting to know where they could start arranging that. Lawa thanks him and replies that it's alright, sir. To Lawa, the villagers are the most important thing in existence, and the outside world doesn't mean much at all. Meanwhile, Yuna is trapped inside a bamboo cage, screaming for them to let her out. The grandma appears and tells her she should learn more from Lao. Yuna, with complete sincerity, asks why they can't leave the village under any circumstances. The grandma questions if the merchants who visit them aren't enough, wanting to know what the problem is after all. Yuna responds that it's not that, but rather the fact that the outside world is gigantic, while they all live trapped inside here. The grandma explains that they are stuck there because they are outcasts, but tells Yuna that she doesn't need to know much right now, and that, one day, time will take care of resolving everything. Later on, Lo is indeed helping carry buckets to the well, when suddenly, a stone hits him on the head. It was Yuna, throwing the rock just to get his attention. Lo asks if she managed to escape again, and she replies that after escaping so many times, it's a total piece of cake now. Yuna tells Lo to follow her, and leads him to that hidden path out of the village, because there is something she really wants to show him. The two walk through a forest that isn't very dense, where sunlight still manages to pierce through the trees in radiant beams. Then, Yuna shows him a monumental landscape. It is the outside world, endless green prairies, massive mountains, and a river flowing into a vast ocean. Yuna says that that is the outside world, and it is enormous. Lo is deeply impressed and thinks it is all incredible. Yuna asks if he knows the rules of the outside world, explaining what she learned from a book she secretly took from a merchant. She explains that the external world operates through a system called ranking. Adventurers, delivery workers, doctors, musicians, everything has a ranking. Anyone who manages to make it onto this list is called a ranker. Even weapons, food, strength, and wealth join the dance. In that world, everything is ranked and everyone truly competes. Lo asks if the outside world has rules too, and Yuna answers that it does, but highlights that there are far cooler things out there than in the village. She reveals that she wants to become a ranked adventurer, travel to various places, and compete with rivals from all over the world. Lo ponders and says they aren't allowed to leave the village, but Yuna couldn't care less about the prohibitions. She begs him to come with her, saying they can live a great adventure together, and insisting that he needs to go. She asks if he remembers when they were only 5 years old, and that giant bird attacked her. It was Lo who stepped up to save her. Lo asks if that actually happened, and Yuna confirms it, recalling that it was a massive creature that made a huge booming noise like boom 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 boom. She says she knew at that exact moment that even though he looks a bit spaced out in his daily life, when he truly tries, he is stronger than anyone. She states with absolute certainty that he is going to shine brightly outside the village. Lo responds by thanking her for the compliment, but insists that he loves that place too much to leave. Yuna slaps his stubborn head, saying that fine, then she will go alone, and he can stay in that village forever. And indeed, Yuna leaves the village. Loa had never stopped to think about the outside world or the rankings. The sun was already setting, so he decides to head back to the village. But suddenly, a gigantic floating citadel passes directly over the forest. A colossal magical crystal located beneath this citadel fires a devastating blast of power directly at the village. Lo falls into utter despair, but tries to calm himself down, thinking that everything will be fine, that the people must be okay. However, upon returning, the village simply no longer exists. In its place, there is only a massive crater. Everything has vanished. The grandma Yuna, the villagers, everything is gone. A mysterious man appears at the site complaining, saying, "Damn it, I arrived late again." He spots Lo standing there in the middle of the crater and asks if he is also from Tori village. The man laments, saying it must have been hard, but tells the boy not to worry because that floating island has already vanished from the area. Loe, in complete shock, asks what happened, what went wrong, what that thing even was, and what happened to all the people from the village. The man tells him to just forget about the village once and for all, and hands him a piece of paper, telling him he must go to the location written on it, where he will be able to live in safety. Loe demands that he answer his questions, but the man orders the boy to look around him, reinforcing that the entire village is gone, and that this is no longer a world for children like him. He insists that Lo needs to forget the past and become a new person, because that is the only thing he can do right now. The man thinks to himself, this kid cannot become just another victim of this situation. However, Lo remembers the words of the people he loved, and he begins to concentrate a power within himself that he had never seen before. He asks how the man expects him to just forget everything. He declares that he will go to that floating island and bring everyone back. He recalls that when he was little, his parents died in a landslide, and he was left completely alone, but the villagers took care of him. Yuna was always by his side. Everyone there was a good person, the kind who couldn't just ignore someone who was hurt. Every single one of them. Lo says he cannot forget those people, and reaffirms, I am going to bring them back. The man watches the scene in utter amazement, wondering to himself, what an absurd amount of prana is this kid radiating, since the very space around the boy is starting to distort. Prana is the mental energy of living beings, a power that anyone can possess, though few actually know it. However, extremely talented individuals manage to use this energy consciously. Normally, prana is colorless and invisible, but those who possess a massive amount of it can make it visible to the naked eye. Legends say that certain races possess a special kind of prana. The man questions whether Lo could be a survivor of Babel. He ponders that his priority should be protecting the boy, but realizes that with that kind of power, the youth would be able to escape from there on his own in a few years. Ultimately, the man concludes that without knowing all the circumstances behind this, there isn't much they can do. He throws a sword to Lo, telling him that if the boy wants to go to the island, he has to wield a sword. If he has potential, he can train him. The man also reveals his own prana, reddish and imposing, and commands the boy to attack him with the intent to kill, and Lo went all in. In fact, the youth's first strike was terrifying. He was just a beginner with a blade, but the sheer pressure of his attacks was pure. He was attacking with raw energy, with an incredible will, and his waves of prana were absolute madness. The man notes that this boy is a true monster. Lo's condensed prana became a beam of light so intense that it literally blinded the skies. Later on, the warrior explains that that thing is called the Island of the Gods. It normally floats over the immense sea and rarely appears in completely different places, wiping out people and even entire lands. The man was trying to stop it, but he arrived late once again. According to one theory, the humans caught in that light might be taken straight to the Island of the Gods. Lo then asks what happens if someone is touched by that light. The man responds that no one knows for sure, as it's just a theory. Even if the villagers are alive, who knows what is happening to them right now? To solve this, they have one direct path, the adventurer ranking. Lo needs to break into the top 10 of the list. Adventurers are responsible for exploring and investigating unknown lands. Out of all the rankings in the world, this one has the highest number of participants, and those at the very top are absolute monsters. If Lo can manage to rank among the top 10, he will be allowed to go to the Island of the Gods. This island occupies the #1 spot on the Dangerous Zones ranking, and almost no adventurer has ever returned from there alive. Even so, Lo remains deeply determined to set foot in that place. The knight says that from that moment on, he will train him for an entire year, but warns that he can only teach him the way of the sword. After a year, the young man can use this training as a foundation to climb the rankings. The man introduces himself as Adol, the #1 in the knight rankings and the strongest knight in all of humanity. And when Lo introduces himself, Adol warns that he won't be holding back under any circumstances. After all, the boy is the first person who ever managed to cut his chest. And indeed, the warrior still had an open wound right there. A hellish year began in Lo's life. He was knocked down at every single moment, and his hands and feet became covered in blisters. During training, his muscles tore and his bones were crushed by creatures, falls, impacts, and heavy blows. Blood dripped from every single pore of his body. Adol never spoke about the Island of the Gods again during their training, as if to say that Lo would have to figure out the rest on his own. And of course, the agreement was not to give up until then. The young man thought at every waking moment that the villagers were still alive. For now, all he could do was keep believing in that, while wondering why the village disappeared, what exactly the Island of the Gods is, and why it does what it does. To uncover the whole truth, he would reach the very top of the adventurer rankings. A year later, Adol asks if the young man is ready. Lo replies that he has been ready for a long time. He remembers Yuna, the request she had made for them to leave the village and set off together from there. He thinks thinks about how Yuna, the girl who dreamed so much about the outside world, was gone, and to think that he would be the first one to set out on that journey, he decides that he will carry Yuna's dream with him. Adol admits that Lo has grown quite a bit during this time, but the youth replies that he is still in his growth phase. Lo is no longer just a little boy from Tori village. He is now the disciple of the strongest knight in humanity. Later, in the kingdom of Volter, more specifically in the Traquist capital, at the evaluation department branch, an evaluator named Luke was waking up late. Luke explains to his superior that he woke up late because he spent the entire night analyzing documents and rankings. The woman replies that he needs to take better care of his health. Unlike her, who only works in the office, it is Luke who determines people's rankings. Evaluators are sent to every corner of the world to assess the abilities of rankers and update their rankings according to their performance. They must possess extensive knowledge and impartial judgment to evaluate someone's merit and standing. To practice the profession, they themselves must pass several grueling exams. It is one of the most demanding jobs in existence, entrusted only to those who are handpicked. Luke mentioned that he is indeed an evaluator, but stressed that he is still at a low level. He needs to put in a mountain of effort to climb the ranks of the evaluators themselves because he wants to accomplish so many things. However, his superior said that for an evaluator, the fastest way to move up in their career is to become the exclusive evaluator of a talented ranker. Luke replied that he hasn't found any ranker he truly likes yet, and the woman shot back, saying that he is simply way too picky. Luke explained that rankers nowadays are just boring, and that, in the old days, the competition was much more fierce. Now, almost everyone on the ladder has their position locked in, which completely takes the excitement out of the job. To him, the value of a ranking lies in constant updates, and that's exactly why it's called a ranking. His superior replied that he is a true ranking addict, and thought to herself, "This is, unfortunately, a serious case." Luke was waiting for a promising new star who could turn the world upside down. His superior replied that this star might very well be in that exact same room. The two walked into a hall packed with people waiting to be evaluated. Luke noticed that this was already the third time just this year that they were holding the registration exam for adventurers, and the place was always packed. His superior replied that normally the traffic is much quieter, and that maybe the place is full because the Azaban forest entered the dangerous zones ranking 2 months ago. But she pondered that, fortunately, there were some very promising people there. Owl Darkus is number 753 in the mercenary ranking, and the leader of the Red Wolf mercenary group. The group also includes Eddie Markman, number 402, whose family is very well known for archery because his father was once the top 2. Besides them, there are other members who seem very good, with rankers in commerce, knights, and sailors. Meanwhile, Luke was figuring out the skills of everyone present just by staring at them. He was truly remarkable at this, acting as an evaluator, which allowed him to know what someone did just by looking at the individual. Luke also commented that the adventurer ranking is special and useful, justifying why so many people have been trying to register lately, since registration is essential to find places like that forest. At that exact moment, another person rang the reception bell to register for the rankings. The veteran went to answer and explained that the rankings are a system managed by the evaluation department. Evaluators are sent all across the country to assess the achievements and skills of rankers. She explained that an update can be done anywhere there is an evaluator, but the initial registration can only be performed at an official agency. The young man at the reception, named Lo, replied that he wished to register for the adventurer ranking and that he would like to participate in the exam that was about to take place. He signed up and paid the 3,000 fee, receiving the number 53. When he walked past Luke, Luke asked his colleague if there really were people who didn't know what the evaluation department was. She replied that it had been a long time since she last had to explain that, and commented that, indeed, he was a pretty strange boy. Later, in the exam room, the superior announced the start of the registration exam for the adventurer ranking. She detailed that there would be 3 types of tests. First the written one, then the practical one, and the last one would be explained on the spot. The final grade would determine whether they passed or not, but even if someone messed up one part, a high score in the other subjects could make up for it. The written test began, and some people showed a lot of nervousness because the material was very broad and required knowledge of many things. When time ran out, Lo just stayed with his head down, deeply concentrated. Later, the superior and Luke were grading the exams by themselves. Since there were no other employees available, the two would have to grade every single test from that exam, facing the exhausting routine of public service. Luke got pretty hyped up while analyzing the test of that boy. Number 53, Lo. The youth had gotten absolutely everything wrong on the written evaluation, which made Luke complain about having to sit there grading a hillbilly's test. 2 hours later, everyone headed to the location where the practical test would take place, which would consist of a treasure hunt. The participants had to deliver the items listed on the form and check the point values on the table located to the right. They could aim for the most valuable items, however fighting among themselves was strictly forbidden. Whoever grabbed the item first kept it. The crowd was confident, as the candidates were good at collecting the medicinal herbs and some insects listed on the table. As soon as the test started, everyone took off running. Luke commented that they would finally get a break, and the superior asked how many candidates he thought would pass this time. He replied that maybe half, because you could tell by their movements that the crew was well prepared, but he admitted to his his superior that none of them had caught his eye. After a while, an adventurer handed in a piece of Rigo ore, which was worth 120 points. The woman registered the item and asked if he wasn't going to keep going, since there was still time left. The man replied no, because he had already achieved what was necessary to pass. She warned that if he got more points right now, he would obtain a better ranking when he registered. The adventurer replied that he didn't care much about that, since his real job was as a mercenary. The archer Eddie Markman came running right after, thinking he was the first to finish. He managed to secure a floche feather, which guaranteed 180 points. Proudly, the boy asked if the score wasn't incredibly high, mentioning that in his village, people used to eat the floche bird. The mercenary commented that the kid was acting way too full of himself over a simple feather, and the little guy questioned the comment. The mercenary explained that floche birds fly silently at 500 kilometers per hour, making them impossible to see with the naked eye, to which the youth responded that he had no idea the creature was so full of tricks. The evaluator noted that rankers possess immense pride, and Luke agreed that this was a positive trait. Suddenly Lo appeared, lugging the massive carcass of a huge fat bear. He explained to those present that he didn't know how to extract the red bear's gallbladder, which was why he decided to bring the creature's entire body. The evaluator accepted the delivery and registered the red bear's gallbladder, securing him 300 points. The surrounding crowd was utterly stunned, wondering if he had defeated the beast all on his own. Luke pointed out that the young man managed to recognize the red bear despite turning in that absolutely horrendous written exam. Lo replied that these animals appeared quite often near his village, so he knew them well. A witness who caught the fight reported that watching Lo battle was like seeing a literal monster. He simply drew his sword, and the creature died in a single second. An hour later, the group gathered at the underground training center. The evaluator asked the candidates if they knew what adventurers must always be wary of, subsequently explaining that it was beasts and humans themselves. Since an adventurer's mission is to explore uncharted lands and isolated regions, the main threats end up being bandits or pirates. For this reason, the final test would be a mock battle, where they would fight each other to have their skills evaluated, meaning winning or losing wouldn't determine whether they passed. A massive guy approached the mercenary Owl Darkus, calling him out for a fight, and mocking the fact that he had only acquired a tiny pebble in the previous test, sneering that he was nothing but a mercenary. The big guy charged immediately, breaking the exam rules. However, Owl Darkus drew his sword and knocked the guy out cold in the exact same drawing motion, using nothing but the weapon's hilt. The leader of the Red Wolves begged the evaluator for forgiveness, justifying that he simply couldn't ignore an insult like that. The evaluator replied that, considering the big guy's grades up to that point, he would have failed anyway, so she would pretend nothing happened. She found herself wondering who would face Owl Darkus in the test, speculating that it might just be Eddie Markman himself. Luke asked the senior evaluator if he could choose one of the battles, and she agreed. The subsequent fights went off without any major issues, until match number 8 took center stage in the tournament. Numbers 27 and 41 would fight at the same time against number 53. The mercenary Owl Darkus asked if the organizers had completely lost their minds, and Eddie Markman commented that it had been a long time since he was underestimated like that. The evaluator asked Luke if it was really alright to proceed with that combat format. He replied that it was, because if his eyes weren't deceiving him, that boy was a true monster. Luke was placing all his chips on Lo. Owl Darkus was the leader of the Red Wolf Mercenary Group, an organization that had made waves the previous year by eradicating the K-More Mafia, which occupied rank 62 among criminal organizations. Rumor had it that the young leader Owl Darkus had single-handedly defeated 7 executives, including the mafia boss himself. On the other side stood Eddie Markman, the young heir to a prestigious family of archers, trained by his own father who was once the rank 2 archer in the entire world. He had registered at just 5 years old, and there wasn't a single archer alive who didn't know this prodigy, blessed with the raw talent of his bloodline. And facing these two formidable warriors was Lo, a completely unknown young man. When the combat finally kicked off, Eddie Markman fired the first strike, but Lo easily dodged the onslaught and drew his sword, flawlessly blocking a heavy blow delivered by the mercenary Owl Darkus. The strikes were so fast that the people in the audience couldn't see a single thing. They could only hear the clashing ring of swords colliding. At the exact moment Owl was caught off guard, and Lo was about to land a clean hit, the young man had to cancel his attack because of Eddie and dodge his incoming arrows. In fact, he managed to slice the arrows right in half and deflected every single one of them using the blade of his sword. Owl commented that he must be one of the best in the night rankings, but the archer replied that he had never seen this guy before in his life. Lo took the opportunity to ask if the two of them were also ranked in other categories. Eddie replied that yes, he held rank 402 in the archer rankings, and Owl replied that he was at rank 753 in the mercenary rankings. Lo said he understood, adding that if he defeated both of them he would definitely reach triple digits in his own classification. Right after that, he concentrated his prana, leaving everyone around absolutely terrified. There was so much accumulated prana that you could see its color with the naked eye, a vivid, striking green that radiated sheer vitality and pure will. Eddie commented that the rankings didn't just evaluate professions. He explained that he was 402nd in archery, but in the sniper ranking, which measured raw precision, he occupied occupied rank 78, but before he could even fire his arrow, the archer was already sent slamming into the ground. Loa had closed the distance with such unbelievable agility that neither of them even noticed his movement. When Owl locked eyes with the swordsman, he found himself completely paralyzed with fear and decided to surrender. He justified it by saying he had to work later and couldn't afford to get knocked out like his companion. Lo agreed, saying it was fine, and sheathed his sword. The mercenary thought to himself that this kid was a true monster. The surrounding spectators began to murmur in awe, deeply impressed that he had beaten 2 triple-digit rankers all by himself. The evaluator announced in a loud voice that the winner was number 53. At that exact moment, Luke suddenly took off running. He went straight to his office, which was completely crammed with computers, radios, all kinds of electronic devices, maps, and papers. He immediately accessed the exclusive evaluator database and discovered that Lo Tuli was 17 years old and had absolutely no prior ranking history. Luke wondered how that was even possible, considering the young man's fantastic skills. To him, it only made sense if the boy had come from a highly remote area, since he wasn't a criminal and didn't belong to any cult. He thought it was as if the kid had hit the jackpot and kept questioning where he had been hiding this whole time. Luke rushed over to Lo with the intention of telling him that he would be his exclusive evaluator, but when he arrived, there were already several other evaluators swarming the young man, trying to do the exact same thing. He had arrived too late. Since Lo didn't know what that meant, he asked what an exclusive evaluator actually was. Luke stepped forward to explain the concept, stating that an exclusive evaluator is someone entirely dedicated to a single ranker, responsible for updating their ranking on a regular basis. He detailed that generally, to update one's position, a person has to wait for the evaluation department to send over an employee. However, with a dedicated professional, the update can be done anytime, anywhere. This role was highly valued because adventurers spent all their time traveling. They utilized a device called the Telegrand ranking, or rank cell, which constantly transmitted updated information. Luke stressed that if Lo wanted to climb the rankings quickly, hiring an exclusive evaluator was the absolute best path to take. Loe imposed only one condition to accept the proposal. He asked if there was anyone there who could take him all the way to the top 10 of the adventurer rankings. Upon hearing this, the professionals around him immediately lost heart and commented that while the young man was incredibly good, that was simply asking for too much. Lo felt disappointed by their reaction and walked out of the department. However, Luke came running after him and asked what his reason was for wanting to enter the top 10 so badly. The young man shot back that it was none of his business. Luke countered by saying that it actually was his business, because he would be his exclusive evaluator and would guide him all the way to the top 10. Loe argued that he didn't want to put any child in danger, but Luke replied that, before being a child, he was a professional evaluator, while also reminding him that Lo himself was also a child, since he was only 17 years old. The swordsman explained that, even if it weren't for that, he had no intention of hiring anyone, because he didn't want to involve others in his problems. That was when Luke revealed that he also had something he needed to do, a personal mission to fulfill, even if it cost him his very life. For that reason, he wanted to team up with Lo. The young man saw in that boy the exact same determination and will that he himself possessed. The little evaluator formally introduced himself as Luke Imelda, promising that he would guide him to become one of the best in the world. The young man also revealed his name, introducing himself as Lo Tuli, and the two of them signed a contract. After that, Luke took his new partner to a rented room so they could use the space as a temporary base. Lo commented that the little guy had good skills, and Luke replied that it was no big deal, though he admitted he hadn't expected to be put on a 1-week trial period. The young man explained that the measure was purely as a precaution. Luke guaranteed that he would show his full competence within that 1-week period, and that, in the end, the young man would end up begging him to stay. Lo replied that that would be great. The evaluator commented that the young man was incredible when fighting, but outside of combat, he seemed to be a bit spacey. The swordsman confessed that he used to hear that comment quite a lot. Shortly after, Luke noticed on his ranking phone that the official results were out. He informed his companion that he had placed at rank 2728 in the adventurer rankings. Lo confessed that he honestly thought he would be somewhere in the triple digits after defeating those two strong opponents. Luke explained that the adventurer ranking held far more people than the other rankings, making the competition vastly greater. He added that no matter how strong someone is, the system imposes an initial limit on the registration position. Furthermore, he pointed out that there were other secondary rankings. In sword speed, for example, Lo had placed at rank 58. He mentioned that those other two opponents also held rankings in different categories. Owl occupied rank 83 in the reliable boss category, while Eddie, for some curious reason, was at rank 19 in mushroom cultivation. Luke mentioned that he would like his partner to register in other rankings as well, but Lo replied that he wasn't looking for more work. The evaluator confessed that he had already figured as much. After all, even though they hadn't known each other for long, he was already starting to get a feel for the guy. He concluded that the young man simply wanted to break into the top 10 as quickly as possible, so he could head towards the Island of the Gods. Loe wanted to know how one goes about climbing up there. Luke answered that this access was the sole special privilege granted to those who entered the top 10, and asked if the young man would tell him the reason behind this whole quest after the trial period ended. Loe promised he would, as long as the little guy managed to earn his trust. He added that if the evaluator shared his own story too, it would be fair for both sides. Luke fully agreed, saying that being fair was very important. He pondered that his own reasons were difficult to explain to someone who had just registered, as he was after the dark side of the rankings, but he promised to explain that in full detail later. Next, Luke asked where all that absurd power of the young man came from, especially his swordsmanship technique, since you couldn't just learn something of that level overnight. Lo revealed that he had become the disciple of a knight named Adil. Surprised, Luke asked if he meant the Adil, the #1 knight, the top one, and the strongest warrior in all of humanity. Lo confirmed that yes, that was exactly who he was talking about, even though he had only spent a single year training under him. Even so, Luke emphasized that this was absolutely bombshell news. Adil is famous for never ever taking on any disciples. Plenty of people begged, plenty of people offered riches and insane amounts of money, but he didn't accept anyone. And to think Lo inherited that, other knights would faint if they found out. Lo asked if the guy is really all that. Luke answered that yes, he is the top one. But Lo said he actually defeated him with the sword once. Luke said no, that's impossible. She said this guy is just a space cadet who drops these things like it's nothing. And she also searched for Lo Tuli, and absolutely nothing appeared in the database. She asked if his last name is a disguise. During one of their training days, Adil asked for Lo's last name, but he didn't know exactly what that was, due to the cultural difference. Adil explained that if he wanted to go to the island of the gods by the shortest path, from now on, he would have to call himself Lo Tuli. The risk is high, but if he does well, certain clues will naturally come his way. He replied in the present that no, it is not a disguise. Tuli is the name of his beloved family. And then Luke said that she could finally take off her hat. Her job was done. She then revealed her massive amount of long hair. Lo asked if she is a woman. Luke asked if he only noticed just now. He begged for forgiveness, but Luke said that an apology wasn't going to cut it. Yep, so she was a woman all along. Look at that. The story did that on purpose, just to make everyone think she was a guy. Look at those sly dogs. And how about the narrator? What happens to the narrator? Take that, you loser. Take that, you loser. A whipping from Papa, a whipping right across the back. The next morning, Luke was casually reading the newspaper while sipping some coffee. Lo actually woke up quite early too, but then, Luke put on her hat, stating that it was going to be a long journey. However, today would be the very first step. They were going to map out a strategy to break into the top 10 of the adventurer rankings. Later, at a cozy little cafe, Luke explained that in order to climb the ranks, one needs achievements as an adventurer. Territory development or exploration are just the bare basics, things you can do on your own. For now, she highly recommended accepting quests. There are plenty of people out there who need the labor of adventurers for gathering materials, conducting investigations, and things of that nature. And since these are official quests, you get to earn a reward. It is absolutely ideal for beginners just like him. You can accept quests through the evaluation department, or depending on the country, through a guild. But if Luke is around, everything can be done in the blink of an eye, using her rank cell. Lower replied that the rank cell is incredibly practical. Luke said that's exactly right, and if she becomes his exclusive evaluator, he can use it as much as he wants. However, Lo reminded her that she still has to pass the trial period, and she won't get off that easily. He then asked if there was any quest that could significantly boost his ranking. She answered that all he had to do was take on the most difficult ones. Quests from the evaluation department usually indicate exactly how much they will influence your ranking. The first one on the list that Lo picked was a rank 7 danger zone. The objective was to recover the hidden treasure inside the sunken temple of Lokiana. She instantly shot back that it was impossible. At his current level, he didn't stand a ghost of a chance. He replied that he wouldn't know until he tried. No. Luke told him to trust the eyes of an evaluator, because this quest was far too difficult for him, and he would literally die. He replied that even so, he still wanted to try. The island of the gods is the #1 most dangerous place, and that is exactly where he wants to go. Luke thought to herself that this kid is just so incredibly stubborn. Just then, a man who had been overhearing the entire conversation asked if they were having some trouble. This was Laud, an acquaintance of Luke's. Laud Broward, a fiercely powerful adventurer, holding the 11th spot in the adventurer rankings. Loa immediately realized that if this guy is in 11th place, he is one of those monsters, an elite ranker. Luke smirked and said that this was the perfect timing, telling Laud to go ahead and hit this guy with everything he's got. Even Lo was caught completely off guard by that one. Later, they moved to an enclosed training area, and Laud apologized for making them wait. He didn't think they would actually challenge him to a duel, so he had to borrow a weapon. This spear felt a little too light, but it would do the trick. When Laud introduced himself, Lo noticed that he was a very well-mannered and cordial guy, but Lo could speak freely. Luke had updated Laud's rank the other day, which is how they knew each other. She is truly amazing. Besides having an immense amount of knowledge, she also possesses the sheer conviction required to create highly precise rankings. That kind of passion is extremely rare. Laud even mentioned that it was easy to see just how much she truly cares about Lo. However, what Lo was actually worried about was the intense aura this man was emanating. Laud was clearly powerful. Just thinking about moving forward made Lo visualize himself being instantly impaled by that spear. But Luke chimed in, saying that this was a golden opportunity opportunity, and that he needed to understand just how massive the world truly is, at least once. Indeed, Lo thought to himself that the world is an enormous place, vividly remembering what had happened to his village out of nowhere. He replied, "I already know that, Luke." And so, the combat between the rank 2728 adventurer and the number 11 adventurer began. In a mere fraction of a second, their weapons clashed violently. Lod's strike was incredibly powerful, unleashing a sharp gust of wind, yet Lo managed to dodge it, making Lod think to himself that the kid was actually pretty good. Lo channeled all of his prana into his sword and released it all in a single, devastating blow. He was even coating his hands and feet to maximize his agility. Loud instantly noticed that his swordsmanship was strikingly similar to that of the Sword Saint. Loud thought to himself that there was no way that man could have passed down his secret technique, which is taught to only one person per generation, to a mere child. Loud noticed that Loud was overthinking things, and attempted to ambush him from behind with a feint, but it didn't quite work. Loud was completely unfazed. They continued to trade powerful blows. Loud was clearly more skilled, but he inwardly admitted that Lao's prana was far greater, and its radiance was absolutely blinding. Lod asked what the boy's race was, but Lo knew absolutely nothing about that. He simply replied that playing dumb wasn't going to work, because that brilliant glow of prana wasn't something you could just acquire over time. Well, whatever. If the kid didn't want to talk, he would just have to beat the answers out of him. Then, Lod asked if he could use enchantments. The boy couldn't. Lo couldn't quite identify what it was, but Lod began to summon his own enchantment. He drove his spear deep into the ground and, using nothing but his bare hands, recited an incantation that concentrated his prana into a brilliant glow. A golden light completely took over the arena as he chanted the enchantment of the Wind Tribe. He warned the boy to use his own enchantment as well, otherwise he was going to die right then and there. Naturally, Lo was utterly shocked when multiple golden spears were guided toward him like homing missiles. The boy desperately tried to block them, but he ended up getting cut and scratched all over his body. Lo declared that it wouldn't work, because an ordinary sword simply cannot block this enchantment. The rain of golden spears swerved right back toward the boy. He narrowly dodged them, but he was still getting heavily injured. At that moment, a memory of Adol flashed through his mind, remembering him saying that Lod was a bit reckless with his prana control, but once he got used to it, he would be able to use techniques bit by bit. The boy didn't know what techniques were back then, but Adol had explained it to him. First, he taught him the most fundamental technique, the shimmering blade. Lo mirrored the exact same stance and unleashed a massive gale, an extremely high-speed slash that Loud barely managed to block with his spear. Lo seized the opening to close the distance, but he was still forced to retreat due to the relentless rain of golden spears. Loud thought to himself that he had executed a slash at such a high velocity it was practically invisible to the naked eye, but the boy still wasn't fast enough to fully block his counter. Loud hurled his spear, which, even when blocked by Lo's sword, dragged the boy all the way to the other side of the arena and knocked him flat on his back. Right as the rain of golden spears came crashing down upon Lo, Loud warned him never to underestimate the adventurer rankings. The resulting explosion was absolutely gargantuan, though Loud purposefully missed the kid to avoid killing him. Of course, the undisputed winner was Loud Broward, number 11 in the adventurer rankings. He walked right past Luke, asking if that had been enough. She replied that it was. Loud figured that now she finally understood the reality, right? But she had held on to her belief until the very end, genuinely believing that the boy could win. She replied that she honestly thought there was a slim possibility, at the very least. Laud then asked if it was because the boy is a disciple of Adol. He had recognized it the moment he saw those movements. That was undeniably the technique of the Sword Saint. The style of the Sword Saint is passed down to a single successor, representing the most powerful swordsmanship in existence, inherited exclusively by elite knights for generations. And yet, a random little adventurer boy had somehow inherited it. From the perspective of a knight ranker, it's as if he had stolen something sacred. Luke replied that one could certainly look at it from that perspective. For that exact reason, it would be best to prevent the boy from crossing paths with other knights from here on out. Laud agreed, noting that it would indeed be wise, since in the worst case scenario, the kid could end up dead. If he were to operate as a knight ranker, perhaps everything could be resolved without issue, but Luke concluded that such a thing was almost entirely impossible. The reason she had believed in the boy, besides the Sword Saint style, was because he said he had landed a hit on Adol. Laud responded that it was impossible, that at the boy's current level, there was simply no way. Luke spoke up and said that when she first heard it, she thought it was a lie too, but the boy just wasn't the type to lie. Laud thought to himself that the Sword Saint style was already shocking enough, but what about that prana glow then? The boy probably had incredible enchantments. If he had used them, Laud could have absolutely lost. The boy just hadn't discovered this power yet. Later, the boy was remembering his mother and the singing she would always do. He remembered that annoying old hag walking in and telling his mother not to sing that fucking song, and his mother would just beg for forgiveness for singing it then. When the boy opened his eyes, he was in the infirmary, completely wrecked, inside an evaluation department. Luke explained that he had been sleeping the entire day. He passed out, just as if someone had flipped a little switch off. The doctor mentioned it looked like accumulated mental fatigue. They didn't know exactly what was happening to him, but he must have been pushing himself too fast. The boy remembered the combat chat he had with Lod and replied that she was right. But the evaluator had something very important to tell him. She asked if he knew what enchantments were. Of course, he replied that he knew absolutely nothing. So she explained that enchantments are a special way of using prana that only certain races can pull off, and that many of those at the top of the rankings can use them. Lighted is from the Broward tribe, which is why he can use it. They are a combat-oriented race, specialized in hunting, and they live in the southern swamps. Since the techniques are passed down orally in the form of poems among the tribes, they are called enchantments, or incantations. There is also a genetic component, so it is generally difficult to learn after becoming an adult. The boy remembered the song his mother used to sing all the time. Luke mentioned that Loud said the boy himself might know some enchantments, and asked if he had any idea. He replied that he did, remembering his mother once again. Luke said that this was great, and that it would make his path a whole lot easier, since enchantments are quite the trump card for a ranker. Because of this, she found the perfect mission for him, an investigation mission in the Azaban forest. It's an ecological survey inside a forest that recently entered the dangerous zone rankings, sitting at number 48. Loa then asked if it was just about investigating animals and things like that. Luke replied that it was supposed to be just that, but actually, lately some people have been disappearing in the forest. Adventurers who took on this mission vanished without leaving a single trace. In the beginning, it was those in the 4-digit tier, but recently, a rank 800 adventurer disappeared there. She explained that if Lo could also uncover the reason behind the disappearings, he would fulfill more than one mission and could jump up about 200 positions. Of course, the risk would be proportional to that. Lo said he would take the mission for sure. He took the chance to ask if she had only recommended him because she thought he could handle the job, and Luke replied that of course she did, immediately registering him for the mission right after. She warned him right away that inside the Azaban forest, there are animals whose hunting is strictly forbidden, as well as restricted areas. With her by his side, everything should be fine, but he would also need to be extremely careful. If he didn't follow the rules, his rank would drop. No matter how skilled he was, if he went around destroying the ecosystem or kept failing missions, his reputation would go straight down the drain. Luke accepted the mission, saying that this was the beginning of a new chapter, the first step to skyrocket in the adventurer rankings, and that they were going to give it their best. Lo replied that they definitely would. Meanwhile, inside the forest, an adventurer was being killed by another ranker. The killer said that the evaluation department didn't even care about a trash ranker like that one. They were carrying a forest creature called a Uniceros inside a cage, completely illegally. The person who captured the little animal said that just with that beast's horn, he would be able to climb into the 3-digit rank. That was when Rosso Cruel explained that strength alone doesn't make anyone's rank go up. His very existence was justified because of those who suffered this type of injustice. After all, he was the rank 7 smuggler. A massive doubt came up about how someone can even have a rank while being a smuggler. First of all, shouldn't he be arrested? Did the person who evaluated him happen to become an accomplice to his crimes? There were too many questions left unanswered. The other adventurer replied that he would never leave a hunting ground as good as that one, because he intended to reach the top 100. This man was Dalkin, currently number 672 in the adventurer rankings. A while later, Lo's entry into the forest was permitted, even though he was ranked 27-28. That put a little doubt in his mind. He asked Luke how many people existed in the adventurer rankings in total. She answered that there were around 30,000, but only 20,000 of them were actually active. She commented that Lo's prana definitely didn't match his current rank at all. The adventurer rank is usually quite different from other types of ranks. For example, if someone holds a 4-digit spot in the adventurer rank, they usually have a 3-digit spot in another rank. And the higher someone's adventurer rank is, the higher their other ranks tend to be as well, because just by being an adventurer, a person tends to perform many other tasks. But Lo only replied that he still needed to get much stronger. Then Luke said they should start the adventure right away. Officially, the two were inside the Azaban forest, number 48 in the dangerous zone rankings. Just by stepping foot and entering that place, Lo felt something very strange. She explained that only an experienced adventurer would be able to feel the danger of that place just by looking at it, while an ordinary person would never notice a thing. It is for this exact reason that the dangerous zone rankings exist. The forest was included in this rank because, 2 months ago, a massive outbreak was discovered of, she didn't even need to finish her sentence. Several demonic beasts charged at Lo with everything they had. Luke had to be protected at all costs, since she was the evaluator on duty. But honestly, that wasn't even a real challenge. Lo, drawing his blade and tapping into the Sword Saint technique, unleashed the mighty gale, wiping out all the enemies in the blink of an eye. Only a handful of them remained standing, and they were too terrified to take another step forward. Lo explained to her that he had learned a few techniques from Adol, but he hadn't managed to pull all of them off just yet. He thought that maybe, just maybe, now was the perfect time to put a second technique to the test. The demonic beast that stepped up next was the strongest and easily the bravest creature in the area, the Bloody Orc, sitting at rank 126 on the monster danger scale. Lo muttered to himself that there was only one way to find out if he could pull off the technique or not. He concentrated all of his bright green prana, the very manifestation of vitality, and unleashed the Half Lotus, an X-shaped slash. However, when the strike landed squarely on the orc's stomach, it did absolutely nothing. The orc immediately began chasing them down, down, forcing Lo to realize he had completely failed. Luke asked in absolute desperation what the hell he was doing, and he replied that he genuinely thought it would work. Their escape route was suddenly cut off by a massive cliff. Without a second thought, Lo simply went for it. He grabbed Luke tightly and leaped right off the cliff. Mid-fall, he used the power of the wind to slow down their momentum, pushed off a tree branch to cushion the drop, and landed on the ground completely fine. Luke's soul practically left her body from sheer terror. Loe just let out a sigh of relief, murmuring, She got absolutely furious at that reaction, snapping at him that he needed to give a warning before pulling off that kind of crazy stunt. He apologized for the scare, but explained that Adol had trained him exactly that way, so it had basically just become second nature to him. After all that running and chaotic endeavor, the two of them reached a clearing that seemed to be very close to their final objective. This was exactly the area they were required to investigate. Stepping deeper into the woods, Luke explained that she had been investigating this forest ever since it was officially placed on the dangerous zone rankings. She had already explored 80% of the entire territory, with only 20% left to go, and that remaining 20% happened to be the monster's nesting ground. Walking through the habitat, Lo began to take a close look at the surrounding plants and wildlife. He mentioned that it was the first time in his life he had ever seen creatures and vegetation like that. In that moment, he finally understood the true meaning of being an adventurer, and his mind immediately flashed to Yuna. This was exactly the kind of life she had always dreamed of living. Suddenly, a creature approached silently through the bushes. Lo almost drew his sword to strike, but Luke stopped him, saying it was just an injured creature. It turned out to be that exact one-horned beast, the number 4 creature on the rare species ranking, which was nearly extinct, a Unirosaurus. Using her own supplies, Luke managed to patch up and treat the animal's wound. Lo asked if she actually knew how to handle that sort of thing, and she replied that rankers are always getting hurt on the job, so she ended up learning basic first aid. She even reminded him that she was the one who took care of him after Lode beat him up in the arena. She suggested that they should set up and keep their base right there for the day, since the staff from the evaluation department couldn't just abandon a wounded creature like that. Lo replied that it was totally fine by him. Luke made sure to clarify that this officially counted as ecological research, telling him not to get the wrong idea, as she wasn't choosing the animal over him. He calmly replied that he knew that. Later that night, at the makeshift camp, the creature and Luke were already fast asleep. However, Lo decided to head out into the middle of the dark forest to practice the half-lotus technique. He tried to execute the movement over and over with his wind slashes, but they felt completely out of sync and misaligned. Once again, he failed to land the strike. He started to think that he hadn't managed to do absolutely anything related to enchantments up to this point, and that he hadn't been able to defeat Loud in their previous fight either. He knew that if he kept going like this, he would never make it to the Island of the Gods. He remembered that specific enchantment from his mother and focused deeply for the rest of the night. He ended up waking up the next morning to Luke's loud scream, as she shouted in a panic that the little animal had suddenly started thrashing around. The Unirosaurus was growling fiercely right at them. Loa remarked that it looked like the cub was feeling better. Luke agreed, noting that this species has a remarkably fast recovery rate. However, she found it strange because the animal was still a cub, so normally a person should be able to handle them easily. But given this aggressive behavior, it was highly likely that someone had mistreated it. She noticed a crack on the animal's horn and mentioned that it might have been attacked by an illegal poacher. A Unirosaurus's horn can be used to create a miraculous medicine, which is why they were relentlessly captured. That was how they ended up on the endangered species list. Even with the hunting ban, the poaching continued, and they still fetch an incredibly high price on the black market. The Unirosaurus charged with its horn, but Lo blocked the attack using his sword's scabbard, and just by staring into the adventurer's eyes, the creature turned and bolted. Lo realized he had scared it, and asked if they were going to go after it. Luke replied that she was. Absolutely. Besides, there were no official records of any Unirosaurus living in the Azaban forest, so tracking it down was part of their ecological research. Lo had already put on his leather armor and darted out ahead, but Luke yelled for him to be careful, warning that there might be a poacher hiding somewhere around. Lo asked what he should do if he ran into one of them, and if defeating them would raise their ranking. She replied that it depended on the poacher's ranking, but yes, it would. Hearing that, Lo charged forward like a bullet, declaring that he would take down every single one he found along the way. The Unirosaurus was incredibly fast, and Lo had already lost sight of it. Mid-stride, however, the young man had to dodge an incoming arrow. It was an ambush. The person who attacked him said they were in a bad mood and tried to kill him right then and there, but Lo blocked the strike with his green prana. It was at that moment that the mercenary realized who he was, and the two recognized each other. It was Owl and Eddie who were hunting together. The text explains what happened the day after the adventurer ranking registration exam. Owl had asked for a mission, and Eddie showed up at that exact moment. They didn't really like each other, but they had one thing in common, talking about the kid who had defeated both of them. Eddie hadn't found out anything conclusive. Owl replied that he hadn't managed to get any solid information either. It was hard to believe, but it seemed like the kid had never even held a rank up until that point. Eddie responded that, even though it might not look like it, he was considered a prodigy in the archer ranking, but confessed that that guy, Luhi, had completely shattered his pride. Owl's pride had also taken a serious hit. When he returned to the Red Wolf mercenary base, they asked him how the exam went, and he replied that he managed to get registered. A female mercenary asked if he had given the other candidates a hard time, and he said no, but the crew kept pressing, saying that of course he must have given them trouble. Everyone kept going on and on about how Owl was amazing and things like that, but that only made him incredibly angry, leaving his pride deeply wounded. He said that the guy didn't even look at him, treating him as if he were nothing more than a stepping stone. Because of that, he told everyone that starting the very next day, they would triple their training. The female mercenary mentioned that since they had registered in the adventurer rankings, they could start taking on new missions. He replied no, because the world was much bigger than they imagined. He also warned that he was going to get back to real, serious training. He told Eddie that his pride had been wounded too. He hadn't planned on focusing on the adventurer rankings, but he couldn't just leave things like this. Eddie's rank was 6,725, Owl's was 6,301, and Low Tuli's was 2728. They noted that the gap between them wasn't actually that massive. Apparently, they shared the exact same goal, which is why they had taken on the same mission. Except, right in the middle of it, they crossed paths with Low himself. An extremely loud sound echoed from deep within the forest. Low told them they could talk later, and started running again, but Eddie kept pace with him, asking if he wanted to protect that beast, and if that was really all there was to it. Low replied yes, while secretly thinking to himself that the kid was running remarkably fast. Eddie called out that when moving through a forest, you have to utilize the uneven terrain. As he did exactly that, he shot forward even faster, but Low still managed to keep up with him. Deep inside a clearing, they came across a massive, disgusting creature that looked like a terrestrial lanternfish with several tentacles. It had completely trapped the Oneroceros. Low couldn't get any closer, because a long-range slash might hit the very creature he wanted to protect. So Low asked if Eddie could create an opening. Owl shouted to aim for the monster's eyes, and Low kept sprinting forward. When they followed those commands, everything worked out perfectly. The creature was blinded by the arrows, allowing Low to close the distance and sever half of the creature's tentacles all at once with his wind sword. Low rushed down to grab the Oneroceros quickly and get out of there. Owl's next strike sliced through a tree, which fell right on top of the monster, finally defeating it. Eddie remarked that the commands he gave were pretty good. Owl replied that he was used to commanding subordinates, which immediately prompted Eddie to ask who exactly he was calling a subordinate. Low, analyzing the situation and the way they had defeated the creature, remembered those people saying that having incredible swordsmanship alone isn't enough to reach the top 10. He realized then that his swordsmanship by itself wouldn't cut it. To raise his adventurer rank, he needed to learn things beyond just the sword. Luke arrived quite late, offering her apologies, but she quickly analyzed the bizarre situation. The Oneroceros was still acting a bit cornered around the adventurers. When Low explained the situation, saying everything was just a misunderstanding among them, Luke replied that she was glad he hadn't just gone around attacking like a maniac, and had resolved everything through communication instead. Right after that, she mentioned she ought to demote those two in the rankings, which left Owl and Eddie completely shocked, but Luke quickly laughed it off, saying she was just kidding. However, she warned them that next time she really would demote them if they didn't hold themselves back, telling them to stay sharp. Owl asked if this girl was his exclusive evaluator, and Low replied yes, explaining that it's easier to climb the rankings that way. Owl countered that this also meant being watched 24 hours a day, and that she might just assign him terrible jobs, like cleaning duties. Eddie chimed in, saying Low was just being used for the girl's own interests, and asked if he even knew why evaluators wanted an exclusive ranker. He explained that it's the only way for them to get promoted, since evaluators move up in rank whenever their exclusive rankers update their own positions. In other words, exclusive rankers are basically just free rides to hitch a lift on. He told Low to open his eyes, warning him that the girl was using him as a stepping stone. Loa recalled her deep conviction and thought to himself that she really didn't seem like the type of person who would do something like that. At that moment, the Oneroceros approached Luke in a very affectionate way, and Low commented that it looked like they had become friends. She replied that this creature had absolutely no sense of personal space. Watching the scene unfold, Eddie and Owl got highly irritated, muttering that it was a very ungrateful wolf. Luke mentioned that the animal only acted so cornered because of Low, since he carries a very terrifying aura, but she also admitted that something was bothering her. This magical beast was a forest angler. Their natural habitat is supposed to be cold regions. It made no sense for it to be here. She stated they were going to officially register the existence of this beast. Then, she turned to the other two and asked what mission they had come for. Owl replied they were doing something similar to reconnaissance. Eddie answered that they had taken a mission from the evaluation department. Luke found it a bit strange, wondering why there would be missions for mercenaries and archers in this forest, until she finally realized it was their rivalry with Low that had driven them to accept this specific mission. And Luke brought some genuinely great news for Low. His sword speed ranking had just updated. The technique he used caused him to jump all the way from 58th place up to 26th. She explained that it's a technique incredibly difficult to track with the naked eye, but it was pure instinct on her part. An evaluator's instinct. Low was a bit shocked, but he asked if she was always this amazing. She smirked and asked if he was only realizing that just now. When Luke showed off her sky rank alongside his own rank, Eddie muttered that it was honestly frustrating to watch. But Low looked at all of them, declaring there was something they needed to know. He confessed that he wasn't wasn't good at absolutely anything other than the sword. When he explained his situation, everyone finally understood that he had done nothing but train in swordsmanship his entire life. In reality, Eddie had saved him a lot back there. It was thanks to Eddie that he managed to hone his speed even further, and Owl's leadership instincts had allowed him to strike in the exact right way. Owl replied that as the leader of a mercenary group, he has to devise plans so he doesn't lose his men for nothing. Formations and information are absolutely vital in an attack. Knowing the positioning of each person and who is going to deliver the final blow. Owl then asked if he was truly interested in that, considering his swordsmanship was already more than good enough. Lo replied no, insisting that he absolutely loves this kind of advice. He then added that Eddie could give him some pointers on how to move properly through the forest. And Luke thought to herself that this was exactly what she wanted. Lo is evolving well now. However, she couldn't help but worry about the whole situation. It was deeply concerning. Illegal poachers, an unidentified demonic beast, and a Uniroceros, a creature on the brink of extinction, all appearing at the exact same time in the Azaban forest. Something is definitely wrong. Meanwhile, using his unique ability, Dalkin managed to detect all of the adventurers. He muttered that he had been looking for the beast that vanished, but ended up stumbling across these little punks instead. Rosso replied that this was actually great news. Since they killed the creature, its organs must still be fresh, meaning they could sell them for an absolute fortune. Dalkin countered that he was going to have to capture these guys either way. When you step into a beast's territory, you should already expect to be hunted by it. In the meantime, Eddie was busy explaining how to utilize the 5 senses within the forest. To effectively apply sight, hearing, and even smell and taste during combat, one needs the right kind of training. The forest is absolutely perfect for this sort of practice. The scent of plants and wildlife is incredibly potent there. However, even Owl admitted that he wasn't really following along. Eddie scoffed, saying that for a mercenary, it must be hard to get used to the smell of anything that isn't blood. He boasted that he could accurately sense exactly how many animals were surrounding them at that very moment. He was keeping his internal plan flow low. So to speak, it was a fluid talent. He instructed Lo that he had to focus his perception directly on the specific area he wanted to sharpen. Only then would he be able to pick up on the signals. Loe once again concentrated his absurdly powerful prana. He attempted to sharpen his 5 senses using the flow of his energy. He honed his senses so intensely that he actually managed to sense Dalkin, who detected him at the exact same moment. Loe immediately drew his sword, warning the group that someone was approaching. But before he could do anything else, he took a devastating punch to the face from Dalkin, who flew in like a rocket. The impact sent Loe flying through several trees, crashing deep into the forest. Dalkin asked aloud who the hell was carelessly scattering prana all over the place, remarking that it was downright disgusting. Thanks to that sloppy energy, he had been able to track them down effortlessly. Eddie and Owl instantly armed themselves against him. Luke stood back, observing the situation, but called out for them not to fight. She identified the man as Dalkin Iris, sitting at rank 672 on the adventurer leaderboard. Eddie muttered that since this guy possessed a 3-digit rank, he was undoubtedly far stronger than any of them. Dalkin smirked, noting that they apparently knew exactly who he was. Luke replied that of course they did, as he was quite famous. He had been right on the verge of breaking into the double digits, but he was stupid enough to commit a crime. Just then, Rosso came running up, panting that Dalkin was way too fast. He noticed an evaluator was present and wondered aloud who she was, but Luke didn't skip a beat, calling him out as Rosso Cruel, a notorious black market merchant holding rank 76. He smirked and complimented her on being well informed, asking if she also knew his crime ranking. The crime ranking is a criminal hierarchy that reflects the sheer severity of a criminal's actions. Notable examples within this system include the assassin ranking and the thief ranking. The crime ranking is considered one of the unofficial leaderboards. In this world, there are rankings created entirely by the users themselves, not just by official institutions. High-quality rankings are sometimes even purchased by official authorities, provided they do not violate basic ethics. Once acquired, these rankings are constantly updated with the enthusiastic support of dedicated tracking communities. Dalkin then stated that he had been looking for it, the Uniroceros, but Luke stepped right in front of him, demanding to know why someone of his stature was hanging around with scumbags like that. He replied that it was for the money, obviously. She countered that with his incredible power, he could easily make good money honestly, but he told her not to get ahead of herself. He wasn't just after money. There were 2 distinct reasons he had allied himself with Rosso: to sell his goods to him and to buy specific products from him. Dalkin then mockingly asked the evaluator if she was aware that there are certain rankings you can simply buy if you want them badly enough. Furious, she asked how he dared to say something so insulting right in front of an official evaluator. Owl immediately tried to press his blade against Dalkin's neck, but Dalkin casually blocked the sharp edge with his bare hand. Meanwhile, Eddie was already aiming an arrow directly at his head, explaining that his and Owl's mission was specifically to patrol this forest. They couldn't just leave a dangerous threat like him running loose out here. But Dalkin simply replied that this was getting annoying, and that he would clean up this mess the traditional way. The moment he unleashed his prana, he completely shattered the mercenary's sword. Owl could feel it in his bones. The very next punch was going to kill him, but out of nowhere, Lo rushed back into the fray and blocked the lethal blow using his own sword, combining the power of the wind with his prana. Their massive energies collided violently, throwing both fighters backward from the impact. Loe asked if this guy was an illegal poacher, and Luke confirmed without a doubt that he was. With no more questions left to ask, Loe unleashed the Island Hurricane, a pressurized blast of wind, but Dalkin blocked it head-on. He asked in surprise if the kid was actually utilizing prana. Loe noticed that his attack hadn't even scratched the man, which instantly triggered a memory of a conversation he had with Adol while climbing a mountain. Adol had warned him to be extremely careful whenever he encountered someone who knows how to wield prana. Loe himself was a complete anomaly. Normally, a person has to become an absolute master of a specific craft to awaken their prana. Whether it's the sword, firearms, or anything else, a person only awakens this hidden power through profound, exhausting study. That is what prana truly is. In other words, if someone possesses an active awareness of prana, in the blink of an eye, Adol had said this before rocketing up to the very peak of the mountain. He shouted back down that if a person has prana, they are highly likely a master of something. Loe remembered those words clearly. Luke then yelled out an explanation of his stats, revealing that Dalkin holds rank 12 in boxing. He is also rank 48 on the beast taming leaderboard, and rank 7 in weightlifting. His physical strength is genuinely world-class. Dalkin growled that having his profile leaked like that was a massive pain in the ass, declaring that he would have to crush her first. With just one hand, he violently ripped a tree right out of the dirt and hurled it straight at Luke. Thankfully, Loe managed to slice the massive log clean in half with his sword, though the effort left him visibly exhausted since it was incredibly difficult to pull off. Rosso commented that Loe possessed a very bizarre type of prana. He turned to Dalkin, instructing him to capture this kid as well, confident that he would fetch a hefty price on the market. Dalkin replied that he would do as he wished, promising to take the boy along if he managed to survive the encounter. But Owl shouted for him not to forget about them, as Eddie unleashed a relentless rain of arrows. Dalkin didn't even flinch. The arrows were effortlessly blocked by his arms, unable to pierce his tough skin. Dalkin scoffed that they weren't even worth remembering. The adventurer's next move was throwing a dual smoke bomb. Dalkin retaliated by violently smashing the ground, creating a shockwave that completely dissipated the smoke. However, his opponents had already used that brief distraction to turn around and flee. Rosso remarked that the situation had actually gotten a bit dangerous. The mercenary was sprinting away while carrying Luke, complimenting Eddie on doing an amazing job reading his intentions. Eddie replied that there was no way they could take that monster down with brute force, so he figured escaping was their best play. Meanwhile, Loe was running as fast as he could while carrying the poor Unirosaurus in his arms. He thought to himself that Dalkin was an incredibly powerful opponent, but since he was only sitting in the 600s rank, it meant he himself needed to become significantly stronger. Lost in thought, Loe accidentally squeezed the Unirosaurus's body a bit too hard, causing the startled creature to scramble right out of his arms and bolt. Loe quickly called out to the animal, apologizing for the rough grip. Luke said this clearing should be safe for now, and informed Loe that there's still more work to be done, mentioning that he needs to capture Rosso Cruel. Naturally, Loe asked what exactly this was all about. She replied that it was for her own personal goal. Owl approached them, saying he had no clue what they were talking about, but that they should probably figure out their next move. She agreed, apologizing to Loe and admitting she had rushed into things and shouldn't have asked that of him. Owl then chimed in, saying that as he mentioned before, their mission is to patrol the Azaban forest, so they would keep monitoring those two. Luke, speaking as an official agent, decided to drop a reality check and warned them that the two of them didn't stand a ghost of a chance against Dalkin. Owl replied that he was well aware of that, which is exactly why they were only going to observe. As soon as they exposed Dalkin's crimes, they would report everything to the department. But he added that it wasn't actually that dangerous, since he and this little guy here, Eddie, were ranked around the 6000s among adventurers. He then asked what would happen if they actually managed to defeat the guy. She chuckled, calling them quite the characters, and explained that with a high score in stealth and tracking, and considering this forest is ranked 48 on the danger scale, depending on how reliable the information is, they could easily jump up about 1,000 ranks. Hearing this, the two only got more pumped up. However, Luke warned them not to do anything reckless. Owl promised he wouldn't do anything foolish. As for Loe, he said he wanted to take the Unirosuro to a safe place. Owl agreed, noting it would be tough to fight with the creature around. Eddie pointed out that Dalkin was exactly who was tracking it, so keeping it here would only increase the risk. Loe gently replied that it wasn't about that. He just didn't want this innocent creature caught in the crossfire. The mercenary suggested it would be best to split up for now, and once the animal was safe, they would all meet back up under that tall tree. Loe asked what for, but the two explained they would need mutual assistance. Eddie then offered to quickly teach Loe how to navigate through the forest. Owl warned that if they dragged their feet for too long, Dalkin might slip away. Eddie told him to head on out first, but Owl ended up sticking around for a bit, listening to everything. Together, they cooked up a strategy. Eddie and Owl taught Loe a few techniques, and Loe admitted that it was definitely a lot of information to take in. In the end, Owl joked that he wasn't sure if he should charge for the lessons, but asked if he could borrow Loe's dagger since his own sword had shattered. Loe replied that if Owl didn't mind using a hunting blade, he was welcome to it. The mercenary then explained that before going to sleep, Loe needed to do some mental conditioning, as it drastically boosts the success rate. Eddie added that he should review everything reporting at least once a day. When they set off, Luke remarked that it was finally time to take this little guy to a safe spot, so they could ultimately resume the ecological survey they were assigned. Dalkin was an added headache, but she still had a responsibility to finish the mission. Loa completely understood and expressed his full trust in Owl and Eddie. They were great at tracking Dalkin, and were probably far more capable adventurers than he was. Luke agreed, noting that their skills were certainly impressive. With that in mind, she proposed a plan, asking how about they look for the Unirocero's home while conducting their research. She had been wondering where it came from this whole time, thinking there might be others of its kind out there. Loe asked how they would even begin to look for it. She simply replied that they could just ask him. Walking up to the little cutie, she asked where he wanted to go. Without a single second of hesitation, the creature dashed right toward its home, leading Luke to tell Lo to trust its instincts. The Unirocero was pretty clever, just a frightened little baby who wanted to go home. However, along the way, they encountered several unidentified beasts. Lo tried to sketch them out in a rather abstract style, and they kept documenting creature after creature, so much so that they eventually had to stop and set up camp. Before turning in, Lo made sure to practice his mental conditioning, but Luke suddenly approached him, asking if she was interrupting. Lo replied that he was just reviewing what Eddie and Owl had taught him. He admitted he was surprised to see her awake at this hour. Luke explained she was reviewing the report he had written. She commented that he wasn't exactly gifted at drawing and desperately needed to improve, though it would do for now. She also pointed out that he needed to be a bit more concise with his writing. Seizing the moment, Lo asked about her ultimate goal, questioning why she needed to capture Rosso for it. He asked if it was related to that goal. She said she would achieve no matter what. Luke nodded, confirming it was. Lo told her he would help her. He commented that staying up late like this gives you that heavy feeling that if you just stand still, everything locked up inside you would explode, confessing he knew that exact feeling all too well. Luke asked if that was the reason he always trained so late into the night. She thanked him for his determination, finding it incredible that he wanted to help without even knowing what her goal was. So, she finally decided to tell him. She explained that rankings are a list of the best individuals from top to bottom, where everyone competes to climb higher and higher, because entering the ranks brings honor and proves a person's worth. But then she questioned what would happen if the complete opposite existed. She asked what it would be like if there were a ranking that recorded people from the bottom up, the ranking of the absolute worst. She revealed that she is hunting down the dark side of the rankings. Luke shared that she used to have a very close friend, a girl named Miriella. She had been blind since birth and had never known the world through her eyes. Perhaps because of that, she never laughed at Luke's dream of becoming an evaluator who would break multiple records. While everyone else constantly told her she would never make it, Miriella believed in her. Her friend had told her that maybe the academy had just become too small for Luke. She also mentioned that her father had spoken about something. Their family had been invited to a cruise called the Bondi something. Luke asked if she meant the Bondi Solutions, the ultra-luxurious cruise ship. Miriella said she didn't know much about that, but mentioned that if Luke was up for it, she was thinking of sending Luke in her place, since she couldn't see anything anyway. Luke refused, saying absolutely not. They would go together, and she would hold her friend's hand the entire time. Miriella happily agreed and said she would ask her father. After that, Miriella's mother gave up her own ticket, and Luke managed to board the Bondi Solutions. For Luke, who didn't fit in at school because her dreams were simply too big, Miriella was her only true friend. And for the blind Miriella, who was also excluded from certain things, the feeling was exactly the same, except just 2 days later, tragedy struck. Due to an engine failure, the ship ran aground and began to sink rapidly. It was an absolute emergency, so the commander ordered the passengers to gather on the deck, as he would be the one to decide who got onto the lifeboats. The commander would have no choice but to use that. Once everyone was gathered, he announced that the passenger list for the first boat would be read. For some reason, Luke's name was called for the first boat, but Miriella's wasn't. Miriella let go of Luke's hand, telling her to go ahead and that she would be fine. She said there was no time to argue, and that if they didn't cooperate, nobody would survive. She stated that she truly believed Luke would become an appraiser, so she expected her friend to believe in her too. The lifeboat reached the shore and immediately turned back to the ship, but when it returned, Miriella was not among the survivors, and by the third rescue trip, it was already too late. Luke was utterly devastated. That was when she overheard some sailors saying that it was a good thing they hadn't boarded that boat, justifying it by saying it happened because they live a proper life, since the people on the lowest ranked list were left at the back of the line. Luke demanded to know what that was and what he meant by the lowest ranked list. Judging by the sailors' reactions, it was something they weren't supposed to know, so she ordered them to explain right then and there, threatening to tell everyone if they didn't. The sailors got incredibly nervous and agreed, but begged her not to tell the captain. Luke, in the present, explained to Lo that the lowest ranked list is a ledger that classifies humans in order of the lowest social, economic, physical, and mental capacity, ranking those who fall behind in every single area. That way, you can identify that kind of person just by glancing at them. Lo responded, so it's used to decide who is disposable. She confirmed this and said that people who hold lives in their hands often use it, like captains of large ships and hospital directors, who utilize the list to decide which lives get priority. She declared that her goal is to completely erase the lowest ranked list from this world, because she will never forgive the system that killed killed Muriella, firmly stating that this kind of ranking has absolutely no place in the world. Loa replied that he now understood what the lowest ranked list was, but asked what it had to do with Rosso. She explained that basically she wants to take down one criminal by using another. The lowest ranked list is an unofficial ranking, just as Rosso is part of an unregistered crime ranking. If they capture Rosso and use him to demand answers about the unofficial list, they might get closer to whoever is pulling the strings behind this lowest ranked system. That is why she also wants to bring down that other guy, Dalkin. Loa asked if she already had any evidence regarding who the mastermind was. She replied that she didn't yet, but she knows there are politicians involved and very wealthy people, indicating it must be a massive organization and that there might even be an underworld version of the institute, though she stressed that this was just her own guess. Loa replied that it must have been incredibly heavy for her, commenting on how she carried all of this completely alone, that it must have hurt so much, and yet she never stopped, concluding that she is an amazing girl. But Luke begged him not to say things like that, otherwise she would burst into tears, and told him to tell his story too, because it wouldn't be fair if she was the only one crying. She asked what his ultimate goal was. He promised he would tell her, but warned her that he wasn't going to cry. The next morning, Luke was crying her eyes out. She had no idea his past was that tragic. She commented that now she finally understood why Lo was in such a huge hurry to reach the island of the gods. Lo mentioned that he also learned that being impatient doesn't guarantee you'll get there, highlighting that it was Luke who had taught him that. From now on, if he's lacking anything, he wants her to let him know, and asked her please to be his exclusive appraiser, as well as his guide. She wiped away her tears, put on her hat, and said with a smile that he wouldn't regret it. And just like that, they officially sealed their contract. Right after leaving the campsite, they went back to tracking the Unirasuro. Even after walking for quite a long time, they still hadn't found its actual habitat. It was only at that moment that Lo asked what kind of region these creatures usually live in. Luke explained that they live primarily in caves. Since they are highly resilient, they barely need to hunt, which is why they usually keep a very low profile. Suddenly, the Unirosero caught a scent and dashed off in that direction. They ended up right next to a giant boulder, but Luke noticed that this object was actually a Musa mimic, a colossal creature that disguises itself as a rock, except the monster was already dead. Luke commented that this explained everything. She detailed that mimics are beasts that lure humans with treasure and then devour them, but the Musa mimic uses other beasts instead of treasure. It keeps rare beasts inside its own body to attract illegal poachers, living in symbiosis with these creatures to devour the poachers together. It can also be called a walking museum, because it travels to many different places carrying various types of beasts inside itself. Lo then asked if the Unirasero was inside it too. She answered yes, and that this cleared up a lot of things. When the Musa mimic feeds, it releases all the beasts from inside its body all at once, to ambush the poachers. Only this time, it ended up getting a taste of its own medicine. Lo remarked that Dalkan must have been the one to kill the creature. She replied that this concluded their ecological research. The reason for the sudden appearance of so many beasts was because of the Musa mimic, which died and ended up releasing multiple beasts that were trapped inside, completely throwing the ecosystem into chaos. Loie noticed the numerous wounds covering the mimic's body, and asked if other poachers had done that. She explained that it probably wasn't humans, but rather the beasts themselves that devoured it from the inside out after it died. Since the Musa mimic forms deep bonds with the beasts it coexists with, whatever did that was a beast that originally lived in this forest. The Unirasuro looked deeply saddened by the mimic's death and stepped closer to it. Lo asked if it had lost its home too. He muttered that he knew exactly how that felt, as if someone were ripping his heart right out of his chest. Suddenly, a creature with heavy thumping footsteps emerged right before them. The bloody orc, the exact same one from their very first day. Lo managed to rescue Luke and the Unirasero from that devastating first strike, but in reality, the bloody orc wasn't trying to hurt them. It was just devouring the carcass of the mimic. The Unirasero tried desperately to protect the mimic's body, but ended up getting violently tossed aside, and yet it still refused to give up. But Lo ordered it to stay right there, warning the beast that he would handle the monster himself. Right around that time, he suddenly remembered the brief lessons he had taken with Eddie. Eddie had asked him back then if he used prana. He had replied that he did, but admitted he was still messing up the control a little bit. Eddie told him that, in that case, the solution was simple, and that he was going to teach him a prana control method passed down from generation to generation in the Markman family. Eddie guaranteed he would get the hang of it in no time, and Lo focused his mind entirely on that. Eddie explained that he already had a solid grasp of how to sharpen his senses, and that the next step was to use those senses to look deep inside himself. It was like seeing yourself from above, looking down at yourself from a high vantage point. Eddie said that if he did this, he would discover a lot of interesting things, and that for someone like him, whose prana was practically overflowing, it worked like an absolute charm. Loie took a deep breath, sharpened his senses, and looked inside himself. He could actually see his own body, and noticed that his prana flow was a complete, disorganized mess. Armed with that knowledge, he realigned its path, so much so that he ended up drawing the attention of the orc, which snapped and turned right against him. But Loie finally fired back with the half-lotus flower, the X-shaped slash, which is his second technique. He managed to land a solid hit on the monster, but a single blow wasn't going to cut it. He kept spamming the half-lotus over over and over. Lo explained that this is a technique where you continuously stack slashes, and the amount is infinite until the creature finally drops dead. He kept hacking and slashing without a single pause until the orc suddenly exploded into pure prana, leaving absolutely nothing left of the creature. He gently approached the Uniracero, telling it not to be afraid since he wasn't its enemy. The Uniracero sniffed his little paw and even greeted him. Luke thought to herself that, at this point, it would be best to stay glued right next to the Uniracero, given how incredibly dangerous the forest had become. She also wondered if Owl was doing okay. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, Dalkin was brutally ripping the horn off yet another Uniracero. He complained to the poor animal, asking if it couldn't just hold still for a second, because there was no way he could make a clean cut like that. He turned to Rosso and asked if it would be a problem if it got a little damaged. Rosso shot back that yes, it would be a major problem, because that would tank the product's market price. Owl and Eddie, who were hiding in the shadows watching the whole thing unfold, felt completely nauseous just looking at those two. Even with how repulsive Dalkin was, they couldn't just rush in and take him down right then and there. Rosso explained that it looked like they had captured almost all of the merchandise, and Dalkin agreed. He then sensed that it was high time to take care of the little rats spying on them. Dalkin's very next strike completely pulverized the tree the two boys were perched on. Dalkin scoffed, saying he had known about their presence right from the start, as they had hunted a magic beast on their way here and were tracking every single beast nearby while searching for the cargo. Eddie thought to himself that it looked like this guy didn't just rely on sheer brute strength. Owl quickly fired off another smoke grenade, but Dalkin caught it mid-air, bragging that he wouldn't fall for the exact same trick twice. Except Eddie shot directly at the bomb, causing it to detonate right in his face, which made Dalkin absolutely furious. While running for their lives, Owl said that trying to bluff their way out like they did before wouldn't work anymore. Eddie quickly cooked up a plan to try and boost their chances of survival. Using his own blood, he scribbled a quick message onto a leaf and shot it away with his arrow. They did everything they possibly could. Dalkin closed in on them and asked if they were finally done running, commenting that it was a smart choice, but boasting that he knew this forest like the back of his hand. The two boys braced themselves, still holding on to their rivalry, and Eddie declared that archers only show their true value when they have proper cover, and that this wasn't going to be anything like the exam. Owl replied that it was the same for him, since his specialty was team battles, meaning that if he had subordinates to command, he could perform at his absolute best. Eddie snapped back that he would never follow his orders under any circumstances, but they combined their strategy anyway, and charged straight ahead. Meanwhile, Lo was sensing a very bizarre energy vibrating through the forest. Luke was busy putting together a plan, and given the circumstances, figured it would be best if they protected that baby cub. They could bring it straight to the appraisal department, since this wasn't the first time they had taken in a demonic beast. Lo argued that Dalkin wasn't just going to sit back and watch, and that if they wanted to get out of the forest with the Uniracero, they would have to defeat Dalkin. She realized she only had two options in mind then. The first was to report everything to the department and wait for reinforcements to arrive. But even so, they were dealing with Dalkin, and they could only bring him down with someone truly powerful on their side. Lo knew perfectly well that Dalkin controlled prana way better than he did, and that he wouldn't be able to trick his senses forever. But Luke chimed in, saying that the alternative plan was actually pretty straightforward. Meanwhile, Dalkin was trying his best to completely wipe out the other two, but they were packing some serious power. Dalkin had no idea they could actually use prana. In fact, they weren't able to use it before, but when someone completely masters a certain field, prana awakens within them, though they always require a specific trigger. Owl had sharpened his battle senses while working in a mercenary group. He was also an expert at gauging the enemy's strength, and for the past few years, he had never found himself in a truly tight spot. Eddie was born a literal prodigy at archery, and with the backing of a highly prestigious family, nobody ever dared to challenge him. Neither of them had ever tasted defeat, but fortunately, they had recently run into someone else, Lo Tuli, a person completely off the charts. That encounter became the ultimate trigger for both of them to awaken their prana. Owl surged forward with his dagger, unleashing rapid-fire slashes. He was vastly more powerful than before, though he still couldn't manage to wound Dalkin directly. This time, however, he was actually able to see the raw power of prana. Eddie thought to himself that he was also seeing the true colors of the world for the very first time, and with that, he could shoot with much greater accuracy. He unleashed a homing arrow, aiming precisely where Dalkin was dodging. Dalkin was forced to surge his prana aura, which completely obliterated the arrow. But right after that, another smoke bomb was hurled, and Dalkin got sniped by an arrow right through the thick of the smoke. Dalkin realized that the brat's arrow had been knocked and ready the entire time. He had been tricked, so he leapt up into the trees. He had to dodge Owl at that exact moment too, who was coming in hot with a dagger strike, making Dalkin realize that as soon as the archer shares the enemy's position, the swordsman can instantly apply pressure. Apparently, the brain behind the entire operation was Owl, who was using swift hand signals to dictate their next moves. Dalkin then told them to just forget it, grumbling that hunting demonic beasts was giving him way more of a headache than actual profit. He claimed he had only been playing around with them this whole time because he didn't want to waste his stamina for nothing, but stated that it was completely useless to draw up 1,000 strategies, because that wouldn't change the massive gap in their raw strength. The mercenary rushed forward, shouting at him not to underestimate them. His strike was perfect perfectly synchronized with an arrow flying straight for Dalkin's head, but Dalkin punched both attacks away in a single second because he held the rank 48 title in boxing. Right after that, he grabbed the dagger and crushed it into pieces with his bare hand because he was rank 19 in grip strength. Then, he kicked Owl dead into the distance and lifted the entire tree Eddie was standing on with just one hand because he was rank 7 in weightlifting. When he stumbled across Owl lying helplessly on the ground, Dalkin sneered and asked if he was still breathing, casually mentioning that his internal organs must be completely shattered by now, so ruined they weren't even worth selling, so he might as well just put him out of his misery. But right before his finishing blow connected, it was violently deflected by a sharp, gusting gale of wind. Lo arrived just in the nick of time, shouting a quick thanks for the message on the arrow, noting that it was exactly how he made it there in a flash. Dalkin growled, "You again?" But Lo calmly shot back that this time around, the method and the plan were dead simple. He was going to beat him to a pulp, an end of story. And just like that, the true battle finally commenced between Lo Tuli, adventurer rank 2728, and Dalkin Iris, who proudly held rank 672. Meanwhile, a short distance away, Rosso was carefully analyzing the captured creatures, muttering to himself that Dalkin was taking far too long and seriously doubting that a powerhouse like him could be getting thrashed by a bunch of mere kids. However, he had to admit that the brat with the wildly surging prana was an entirely different story, and sure enough, Dalkin was currently going toe-to-toe with him, just as Rosso had anticipated. Dalkin made the first move, aggressively closing the distance with his lightning-fast boxing combinations, but Lo swiftly dodged the onslaught and pulled off the smartest move possible. He widened the gap between them and unleashed successive gale-force wind blasts, aiming to use that precise opening to land a devastating direct hit. Their blows collided with a deafening crash, forcing Dalkin to admit that the boy's footwork had genuinely improved. Lo even managed to slice right through the giant's defense, cutting his cheek and drawing actual blood. The big man scoffed, saying his movements had improved, but only a tiny fraction, and that he was still nowhere near his level. Concentrating his raw power, Dalkin delivered a brutal kick that sent Lo flying back through a tree, though the boy miraculously managed to land squarely on his feet. Dalkin wasn't just relying on his bare fists anymore. He forcefully ripped a massive tree right out of the dirt and hurled it like a javelin. Lo spent those few seconds desperately focused on dodging, but a vital realization suddenly crossed his mind. Dalkin was rank 672, and he had already faced down much more terrifying opponents in his past. Even standing right in front of that towering colossus and his overwhelming pressure, he didn't feel a single shred of fear. His sheer force of will was so incredibly intense that his prana completely unchained itself. He channeled it, mastered its flow, and his very next strike ripped deep into Dalkin, tearing a massive wound that sprayed blood everywhere. Dalkin spat out that the boy was nothing but a thief, shamelessly copying other people's hard-earned techniques. Loe casually asked if he seriously dared to call a basic move like that a technique, and seamlessly dodged the boxer's heavy swings again, thinking to himself that there was absolutely no reason to clash head-on against an opponent vastly stronger than him. He needed to use his brain, which was easily one of the most crucial tactical lessons Owl had ever hammered into him. Back during their training, Owl had explained that most rookies completely misunderstood the concept, but real tactics had absolutely nothing to do with random creativity. To win, they needed to study and memorize rigid patterns, because the fundamental bedrock of any good tactic was ensuring a definitive numerical advantage. He had even laid out concrete examples of these tactics. First, a perfectly timed surprise attack from an ally. Second, successfully luring the enemy deep into your own territory. And third, executing a flawlessly coordinated ambush. Right on cue, Owl suddenly lunged through the air, aiming straight for Dalkin's throat, proving he still had plenty of fight left in him. Lo, instantly picking up on the play, flashed a quick hand signal to coordinate their next move, and Owl used his prana to tightly glue his entire body right onto Dalkin's back. But the hulking boxer violently revolted, exploding his aura in a fit of rage and stomping the ground with shattering force. He charged like a runaway freight train toward Lo, roaring that it was a pathetic attempt, but he never expected Eddie's perfectly aimed sniper arrow to pierce him directly in the eye. Eddie shouted out, boasting that Lo had done an awesome job and that his hand signal had been completely spot on. Seizing the golden opportunity, Lo Tuli finally connected with a full force, direct slash from his wind blade. Yet, somehow, Dalkin stubbornly remained on his feet. He was a literal giant, and his monstrous brute strength was practically warping the air around them. With a display of utterly absurd power, he launched Lo high up into the sky. Dalkin barked that the brat had barely managed to block it, but that this was officially the end of the line, vowing to crush him into dust the absolute second his feet touched the ground. He even taunted that the boy deserved a little credit, since lasting this long was genuinely impressive for a half-baked, low-tier adventurer, but warned that this time, his little friends wouldn't be around to save his skin. But the one who charged desperately at the villain this time was the baby Unirasaro, who vividly remembered everything Lo had done for it. They were friends. They were true companions. This unexpected distraction completely threw off the timing of Dalkin's impending strike. Luke screamed at the top of her lungs, "Finish him!" Channeling every ounce of his remaining energy, Lo unleashed a relentless barrage of sweeping wind wind blades. The cuts poured down without a single moment of rest. It was the devastating half-lotus flower, an endless storm of stacked slashes carving into the boxer's body. Finally, the blades detonated in a massive eruption of prana, blowing Dalkin apart and leaving him completely unconscious and out of commission. Loa collapsed heavily onto his knees, entirely drained of strength, leaning hard on his sword just to stay upright as he wheezed out that he was totally fine, but Luke frantically pointed out that he was clearly lying through his teeth, considering his wounds looked absolutely horrific. Even so, she praised him, saying he was nothing short of incredible for taking Dalkin down. He muttered back that he had only knocked the guy out, but comforted her by saying he wouldn't be waking up anytime soon. Unfortunately, he couldn't have been more wrong. Like a reanimated zombie rising from the grave, Dalkin slowly stood back up, completely fixated on murdering Lo. He lunged forward, grabbing the boy's head in a vice-like grip, preparing to pop it open. Luke and the Univercero were paralyzed on the spot, unable to move a single muscle due to the suffocating aura of pure terror he radiated. But Dalkin suddenly realized that his broken body didn't even have the residual strength required to crush the boy's skull. As the two opponents staggered backward, Dalkin's mind drifted into a sudden flashback of his past. He remembered his old trio and how he used to bark at them, asking if they were just going to slack off all day. His old teammates had laughed it off, telling him he had way too much energy and needed to stop being in such a massive rush, explaining that if they wanted to climb the adventurer ranks from that point on, they absolutely had to work as a cohesive unit, building a synchronized rhythm together. Back in the harsh reality of the present, Dalkin growled that the two of them were completely pathetic and threw himself at the boy, locking his massive hands around his throat to strangle the life out of him. Loa's vision began to fade, but his mind roared that he couldn't afford to die here, not in a dump like this, and certainly not while abandoning Yuna's dream. In that final desperate moment, the soothing melody of his mother's lullaby echoed in his mind, revealing the true words of the incantation. A gentle breeze, the scattering clouds, the drawn water caressing the earth, those who consume life within a sun-drenched, inviolable sanctuary, catching a fleeting glimpse of eternity. Therefore, the invader must witness with their very own eyes the precious days that will never ever crumble. The moment the incantation resonated, Dalkin's entire arm, the very one gripping Lo's throat, instantly vanished, completely disintegrated into thin air. That was the ultimate secret art of the Thule clan, the descent of the celestial spirit. Luke watched in absolute awe, wondering if that was his true magic. The horrific injury only drove Dalkin into a deeper, mindless frenzy, but the instant he threw a desperate punch at Lo, his remaining fist disintegrated into nothingness as well. Lo calmly looked at him and said that this was his definitive defeat, just as Dalkin collapsed to the dirt with a massive, decisive slash carved right across his chest. As his consciousness faded, Dalkin bitterly thought to himself that the entire ranking system was nothing but a joke. He vividly remembered the day he was confronted by an official appraiser who had told him to face reality. He desperately needed a proven track record of teamwork if he ever wanted to climb any higher up the adventurer ladder. Dalkin had ruthlessly soloed every single quest since he first hit rank 5004 long years ago. The department's official verdict was that he completely lacked any semblance of team spirit. Dalkin had furiously demanded to know what that nonsense meant and why on earth that had to be a criteria, fiercely arguing that they should judge his individual performance and his alone, because he was, without a doubt, vastly stronger than any team could ever hope to be. The evaluation officer shot back, stating that the criteria could not be altered under any circumstances, and that, as a member of the department, he simply couldn't promote him to the double digits. Dalkin snapped right back, demanding to know what the deal was with that brat who became the number 2, especially since he was also a specialist in solo play. The officer calmly replied that it depended heavily on the case, as special exceptions were applied to the criteria, but Dalkin just wasn't one of those exceptions. If it were the present-day Dalkin, he would have beaten that man to death right then and there. That's how absolutely furious he was. He pushed himself so damn hard, because to a ranker, the ranking system was their entire dream. It wasn't an exaggeration to say they lived solely to climb up the ladder. It was around that time that he met Ryu, rank 4611, and Male, rank 5072. They already knew he was in a desperate rush to break into the 3 digits, so they told him it was an absolute honor to meet him. Dalkin had no other choice but to form a team with these pathetic little small fry. The real reason behind his total lack of team spirit was that he genuinely thought he was superior to them, and the truth was, he actually was superior. The people on his team did nothing but drag him down, but the evaluation department completely ignored that fact. Whenever monstrous creatures showed up, Dalkin would obliterate them in a single second. Except, one day, while he was sleeping at the campsite with this team of his, he noticed that the two of them were wide awake. They had snuck off into the middle of the forest to scavenge the remains and raw ingredients from the monsters. They intended to sell everything off and clear other side quests on the sly. Ryu asked Male if he had warned her, casually whispering that they always researched in advance exactly where the massive beasts would spawn, crept in quietly, and then that total idiot Dalkin would just show up and handle the dirty work for them. Male asked if he really hadn't noticed a thing yet. Ryu laughed it off, replying that of course he hadn't, because he was nothing but a brainless fool, but Dalkin was listening to every single word. He stepped out and warned them that either they drop those bags right now or they die. But then Ryu suddenly threw a punch straight into Mail's face, demanding to know where she got those injuries from. Right after, he spun around to question Dalkin, claiming that even if she was a useless burden to him, there was no need to physically abuse his own teammates, and that this exact behavior was why he could never climb the rankings. He confidently declared that he was going to report this straight to the evaluation department. After all, no matter what Dalkin tried to report, the word of a cohesive duo working as a team would always hold far more weight. Dalkin stared at them, wondering if the department seriously expected him to get along with this pathetic excuse for human beings, bowing down to absolute trash just to raise his rank. He decided right then that he couldn't do it. He slaughtered both of them on the spot, without feeling a single shred of regret. The department found out almost immediately, since the murder of an adventurer by another adventurer was a capital crime. However, Dalkin's past achievements were taken into consideration, so he managed to avoid prison, but his ranking was completely revoked, and he was slapped with a 3-year ban from registering ever again. He sold off everything he owned and made a massive pile of cash. The exact moment he was finally allowed to register again arrived just as he had given up all hope, merely trying to scrape by and make money by any means necessary. That was the precise moment he crossed paths with Rosso, and the two of them struck up an excellent contract. He wanted to completely destroy the ranking system and make the department that refused to recognize him regret it to their very core. As he fell, a final thought crossed his mind. One day, Lo would experience this exact same nightmare, the hopeless, crushing pain of a ranker who had finally hit his absolute limit. And the victor was Lo Tuli, number 2728 in the adventurer rankings. But Lo kept pushing his body forward, because he absolutely needed to catch Rosso for Luke's sake. She, however, grabbed him tightly right in the middle of his path, telling him that now was simply not the time, because in the broken state he was currently in, he wouldn't stand a chance at defeating him. She reassured him that they could wait for the next opportunity, and that it was perfectly fine, because just finding a ranker who would say something like that was more than enough for now. Lo softly muttered an apology right before falling completely unconscious. After the brutal battle finally concluded, Eddie was the first one to snap awake and went running to report everything to the department. Owl woke up right after and jumped in to help with the first aid as well. While Lo slept, he drifted into a long, deep dream where he remembered his mother and his father. His mother didn't quite believe that singing to her baby boy at only 1 year old would do any good, since she had no idea if he would even remember it. But his father spoke up, explaining that this was exactly how the process worked. It didn't get recorded in the mind, but rather deep within the heart, permanently imprinted onto the soul. When Lo finally awakened his prana in the future, he would remember it all, bit by bit. The father then looked down at his infant son and explained that their ancestors possessed a highly special power. Because of that immense power, they drew the wrath of countless people, ultimately being defeated and scattered across the lands. One of those broken groups went on to establish that very village, Tori. They lived their lives completely hidden away, but in the end, it turned out to be a blessing, because thanks to that isolation, they were able to live out their days in absolute peace. And Lo, at that exact moment within the dream, was truly feeling a heavy wave of emotion, realizing that his parents, his grandfather, and all the others had known this the entire time, that the day he would inevitably have to fight would come eventually. When Lo finally opened his eyes, he found himself staring right at Luke and Laud. Luke sighed in relief, saying that thank goodness he was finally awake, as she had been deeply worried because he had spent an entire day completely knocked out. Lo asked if she had taken care of him yet again, offering his sincere thanks. But he also looked around, confused, and asked what Mr. Laud was doing there. Laud replied that he had flown all the way out here while the boy was asleep, adding that if he hadn't woken up soon, he would have had to carry him straight to the royal castle. They filled him in on the whole story, noting with a smirk that he had managed to get himself into one hell of a massive mess right in his official debut. Loe pushed himself up to see Owl and Eddie standing further back in the room. Everyone was safe. Dalkin, now completely missing both of his arms, was heavily bound. Laud told him that since he could still walk, he would unlock the leg irons, but strictly warned him not to try any funny business. Dalkin was flanked by the guards and marched straight off to prison. Laud stared at his departure, wondering what on earth the kid had done to make the man end up in that horrific state. Those arms weren't cleanly severed, they were completely erased out of existence. He genuinely doubted if Lo was truly capable of unleashing that level of catastrophic damage. As they walked back toward the department, Luke mentioned that as soon as he fully healed, it would be best for him to register in more ranking categories, since the rankings were incredibly useful for self-analysis. She brought up the example that Dalkin heavily preferred close quarters hand-to-hand combat because he knew for a fact that absolutely nobody could best him in raw, brute strength. Loie nodded, asking if registering in other categories would really help him comprehend his own distinct weaknesses and strengths. She smiled and confirmed it, explaining that relative evaluation was incredibly important. Luke mentioned that the evaluation department possessed state-of-the-art facilities designed to measure every single type of ability imaginable, and that they could dive right into it the second they arrived. Meanwhile, Rosso remained deep inside the Azaban forest. chest. He reflected on the fact that the last ripple of prana he had just sensed, after keeping a low profile all these years, had manifested as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. He pondered that perhaps Lo was intentionally drawing all this attention to himself now specifically to establish contact with the island of the gods. He walked up to the designated meeting spot in his role as the leader of a massive criminal enterprise. Standing before his beloved comrades in the meeting, he declared that this time, they had finally, truly found a descendant of Babel. He proudly stated that they could now move forward drastically with their grand plans, and that the time had finally come to liberate this entire world from the shackles of something as completely useless as rankings, allowing everyone to unleash their true powers all at once. Every single member chanted in unison, reciting in the sacred name of Ouroboros. He wasn't Rosso Cruel at all. He tore off his disguise, revealing his true identity as Adam, first in the smuggler rankings, second in the assassin rankings, fourth in the theft rankings, first in the drug manufacturing rankings, first in the prana scholar rankings, first in the criminal organization rankings, and the absolute leader of Ouroboros. When the group finally arrived at the evaluation department, Luke turned to Owl and Eddie, telling them to head straight to the infirmary while assuring them that she would personally handle the official report and take care of Dalkin's processing. Loie chuckled, teasing that she actually sounded like a real professional when she talked like that. She shot back that she was entirely used to dealing with the chaotic messes that rankers constantly left in their wake, as that was simply part of the job. Then, she beamed and told them all to clear their schedules 10 days from now, because they were going to officially update their rankings, a declaration that left everyone incredibly pumped up. But Luke and Lo still really needed to sit down and talk about the Unirasaru. Whenever the evaluation department took a magical beast under its protection, someone had to step up and be officially responsible for it, and Luke wanted that someone to be Lo. He shrugged and replied that he didn't mind at all, but asked how that would affect her situation. She sighed and explained that the department was tied down by a massive amount of bureaucratic restrictions, and that little creature was bound to grow quite large. When that happened, the facilities would get incredibly cramped. If she, as an official evaluator, took full responsibility, it would be a nightmare to take him out for a walk whenever she felt like it. Lo, on the other hand, was an adventurer. He smiled, nodding that it was completely fine and that it would actually be nice to have a companion. Luke then asked why he didn't go ahead and give the pup a proper name. He thought about it for a moment and replied that he was going to call him Ralph. He explained that when he was just a little kid, there was a man who single-handedly faced down a red grizzly bear that had terrorized their village, a truly courageous man. So, he borrowed that name, Ralph. He looked at the little wolf and offered a heartfelt thanks for saving him during his brutal clash against Dalkan. From that moment on, they were officially friends. Ralph was taken inside the department's care, but Lo was granted full permission to visit him and take him out whenever he pleased. When Lo finally made his way over to the infirmary, Owl and Eddie were already there patching themselves up. They were passionately arguing about the leaderboards, and Lo couldn't help but think that his own rank was on the rise. He felt a sudden surge of adrenaline. He was incredibly hyped because this exact burning ambition was precisely how a true ranker was supposed to feel. Suddenly, someone slammed the door open, demanding absolute silence in the hospital room. She sternly warned them that if they shut their mouths and obeyed, she would fully heal their wounds in a mere 10 days. But if they dared to ignore her instructions, this imposing figure was Clara Save, a formidable rank 14 physician and an exclusive professional contracted to the department. She strictly ordered Lo to get into a bed too, while genuinely wishing for the boy's speedy recovery. However, the moment she turned her back, Eddie and Owl immediately went right back to gossiping, forcing Clara to whip around and bark at them to stay quiet. By now, they had been so heavily wrapped in bandages that they looked like three pathetic mummies. Lady Clara truly possessed an incredible mastery over prana, and her medical skills were completely undeniable, working absolute wonders to get them back on their feet in no time. Luke dropped by to visit them a couple of times, but she looked unbelievably swamped with work. Whenever she did show her face, it was usually just to laugh at their miserable states. The workload at the department was notoriously brutal. When her senior colleague eventually crossed paths with her, she noted how incredibly hard Luke had been pushing herself, asking if the current evaluations were draining all of her time. Luke sighed heavily, admitting that they were, since there were just so many complicated decisions to map out. She then paused and asked her senior if she could call in the prana scholar, Layla. While she pushed through her grueling paperwork, Luke couldn't stop a nagging thought from circling her mind. No matter how deeply she dug into the archives, she couldn't uncover a single shred of information regarding a tribe named Tuli. 10 days later, the entire squad was finally gathered together. Luke and her three resident troublemakers. They were sitting inside the evaluation room, which was an absolute disaster zone, cluttered with endless stacks of paper, scattered scrolls, heavy books, bags, and backpacks thrown everywhere. Luke cleared her throat and explained that whenever they have to update highly complex rankings like the adventurer category, they usually borrow this exact room and haul in a literal mountain of data to calculate the update. On top of that, she had to meticulously cross-reference all of that information with every other ranking category in existence. Owl stared around the room, utterly staggered by the sheer volume of materials, and asked how many people it took to compile all of this. She casually replied that she did the entire thing completely by herself. Everyone's jaws dropped in sheer shock. work. She explained that handling it solo takes a long time, but it was absolutely necessary. Owl muttered to himself, remembering that they didn't have to gather nearly this much paperwork when they updated his mercenary rank. An adventurer's ranking was famous for its brutally complicated preparation process, and the fact that Luke pulled it off entirely on her own proved without a doubt that she was exceptionally competent. Loe bowed his head, sincerely apologizing for causing her so much extra trouble, but she brushed it off, stating that this was simply her job, though she did teasingly mention that there was a legendary evaluator out there who could finish this exact amount of workload in half a day. She then cut straight to the chase, announcing that it was time to officially update the adventurer rankings for the three of them right then and there. She started off with Owl Darkus, who was currently sitting at rank 6,301. She read aloud that during the patrol mission in the Azaban forest, he successfully cornered Dalkin, a severe lawbreaker. Owl demonstrated exceptional cunning and tactical prowess, showcasing brilliant strategic thinking, even while leading a makeshift team, alongside the decisive leadership required to choose a course of action completely independently. Taking all of these impressive factors into account, his brand new ranking officially became 2,067. He had skyrocketed over 4,000 ranks in one go. Next up was Eddie Markman, whose current ranking stood at 6,752. She noted that he also displayed an incredible performance during the Azaban Forest patrol, exhibiting profound mental fortitude by firing with lethal precision under high-stress situations. Furthermore, he proved to be highly proficient in prana control, so much so that he was capable of teaching it to others, and above all, he demonstrated a razor-sharp intuition within the forest environment, proving he had a stellar compatibility with the adventurer lifestyle. His new official ranking locked in at 1,873. And finally, she turned her eyes to Lo Tuli, whose previous adventurer ranking was 2,728. She detailed that through his ecological research in the forest, he single-handedly discovered 7 entirely different, unconfirmed species of magical beasts, correctly identified the root cause behind their massive outbreak, and unleashed a level of swordsmanship capable of rivaling the raw power of Dalkin himself. He possessed an astronomically high potential for absorbing brand new techniques, and as Luke looked at him, she secretly thought that, above all else, there was that mysterious enchantment of his. Weighing all of these extraordinary factors, his new ranking soared all the way to 1,089. Lo froze in absolute shock, his heart racing because he had jumped right to the very precipice of the double digits in a single bound. Luke smiled at his reaction, explaining that this was a speed of growth completely without precedent, and because of that very reason, he would have to prepare himself intensely from this moment forward. The exact moment a ranker truly catches the world's attention isn't when they break into the leaderboards for the first time, it's when their ranking receives a major update, because the sheer velocity of that update represents their actual rate of growth. She pointed out that while the other two climbing from the 6,000s into the 2,000s was already an incredible feat, climbing the ranks becomes exponentially harder the higher up you get, as the difficulty curve is unforgiving. For Lo to jump from the 2,000s straight to nearly 3 digits was nothing short of exceptional. In other words, at that exact second, powerful people all across the globe had just learned the name Lo Tuli. From here on out, his life as a ranker was going to undergo massive shifts, both in a very good way and a very dangerous one. Meanwhile, over at the capital, the ranking updates for the Holy Knights were also being finalized. One of the high-ranking female knights was glancing over the official Zelda Evaluator leaderboard before switching tabs to check the adventurer rankings. The young woman's eyes locked onto Lo's name, her brow furrowing as she realized his rank had shot up yet again, despite the fact that he had blatantly stolen the legendary swordsman's distinct style. A sudden, dangerous spike of her soprano mana leaked out, terrifying everyone standing in her immediate vicinity. Catching herself, she quickly reined in her power and bowed politely, offering an apology while claiming she had simply gotten a bit too carried away. After finishing up his official ranking update, Lo followed Luke out to a completely separate area of the department that he didn't even know existed. It was a gargantuan, breathtaking facility, the absolute crown jewel and pride of the entire department, the Challenge Hall. Luke turned to him, explaining that it would be highly beneficial for Lo to register his name across multiple distinct ranking categories. Inside the Challenge Hall, the system could instantly measure a ranker's various specific attributes and calculate their exact global position on the spot. It was an incredibly rare and valuable facility, exclusively built alongside major departments located in the capital cities of each country. She noted that in exchange for providing such easy, streamlined access, a ranker could only update relatively simple ranking types in a place like this. Lo listened in awe, completely unaware that some rankings could be updated through simplified methods while others could not. For example, she had easily updated his tracking rank through the Theo leaderboards the other day, but for a comprehensive category like the adventurer ranking, they had to physically grind through the paperwork directly at the department. She concluded by explaining that while these easily updated rankings naturally faced a much wider, more ruthless pool of competition, they were the absolute perfect launching pad to build momentum and elevate one's main ranking to the absolute peak. Luke was deeply impressed because Lo's logical reasoning is incredibly sharp and he absorbs new information surprisingly fast. All it takes is explaining explaining something once, and he instantly gets the hang of it. He isn't just highly intelligent, he is likely constantly analyzing things like this, actively seeking the shortest possible path to reach the island of the gods. She cheered him on, telling him that's the spirit, and let him know that today they are going to spend the entire day analyzing his various skills. She added that if he manages to secure high positions here, it will significantly boost his adventurer ranking, so he absolutely needs to give it his everything. Loe asked if he was allowed to utilize his prana, and she replied that of course he could, since it qualifies as a skill too. With that, the kid got into position. In the short distance sprinting category, he locked in at rank 871. In jumping power, he placed at 1057. For grip strength, he secured 2285. In weightlifting, he managed to reach 1862. In the reflexes test, he clocked in at 934. For balance, he held his own at 809. In lung capacity, he scored 2511. Now when it came to his senses, he completely dedicated himself by channeling his prana, scoring an incredible 104 in audio and sound, and a 98 in smell. Luke explained a bit later that they had covered pretty much everything related to raw physical abilities, and that they would save the endurance and other remaining tests for another time, since they are far more time-consuming. The surrounding adventurers were already staring directly at Lo, whispering among themselves that he is that unbelievable rookie who bypassed the grind and jumped straight into the 1000s leaderboard. Lo noticed that he was drawing quite a crowd, but he failed to spot that specific girl, the Holy Knight, who was glaring right at him, fiercely blaming him for stealing a legendary technique. Walking down the corridors, Luke continued explaining that Lo's sensory rankings turned out to be exceptionally high. He replied that it was because he learned how to properly channel his prana from Eddie. She nodded, agreeing that while that helped, he possesses an immense natural aptitude regardless. For someone like him, it seems entirely natural to use prana to sharpen his senses, see across vast distances, and move at blistering speeds. He practically acts like a wild animal. Lo quietly reflected on her words. Luke then pointed out that his muscular strength still has plenty of room to grow, but considering his high ranks in short sprints and reflexes, it might be wisest to double down and further refine his agility. Someone walking right behind them chimed in, noting that it sounded like a very wise judgment, and that person was none other than Director Gran. Luke immediately bowed her head low, and urgently gestured for Lo to bow his head as well, whispering that he is an incredibly important figure. But the director simply chuckled, replying that manners don't count toward your ranking, so there was absolutely no need for formalities. Gran is the official director for the evaluation department's branch in this capital. The department strictly excludes hierarchies to ensure absolute justice. Recording ranks internally is forbidden, and the positions within the organization are generally kept equal. Gran stands as a rare exception because he holds the title of director. He is an incredible man, the most famous recognizer in this entire city, having personally supervised countless top-tier rankers. He was also the exact person who updated Lo's ranking to his current position. At that moment, Lo suddenly recalled that specific phrase Laud had used before, which was identical to the director's, "Manners are not a part of the adventurer ranking." Gran smiled softly, stating that he isn't actually that grand of an evaluator, especially when compared to her. In truth, he was the person originally responsible for Dalkin Iris. Because of that, he came out today to personally offer his deepest apologies to Lo, as well as his sincere gratitude. He remarked that Lo is a ranker of the new generation who managed to breach the barrier of the thousands in a mere instant, and thanked him profoundly for stopping Dalkin's rampage. He shared that the investigation into the true reason behind Dalkin's downfall had finally been concluded. The members of the party he had formed to demonstrate teamwork had actually tried to set him up from the very beginning. That duo routinely indulged in extravagant, highly inappropriate parties, and the evaluation department already had their eyes on them. This all came to light after Dalkin dirtied his hands, but they uncovered the scheme through a mutual friend of that duo. Gran admitted he had completely misjudged the situation, foolishly believing Dalkin would trust him. He emphasized that they, as evaluators, stake their entire professional pride on the accuracy of a ranker's evaluation, and falsified reports simply will never pass. Loe looked at him and replied that he completely understood his point, but insisted that this wasn't his burden to bear, Mr. Gran. He argued that they, as rankers, also have their own minds to think with. The department functions as a great source of support, but it doesn't need to spoon-feed them every little thing, because they possess self-confidence too. Dalkin simply chose to follow his own distorted pride. Gran then shared that he had visited Dalkin in his prison cell, and asked him why he hadn't chosen to escape. When Laud had initially walked away, Dalkin was only bound by a simple rope, and could have easily broken free to flee, but Dalkin had merely snapped at him to shut his mouth. Gran mused that a ranker who truly seeks to climb the ladder is a step ahead when they demonstrate genuine respect toward an opponent they recognize. It was as if Dalkin was actively respecting Lo's pride. With that, the director expressed his deep gratitude to him once more. They parted ways, with Luke mentioning that she would try to update his rankings just a little bit more. The director curiously asked which other leaderboards she was planning to test him on, and she replied that since he fights with a blade, she thought it would be best to try updating his swordsmanship ranking. She also admitted she was thinking about testing his prana ranking, strictly out of personal curiosity from observing Lo's unique nature. Gran sighed, warning them them that it might be quite difficult to accurately measure prana around here. While this country is highly advanced in technology, it still leaves a lot to be desired whenever the topic turns to prana. With the current equipment available in this facility, they won't be able to properly gauge his prana at all. He looked at Luke and told her that if she intends to remain his exclusive evaluator, she had better be thoroughly prepared. He walked away right after, leaving them with that parting warning just to stir up a little bit of anxiety. Lo then turned to her, asking if there really was a machine built to measure prana, and she confirmed it, explaining that there are indeed specific rankings tied to prana as well. But since Gran brought up that limitation, they would focus entirely on his sword rankings for the time being. The sword is an immensely popular weapon, meaning there are tons of different sub-rankings. However, she paused, looking at him with absolute seriousness, stating that she had a massive, highly critical favor to ask of him. She pleaded with him to please, under no circumstances, use the style of the Sword Saint. She explained that this style is exclusively passed down directly from a master to a single, chosen disciple, and it is a sacred style that can only be inherited by the #1 ranked holy knight. To a ranking knight, the style of the Sword Saint is the ultimate dream and a grand objective in its own right. It isn't an exaggeration to say that the vast majority of rankers spend their entire lives trying to inherit it. He blinked, replying that it sounded incredibly impressive. Luke leaned in, explaining that Lo executes it as if it were absolutely nothing, completely naturally, but it is actually a devastatingly advanced technique. Out of the more than 2 billion individuals who comprise the global swordsmanship ranking, barely 800 people can even attempt to replicate that level of technique. The legendary founder of the Sword Saint style was the original #1 ranked knight, Lawrence Wolfraven. He was a first-class swordsman as well as a brilliant scholar, meaning he designed numerous distinct sword styles. The style of the Sword Saint stands as his absolute masterpiece, earning him the mythical title of the Master of the Cut, as it is a style that allows the wielder to manipulate cuts entirely freely. The power that Lo wields possesses an immeasurable value, so it is best to hide his true cards for now. If he manages to get himself hated by the high-ranking knights this early on, it's game over. He nodded seriously, replying that he would be extremely careful. So he went straight to testing one of his rankings. Even if he couldn't use his full strength, it was still better to register. But Lo was convinced that it was better not to register at all, if he was just going to get a low rank. She shot back that nowadays, you have zero credibility if you aren't registered in the rankings, adding that he didn't need to worry either. He headed over to the consecutive strikes ranking. A special boulder called the Possession Stone, which is resistant to slashing, is struck repeatedly within a strict time limit. Lo watched a knight hacking away at the rock, noticing the slashes healed themselves after a short while. Using the half-lotus technique would yield an incredible result, but he just delivered a few random slashes instead and managed to land rank 149. The next test was strike precision, which consisted of sliding a designated sword right through the gap between two iron plates. If the plates moved even a single millimeter, it was over. The gap kept getting narrower and narrower, and if your speed was too low, it didn't even count. An experienced swordsman secured rank 734, bragging that real swordsmen are always in the 3-digit range and above. And when Lo stepped up, he calmly delivered his strike and secured rank 87. He thought to himself that now that he could use the half lotus, he should start practicing the third technique, deciding that was exactly what he would do. Luke thought that even without the Sword Saint's technique, he was already better than most rankers, confirming to herself that her eyes never lied to her. She asked if he had his ranker card on him, explaining that he could display up to 10 of his most impressive rankings on the card, and that she would place the request through the rank cell. Just then, that female knight showed up and asked if his position was really that high. She marched right up to the consecutive strike stone and completely shattered it, securing rank 29. The knight asked why they looked so shocked, saying he could easily do that if he wanted to. After all, he was a user of the Sword Saint style. Neither Lo nor Luke had any absolute clue how the hell she had found out about that. She then demanded a duel, warning that if she won, he would have to drop the sword forever. Realizing there were too many eyes on them there, she told them to go somewhere else, and the two followed her. They headed outside to an open, tree-lined courtyard. The knight stated that the leaking of the Sword Saint style was a massive humiliation for her, and she didn't want anyone else seeing Lo use it. She claimed she would show a minimum amount of courtesy, and introduced herself as Setsu Aurelia, knight rank 305, saying that he, of all people, should understand her pride. Luke asked how she had discovered he used the technique, and Aurelia snapped back, asking if they really thought they wouldn't get caught, accusing Lo of having the absolute nerve to use the style right during his adventurer registration. One of Aurelia's seniors had participated in that exam, and that was how she found out. Lo replied that, to be exact, he hadn't stolen the technique. Aurelia questioned what else it could possibly be if not theft, asking if he actually had the audacity to claim that Lord Adel himself had taught him. She scoffed that such an idea was completely absurd, as he was a noble and supreme knight, with zero chance of having any connection to a classless nobody like Lo. Furthermore, she proudly claimed that she would be the one to inherit his style, because Lord Adel had stated exactly that, in those very words, on that day. She assumed Lo must have seen the technique in some random archive, and commented that spreading a fake name was a total nuisance to the ranked knights, adding that if he apologized right now, she would forgive him, but he answered that Adol did in fact teach him. Aurelia was instantly furious, and he repeated that he had become Adol's disciple for just 1 year. Aurelia shouted that sometimes people just can't hold back their rage, even when they know something is a blatant lie, declaring that what he just said defiled her soul and insulted her admiration, branding him a creature that deserved to be cut down right here and now. And so began the duel between Lo Tuli, adventurer rank 1089, and Setsu Aurelia, knight rank 305. Her opening strike was undeniably fast and powerful, but Lo blocked it. He realized that if he didn't attack soon he would lose, and began to recite the Gale Slash. Aurelia unleashed the exact same move, and the two blades clashed violently against each other. Luke observed that the girl's technique was slightly different from Lo's Gale Slash, but wondered if it was faster than his. Aurelia's Gale Slash struck first, grazing right across Lo's face. He quickly shifted into another stance, and Aurelia recognized it instantly. Both unleashed the half lotus at the exact same time, creating impacts that were actually quite beautiful. Luke was staring at an incredible sight. It was a battle between two users of the Sword Saint style, but since the style was passed down from master to a single disciple, it meant Lo was the authentic one. So to Luke, it made absolutely no sense for Aurelia to be using the Sword Saint style. Lo, blocking and dodging the slashes of the lotus, thought that her technique was strangely different from the lotus he knew, noticing that the form of her technique was brutal, but she compensated for it with her raw, pure skill. Despite the pressure, he managed to stay on his feet. Aurelia thought to herself that he was impressive, but she absolutely refused to believe it, choosing instead to believe in Lord Adol. She taunted that she was winning in both the Gale and the Lotus, asking if he wanted to try using the Furious Rupture now, leaving Lo looking a bit nervous. She mocked him, asking what was wrong and if he didn't know any other techniques from the style, accusing him of going around bragging about being Lord Adol's disciple. Luke analyzed Setsu Aurelia with her rank cell, and saw that she was 17 years old, the exact same age as Lo. She was knight rank 305, with a sword speed of 14, consecutive strikes at 29, strike precision at 22, and strike range at 67. She completely outmatched Lo in absolutely everything. Luke knew perfectly well that Lo couldn't win with just his sword. Recognizing this, he tapped into another power and began to cast his enchantment. Aurelia demanded to know if a rookie ranker like him already knew how to use that. It was deeply frustrating, but she had to admit that the speed at which this guy was climbing the rankings was abnormal. Even so, she was completely determined to bring him down right there with her next strike, thinking that no matter what skill he possessed, he would never surpass her speed, and that by doing this, she would fully restore Lord Adol's pride. While he was reciting the enchantment, Aurelia stood there utterly dumbfounded, knowing that this was a special power that only the chosen ones could ever hope to wield. She questioned whether he could actually use it, but quickly shook the thought away, focusing entirely on bringing him down with a single attack. She unleashed her Gale Slash once more, but the strike hit him as if it were nothing but a weak little breeze, because he was already wrapped in the descent of the heavenly spirit. She wondered if it was a defensive skill, recognizing that his prana was acting just like a suit of armor, making her feel as though she were standing right in front of a massive fortress wall. When he lunged forward, she managed to dodge his strikes since his movements hadn't changed at all, so she decided to strike back with the Furious Rupture, except Lo didn't even bother to prepare to block or dodge a single thing. He just kept coming, completely unstoppable. Her Furious Rupture did absolutely nothing against the heavenly spirit, and he stopped his blade right in front of her head, calmly stating that he had won the duel. Luke then announced the winner, Lo Tuli. Aurelia wondered if she had truly lost, while Lo suddenly fell completely stiff onto the ground. He was perfectly fine, he just couldn't move a muscle. Luke figured that the toll of the enchantment must be incredibly heavy, considering it only lasted for about 5 seconds, and already left him in that pathetic state. All of a sudden, Aurelia burst into tears, crying out and asking why the leader, or the Lord, had done this to her, and why on earth he would give the Sword Saint style to a boy like him. Luke walked over, saying she knew that the knight rankings practically idolized the Sword Saint style, but questioned if it wasn't a bit too hasty to just go around attacking someone out of nowhere like that. Noting that it seemed like she had a very special reason for being so obsessed with this style, Aurelia snapped back that of course she did, claiming to be the only disciple recognized by Lord Adol back when her own ranking was completely stuck. She shared that Lord Adol had secretly taught her swordsmanship once. Well, in reality, all the man did was tell her to relax her grip a bit, and that she would improve from there. But at that exact moment, she became absolutely certain that Lord Adol wanted to pass the Sword Saint style down to her. Since Lord Adol was famous for never taking on disciples, she assumed she was the ultimate exception, and believed he was waiting for her, having pushed herself so hard based on that alone. She even pulled out a medallion with his picture inside and kept sobbing. Luke instantly realized she was just a delusional, annoying fangirl. Loie pulled himself up, saying he hadn't lied. His body felt heavy, but he could finally move again. He looked right at Aurelia and confirmed that he had in fact become Adol's disciple and learned everything about the Sword Saint style directly from him. Aurelia replied that now she knew it was impossible not to recognize his style, unlike her who had only learned by watching from afar. Lo thought to himself that he knew something felt off. It wasn't the actual Sword Saint style, but a technique she had copied. Yet, She had done it flawlessly. Honestly, it was even more incredible than learning it directly like he did. But Aurelia went on, stating that she was the one who proposed the wager. If he wanted, she would resign as a knight this very day. Luke chimed in, saying she didn't need to go that far. Aurelia then suggested that something else would be better anyway, because he had every right to demand whatever he wanted, so he should just name it. He asked if it could really be absolutely anything. Lo stood there thinking in silence for a long time, actually. A really long time, until he finally made up his mind. Aurelia quickly warned him that he couldn't make any weird requests, like touching her body or anything like that. And Lo snapped back, asking why the hell he would ever want to touch her body anyway. She looked extremely insulted by that, for some reason. Loa actually had two requests for her. First, to help him raise his adventurer rank, and second, to teach her the sword saint style. But Aurelia asked if he shouldn't know it way better than she did. He answered that he only knew how to use two techniques and his skills were still pretty weak. He genuinely thought she was amazing for copying the skill just by sight and reaching such a perfect level. Aurelia replied that of course these were the techniques of the revered Lord Adol. Even if it was just an imitation, executing them poorly would be an absolute disgrace, because even a loser has her pride. She then asked Luke if she could borrow the rank cell. She wanted to check if there were any missions in the knight rankings that could help him boost his adventurer rank. Loe asked if he was allowed to do that too. Luke explained that normally, you can't accept missions exclusive to a specific rank or class, but if you're accompanied by a guardian from that class, you can. Even so, Lo questioned what the point would be of taking missions from other rankings if his goal was to raise his adventurer rank. A knight mission didn't exactly seem useful. Luke replied that while that was true, as a person climbs the rankings, they need to expand their skill set and cover their weaknesses, like knowledge, negotiation skills, and cooperation. Focusing solely on adventurer missions limits your growth. Participating in a knight mission would undoubtedly be an excellent experience. It would give him an edge and help him outshine his rivals. He agreed and asked if they should go ahead and pick one then. Luke said it would be a fantastic chance for him to grow as an adventurer. The knight rank, much like the merchant rank, deeply values trust, meaning it requires not just strength, but dignity as well. Just like Adol. Loe mentioned that he'd been hearing a lot about Adol lately. Everyone spoke so highly of him, but in reality, he was super lazy and just winged everything. Aurelia barked back, asking if he had a death wish. Brat, Luke added that his claims couldn't be right, since Adol was a man of impeccable conduct, known as the knight among knights. He was even placed in the top 5 of the reliable bosses ranking. You don't get into that ranking based on swordsmanship alone. Even in that interview after he saved a village from monsters, Adol said that protecting the people is a knight's duty, and that peace is the pride and the weight of their swords. But as the two of them kept praising him, Lo just couldn't connect that glorious image with the actual master he had. Plus, he had no clue what Adol was even up to these days. They had simply gone their separate ways, and that was that. He wondered what his master was doing right about now. Meanwhile, a city was being ambushed by hordes of demonic monsters. A small child was on the verge of being devoured, but a knight leaped to the front and slaughtered the creature, telling the girl that he didn't arrive too late and everything would be fine now. Several other knights from the company followed his lead, charging ahead and wiping out the monsters. But right before them appeared a tyrant worm, a monster with a danger rank of 11. The village chief cried out that it was all over and they were all going to die. The worm geared up to swallow everyone whole in a single bite, but a lone knight stepped up to the front and with a single rupture, sliced the worm completely in half. He removed his helmet, revealing himself to be Adol, the commander of the Knights of Marsus. He begged for forgiveness for keeping them waiting, and said that now that he is there, he will no longer allow any deaths. And of course, everyone hailed him as a savior while he flashed his gallant knightly smile. Haha. But upon returning to his base, he was finding the whole thing to be a total drag. His assistant entered the room, saying, "You did a good job, Commander." He replied that she did too, especially with the brown-nosed flattery, and asked if there wasn't any more paperwork around. She replied that there definitely was. The work keeps piling up because he is always vanishing. He disappeared for an entire year, and should really value everyone's hard work there, you know? He countered that he had already warned her, back when he became commander, that he would maintain the order system and play his role as a good commander to the public, but he would vanish whenever the hell he wanted. The assistant replied that he never actually answers where he goes anyway, taking the opportunity to ask what exactly caused that scar on his chest. Adol asked if he had shown her that at some point. She said no, but she saw it while he was changing clothes. To cause a wound like that, it must have been someone incredibly skilled. He replied that you could say that, yes, and that very soon, that person is going to be even better. He thought to himself that Lo was doing exceptionally well, already at adventurer rank 1089, and having mastered the sword saint style, but his current level only allows him to use about 2 techniques, and Adol knows this all too well. He really wanted to know if Lo had uncovered his true arts, because that power had a lot more hidden depth to it. At that exact moment when he suffered the cut to his chest, it was because Adol couldn't defend himself. Lo's prana was so powerful that it completely erased Adol's prana. He figured that, for someone who awakened this power, his rank is still low, and he hasn't gotten used to controlling it yet. Adol mentally pleaded for Lo to get stronger, because he couldn't just keep skating by at a measly, pathetic rank 1000. Right then, then, Aurelia decided on the mission. They would take this one, a VIP escort on the Transcontinental Railroad. The client would be Thomas B. Elkin, a rank 33 merchant. During the train journey from the Kingdom of Valter to the Republic of Aereo, rumors of assassins sent by a rival merchant company reached his ears. So Thomas was looking for highly skilled individuals with escort experience. Meanwhile, over at Ouroboros, one of the hooded figures was gearing up to head out. He mentioned that it might be premature, but the boy's arts are genuinely important. They need to find out exactly what stage he is at. Depending on the circumstances, it might not even be an issue to tell him the truth about the Island of the Gods. Maybe they could even recruit the kid. After all, he is also a human seeking the Island of the Gods. The hooded figure then revealed himself to be a machine. The Dream Zephyr is a transcontinental railroad that connects the Kingdom of Valta to the Republic of Aereo. The train consists of 31 cars and can transport up to 616 passengers, covering a journey of 6,000 kilometers from the first to the very last station. Lowe was seeing a train for the first time in his entire life. He couldn't believe that something so massive could actually move. Aurelia said they are scheduled to meet the client on the station platform, Thomas Belkin. Since he has a very flashy appearance, they should be able to spot him right away. She pointed out that for a bodyguard, a relationship of trust is vital, so she told Lowe to make sure his first impression isn't rude. Luke explained that when they met with the client, they would have to show him that, his status and his identity, but as soon as Thomas Belkin arrived, he immediately blurted out that Lowe had the face of a bumpkin. Lowe even offered his identity card, but Thomas knocked it away with his hand, telling him not to play games with him. He complained that this is an escort mission, and that he is not about to trust his life to some dopey-looking kid. Aurelia then asked if he had researched anything about her. He shot back that there was no way for him to know, that he saw her ranking, but he didn't think she would be such a rookie. Aurelia then shared something that wasn't on the rankings. She is a Sword Saint candidate. Thomas looked significantly more relieved at that piece of information. A Sword Saint is a knight who reached first place in the knight rankings and inherited the Sword Saint style. A Sword Saint candidate is a nickname given to knights who are prodigies, the ones who might eventually become the next Sword Saint. While the main criterion is, yes, the ranking style compatibility also carries a lot of weight due to its incredibly unique nature. Aurelia explained that Lowe is even more skilled than she is, a Sword Saint candidate. Hearing this, Thomas said that was a massive relief. This time, he actually paused to analyze Lowe's identity card calmly. Thomas noted that yes, his ranking isn't bad at all, and that he can trust him. Luke thought to herself that the man was won over pretty darn easily. Thomas asked what that little girl's deal was there. She answered that she is Lowe's exclusive appraiser. Thomas remarked that it was a huge relief because he's had a lot of terrifying experiences lately, and his nerves are completely shot, which is why he didn't trust them right off the bat. His guards also withdrew at that moment, giving notice that they would return to their escort duties as soon as they reached the Republic. Thomas commented that nothing is cheaper than words, and that lately, he hasn't been trusting even his own people, which is a seriously grave problem. So, they headed first to the cabin to talk more about the matter. Aurelia asked if it was Lowe's first time on the Dream Zephyr. In order for him to perform his escort duties properly, he would also need to know the train's layout. She explained that first come the bronze cars, which are the cheapest cabins, and add up to 8 cars. Behind them are the pet room, 2 public dining cars, 2 department store cars, and 1 library car. After that come the silver cars, meant for slightly wealthier people, featuring a large public bath, a hospital, a vegetable garden, a swimming pool, and a luxury restaurant. Then, finally, you reach the golden car. The tickets for the golden car are insanely expensive, meaning only the rich, the truly filthy rich, can actually buy them. When they arrived at his room, Thomas sat in the armchair and said they could have the room right next door. Aurelia asked if he could tell them more about the enemy. He replied that he could, saying it wasn't a big deal, just some competition over one of his company's vital supply lines. Aurelia asked if it happened to be the Laura company, since she managed to get their name during her research. Thomas explained that it was something along those lines, and that their job was simply to handle the assassins sent by the Laura company. However, Aurelia noticed that he was being evasive and hiding something, so she asked how long he had been a target. He replied that it was a recent development, and that the enemy's goal was to ruin the business deal he was conducting in the Republic. He added that, as for the specific details, it would be best not to ask too many questions. Lowe was already staring at Thomas with a highly suspicious look. They decided to wait outside, but before they left, Aurelia explained to Lowe that he was climbing the rankings at an unprecedented speed, which is worthy of praise, but it could also be a weakness due to his inexperience. Since it was his first time fighting an assassin, he absolutely could not let his guard down at this ranking. He responded with just a nod of his head. Later on, alone with Luke, Lowe mentioned that there was so much going on that his head was practically spinning from all the information. Luke replied that this was completely normal, since he had arrived in the capital only a very short time ago. Lowe asked how that train door managed to move all by itself. She explained that it works through electricity, and also through a special type of prana. Their destination is the Republic of Aereo, one of the leading nations in prana research, because they possess a technology that converts prana into energy. The Dream Zephyr was built entirely using this technology. She also asked if he didn't remember the door back at the department, which uses that exact same technology. Lowe thought to himself that indeed the world is incredibly massive, exactly like Yuna used to say. He definitely wished he could have come here together with Yuna. Luke noticed his nostalgic expression and wanted to have a more serious talk. She mentioned that if they go to the Republic of Ario, they might be able to discover more about the Island of the Gods. She revealed that when she was updating the rankings and investigated his arts, everything was so uncertain that she couldn't uncover much of anything, and for the appraisal department, which manages a vast amount of information, knowing absolutely nothing at all was something very strange. In other words, she thought his direct contact with the Island of the Gods was entirely related to his special arts. Director Gran himself had already mentioned that the Republic of Hario was a leading nation in terms of prana. Lower replied that now he had yet another reason to get genuinely excited about it, thinking the whole thing was pretty cool. She answered that it was a truly fascinating country and that it would completely change his entire perspective. But right at that exact microsecond, he picked up on a deeply threatening presence. Aurelia walked up to him and asked if he had also noticed that. Even so, she warned him to act completely normal, especially since they were actively infiltrating the area at that very moment. The train departed shortly after, just as it was publicly announced to everyone on board. A warm welcome was extended to all passengers aboard the Zephyrus of Dreams. But right at that split second, the train gave a massive, violent lurch, and a razor-sharp blade flashed right past, grazing incredibly close to his neck. Loey collapsed backward into a sitting position, thinking to himself that if he hadn't stumbled right at that exact moment, he would be a dead man. The assassin stepped forward, admitting the brat had gotten incredibly lucky, but coldly warned him that he wouldn't be getting a second chance. Even though the assassin held a much more advantageous position, Lo managed to answer the assault with a throwing knife. In reality, his intention wasn't to hit the assassin directly, but rather to use a feint to block his vision. With that opening, Lo closed the distance and landed a solid punch right in the pit of his opponent's stomach, managing to reclaim his sword. Lo managed to block the subsequent strikes, but the assassin was far more experienced in combat. He wasn't just utilizing his knives and weapons, but the environment itself, bouncing his body off the walls and the ceiling to almost slit Lo's throat right then and there. But, without the assassin even realizing it, he had already taken a direct hit to the solar plexus, coming from the pommel of Lo's sword. The assassin even commented that it wasn't half bad, right before falling unconscious. Luke grew quite worried about the situation, but Lo was thinking about something else. He sensed the presence of two more assassins in the area, but by the time he reached Thomas's room, Aurelia had already taken care of the other two intruders. She commented that they were attacked pretty quickly, weren't they? The enemy was far more aggressive than she expected, so she proposed they interrupt the trip for now. Thomas replied immediately after with a resounding no. Absolutely not. He firmly stated that he needs to make this business work, no matter the cost. Aurelia responded that, in that case, they would dispose of the attackers discreetly so as not to delay the train schedule. By discreetly, she meant dragging the assassins to the window and hurling them right outside. She herself admitted that the action might seem brutal, but it was the best way, since they had neither the resources to interrogate them, nor to keep a subguard, and with people of that caliber, you never know what they might try. Loey asked if they wouldn't die because of that, and she replied that, with the skills those assassins possessed, they wouldn't die at all. Next, she informed Mr. Thomas that she would hold a strategic meeting with her allies. He agreed, saying yes, of course. All right. Aurelia then asked Luke just how skilled that assassin looked to her. Luke replied that, in the criminal rankings, she would place him at level 500 or higher, with a wealth of combat experience. She added that he possessed the flexibility of someone from level 300 and the knights, though they weren't very good at direct combat. She noted that Lo was off balance, and even so, he won. If he had been on a firm stance, he would have defeated the assassins in moments. Aurelia responded that they should be able to handle someone of that level, and commented that, in times like these, having an appraiser helps a lot. But Lo countered, saying he didn't feel like the assassin was an easy opponent. Aurelia explained that this is normal, and it always happens when rankers just barely touch the digit barrier. Luke then explained that the digit barrier is a technical term. In every ranking system, a massive wall exists at the borders of the digits, between 10 and 9, or between 100 and 99. Even though the number changes by only a single unit, the skill level between the two is usually from another world. The most accepted theory is that this happens because many rankers push themselves harder than ever to cross that digit frontier. She reminded him that Lo now occupies the 1089th position in the adventurer rankings. In other words, the 3-digit barrier is right in front of him, and that specific bracket of the ranking is a true chaotic hell, packed with competitors aiming for those 3 digits. Aurelia added that missions tailored for this bracket also experience a massive spike in difficulty. Setting aside herself, since she is already used to it, this job could be quite tough for someone like him. Lo asked what exactly he should do, and she questioned if he had already forgotten, reminding him that she is going to teach him swordsmanship. Later on, they were on top of the train, the Dream Zephyr. The wind was incredibly strong up there, and Aurelia stated they were going to use those exact conditions for his training. She commented that she had already thought about this when they first crossed swords, pointing out that Lo's control of prana was nothing past the bare basics. She understands that he prioritized learning techniques over the fundamentals, but right now, he is just forcing things through sheer brute strength that he can't naturally pull off, relying on his absurd amount of prana. She explained that the Sword Saint style is a much more advanced form form of swordsmanship than Lo thinks, and that he will need to acquire advanced techniques to keep up. They were moving away from the basics and stepping into the field of application. Lo replied that he knows prana techniques are powerful, but asked if he wouldn't get stronger faster if he just forced himself to learn the sword techniques directly. She answered that there was still one thing left to correct. She recalled that, when they dueled, she let her emotions get the better of her and wasn't thinking clearly. In a split second, she vanished and placed her sword right against Lo's neck. She explained that these are the real movements of the Sword Saint style, unleashing a versatile storm of sword strikes faster than the eye could see, revealing the true essence of the style. She commented that Lo is far too slow, but told him not to worry, because if he does what she says, he will naturally be able to use the third technique as well. She mentioned that the third technique is the Furious Rupture, and asked if he was aware that it is a special technique, even among those of the Sword Saint style. Lo replied that he indeed knows this. She continued, saying she knows very well that he only managed to copy techniques that go up to the basic level. Aurelia couldn't copy the fourth and fifth techniques because a massive leap in difficulty exists between them. She admitted it is frustrating, but she herself cannot fully master the Sword Saint style, and that is why she is going to leave the rest to him. She seemed genuinely frustrated, yet she was entirely willing to help. Aurelia grabbed a rope and said they would use it for the first lesson. At that moment, Lo recalled the beginning of his training with Idal, who had said the exact same thing as Aurelia, that it was a special technique, even among those of the Sword Saint style. Its applications were limited, but it would allow Lo to bring down a wider variety of enemies. In the memory, Idal ordered him to pay attention. His movement was simple, a concentrated strike that blasted a massive hole, a gargantuan crater into the mountain. Back then, Lo thought to himself every single time that it didn't even look like swordsmanship. Back in the present, when Lo saw Aurelia's rope, he asked if she was going to tie him up. She snapped back, telling him to forget those weird ideas. First, she would do a demonstration. She whipped the rope in the opposite direction of the gale and told Lo his lesson was simple. He just needed to repeat what she had done. And, as expected, he couldn't do it on the first try. Right against the heavy wind, the rope snapped straight back into his face. Lo complained that the wind was pushing the rope right back. Aurelia replied that it was exactly because of that. In a powerful wind like this, it takes far more than ordinary speed for a lightweight rope to reach the very end. She explained that prana grows stronger the more it flows, and that it can grant him the momentum of a rushing river or a roaring waterfall. She instructed him to try channeling the energy into his hands, feet, eyes, or fingers, wherever he needs it, and whenever he needs it. By doing this, he could instantly boost the raw output of his prana. This was the specific skill he needed to master, namely, maximizing instant output for a massive power surge. The moment he swung the rope again, Lo injected prana straight into his arm. The result was significantly better than before. The rope didn't snap back into his face, but it was still a remarkably messy movement. Aurelia explained that prana originates right in the center of the chest. It is absolutely necessary to calculate the exact time it takes to travel from there to the extremities. Lo tried over and over again, but it proved to be an incredibly difficult task. Frustrated, he tried to force it by using even more prana, scattering the energy wildly in all directions. But Aurelia snapped that this is exactly what he must not do. He only knows how to use raw brute force with his prana like that, and he will never learn the actual technique acting this way. Relying on that kind of brute strength quickly turns into a terrible habit. The Furious Rupture technique that he is so desperate to master already consumes an absurd amount of prana on its own. On a scale of 1 to 10, a 1 is the exact amount of prana he needs right now for this basic lesson, while a 10 represents the Furious Rupture. That is just how much the technique demands, even from someone like him. If he burns through 10 times the prana he just used, he will completely run out of fuel. In Lesson 1, he is also supposed to learn how to manage his prana efficiently. But Lo fired back, insisting that he won't run out of fuel. He confidently claimed that he could use dozens of times what he just unleashed without facing any issues at all. Aurelia then challenged him to go right ahead and unleash his prana. When he actually did, Aurelia was left completely shocked. Even Thomas and Luke could feel it vibrating through the air. Lo's overwhelming prana. She wondered to herself if he had somehow grown even stronger. Meanwhile, down in the library of the Dream Zephyr, a man picking out a few books paused, thinking to himself that it was an absolutely absurd amount of prana. He wondered for a moment if it belonged to a single-digit ranker, but quickly concluded that it didn't. It was massive power, yes, but it completely lacked refinement. He also noted that there was still half a day left until the next phase of the operation. The prana released by Lo was majestic, looking like an aurora stretching across the night skies. Aurelia truly hadn't been expecting this at all. It was an outrageous volume. In terms of sheer prana capacity, he might possess one of the largest reservoirs in the entire world. She realized that the apprentice of Adil is truly a monster. Later on, they returned to Thomas's room inside that lavish golden train car. Aurelia informed Luke that they were very close to completing Lesson 1. She felt relieved to see that he has a lot more talent than she initially anticipated. Lo asked exactly how many lessons were left. She replied that there are 3 in total and warned him to be prepared, because Lesson 2 would be downright brutal. She asked if Thomas was still in his room, and Luke confirmed that yes, he had just gone to sleep a moment ago. Luke asked how she knew, and Aurelia explained that she was constantly tracking his presence. presence. Lo questioned if it's really possible to sense Mr. Thomas's prana, pointing out that while everyone has prana inside them, only a handful of people can actually utilize it. He asked if that could really be done with prana, and she replied that for a practitioner of the sword saint style, this is the absolute basics of the basics. She commented that she is only now realizing just how much prana he wastes in his day-to-day life, estimating that he probably doesn't use even a single tenth of it correctly, promising to fix that through their training. She also took advantage of the moment to hand a document to the two of them, stating that it was time to talk business. Lo began analyzing the file, which was a detailed breakdown of their high-value target, Thomas himself. It contained his background, age, personality, hobbies, and personal tastes. She had compiled absolutely everything. Luke responded that it was deeply impressive, and commented that the common knowledge dictating one should hire ranker knights for protection isn't just for show, since this specialized information is actively shared within the order. Aurelia agreed, noting that any ranker within the Marsus Order of Knights learns this during training. Lo then reviewed all the data. Thomas Belkin, merchant rank 33. He is 46 years old and serves as the second-generation president of the Belkin Company, a retail giant that operates the Belly department stores. Its predecessor was Belkin Pharmaceuticals, a tiny company that merely sold basic medicines. However, Thomas's father, Brown, managed it with great success and rapidly expanded the business. Thomas himself also aggressively increased the number of department stores, constantly expanding and adding new locations. In terms of the department store industry, it is currently the largest in the country. Loa remarked that the guy is genuinely incredible then. Aurelia countered that while he is highly cautious, he also possesses a notoriously short fuse. When he openly doubted their abilities earlier, that was likely the reason why. For now, he is staying quiet in his room, but he will inevitably want to head out sooner or later. Then, Luke took her turn to share intelligence. She had conducted a thorough background check on the assassins who assaulted them, and when she consulted the department's main database, she found a few pieces of information that seemed to match perfectly. Loa asked, a bit late to the realization, if they couldn't have requested a rescue via the rank cell back when they were fighting Dalkin. Luke explained that in places like the Azaban Forest, which are explicitly placed on the dangerous zones list, there are no signal interceptors, making communication impossible. She clarified that ranking updates utilize an entirely different system, and for security reasons, a special encrypted line is used exclusively for that. Long-distance communicators, on the other hand, rely on simple transmissions, allowing them to reach much further than ordinary devices. She shifted back to the main topic, stating that the three assassins who ambushed them were almost certainly coordinating with one another. Aurelia agreed entirely, noting that the timing of the strike was flawless. Luke added that such precise coordination strongly indicates they were hired together as a cohesive unit. While it is incredibly difficult to identify an individual assassin, tracking an organized team is a different story. Analyzing the specific clothes and weapons they utilized, and basing her findings on those unique characteristics, Luke realized they belonged to Despada, an elite assassin group sitting at rank 49 among criminal organizations. They operate as a subsidiary of Desdora, which holds the terrifying 6th rank. Their top brass consists of high-level executioners, directly dispatched from Desdora itself. Their sheer skill cannot even be compared to that of ordinary members. She warned that they must exercise extreme caution, as their elite forces are highly likely to be on this very train. Right then, the man who had previously been in the library sat down in a seat right next to the window. This was because a secret code had been left right under that specific table, a cipher explicitly stating that all preparations were complete. However, he secretly thought to himself that it was a total lie. They got completely intimidated by that previous plan, didn't they? He had fully expected to retire from getting his own hands dirty, but it seemed there was no choice. If you want a job done right, you have to do it yourself. This man was none other than Joman Tapel, assassin rank 108. Later on, Thomas was enjoying his meal, proclaiming that absolutely everything served here is delicious. He commented that the absolute best part of traveling is undoubtedly the food, and that it was worth every single penny. Loe grumbled under his breath that having to taste test all the food beforehand was an absolute drag. Luke replied that she was just glad the chef and the waiters had been so understanding about it. Loe then turned to Luke, noting that even though she is an official appraiser, an empty stomach can't stand upright, so he asked if she wasn't going to eat anything. She responded, with professional pride, that the duty of a dedicated appraiser is to personally live through the exact same experiences as the ranker, because only then can she accurately judge the official rankings based on those lived experiences. And Thomas stood up, telling them to make sure they protect him properly. He announced that they were now going to take a walk to help with digestion. He strolled through the hallway of the shopping center, past the stores and galleries, commenting that, as always, they have a magnificent selection here, all while eyeing the luxury items. Lo asked if they were actually going to let him go shopping. Aurelia replied that she honestly didn't want to, and preferred that he content himself with room service, but it would be a problem if he became too stressed. He could decompress a bit on his walk, because that way, he would obey orders when the critical moment arrives. She also went to perform a watch, and told Lo to take care of him. Luke took advantage of the moment to ask Lo how his training was going. She commented that Aurelia seemed quite strict. He replied that he wasn't tired at all, all, and was actually even enjoying the experience, since he was learning to use his prana much more efficiently and felt like he had plenty of energy to spare. Luke then asked if he had ever run completely out of prana doing anything else besides using his own arts. Lo replied no, that had never happened. Luke explained that she found this very strange, because normally, prana training involves exhausting a person's energy over and over again, comparing the situation to the fact that nobody runs forever without eventually losing their breath. Lo replied that perhaps he just had an absurd amount of prana inside him. Luke insisted that this was precisely why the situation was bizarre. The sheer volume of prana he possesses combined with an art that consumes all of it in a single instant. In the beginning, she thought Lo's enchantment functioned like an ability to erase everything it touched, but she pondered that if that were the case, the very ground beneath him should have vanished as well. Lo agreed and said her reasoning made sense. She continued explaining that there are known cases of arts that erase things upon entering contact, but she reinforced that his technique presents terrible prana consumption, meaning it needs to have an extraordinary effect to justify that kind of expenditure. Luke then raised a hypothesis, questioning if his art wasn't, in reality, the capacity to erase anything that is inconvenient to him. Lo asked if that theory wasn't a bit too far-fetched. She replied that if the situation is analyzed from that angle, all the pieces fit together perfectly. Furthermore, she pointed out that he doesn't become invincible either, as there is the major disadvantage of having the worst possible prana consumption, allowing him to use the technique only a single time during a fight and leaving him completely immobile right afterward, which makes the risk far greater than the reward. At that exact moment, Aurelia returned and warned that the enemies were not showing themselves for the time being. Lo decided to stay on maximum alert, and it was a very good thing he did, because in the following second, the lights died and a total blackout occurred across the entire train. Lo immediately thought to himself that this was their move, utilizing the darkness and the crowd to favor their assault. In the middle of the pitch black, Thomas screamed desperately for his bodyguards. Aurelia ordered him not to do that, and right after, one of the assassins already clashed against her sword. However, she couldn't see exactly who the attacker was, because there were too many civilians mixed up in the darkness, and it wouldn't do any good to try to detect them by prana alone. Lo asked if she could handle the situation if there were light, and she replied yes, but wanted to know how he would manage that. Lo leapt toward the ceiling and told Aurelia to leave Thomas in her care. All he did next was blast his prana outward from his body, illuminating the entire environment with a powerful shade of green. The surrounding crowd became confused, wondering if that was some kind of show taking place on the train. Aurelia thought to herself that his idea had been excellent, and yelled for Lo to hang on tight. However, by illuminating the entire train car, Lo ended up making himself an incredibly easy, totally exposed target. Joman Teppel himself observed the scene and commented that so it was that boy who possessed all that prana. Immediately after, he hurled Lo with massive force toward the back of the car, causing him to crash through the structure until he tumbled right inside the library. Lo managed to balance himself and landed on his feet, while the assassin declared that it was time to hunt a monster. Because Aurelia was separated from Lo, her area became completely dark once again. She began receiving multiple strikes from assassins hidden in the shadows, and realized that the most skilled enemies had gone after Lo, which meant they were severely underestimating her own strength. She concentrated her prana and, the moment another assassin tried to ambush her from behind, she countered in the blink of an eye with a strike impossible to see with the naked eye, utilizing the sword saint style. One of the assassins who was watching from afar noticed that, in a single instant, she brandished her sword 3 consecutive times. Suddenly, several flakes of light in the color of her prana, a brilliant pink, began to form all around her. The assassin charged toward her thinking it was an art, but he couldn't visualize any clear prana. He calculated that if he remained cautious, he could buy time and that he only needed to hold out until the train's lights turned back on. It is explained that the sword saint style functions as a technique of overlapping slashes, which detonate the moment the final trigger slash is delivered. Therefore, by choosing not to deliver the trigger slash and instead overlapping multiple slashes of equal power while maintaining perfect balance, the user is capable of forming a literal bomb of stagnant slashes. Those flakes of light exploded the moment the assassin closed in. Aurelia declared that the sword saint style represents absolute invincibility, and that at its absolute peak, a single slash can cut through anything. She proclaimed that even if the original teachings are considered superior, she will not yield her conviction, because she is the one who truly understands this style. That very morning, Lo had managed to complete the first lesson by successfully throwing the whip against the strength of the wind. On that occasion, Aurelia told him not to forget that sensation, and explained that this technique is called flow. She commented that one barely sees this movement in the ranking bracket where the two of them currently sit, but in the higher rankings, there are plenty of people who know how to use it. She showed great hope in his potential, stating that as soon as he mastered the flow to perfection, he would be able to control his own power even better than he did now. Back in the combat, the assassin Joman drew his hatchet and Lo also braced himself for the confrontation. Both concentrated their prana and collided their blades. Lo utilized the exact technique he had just learned, the flow, and the assassin was quite impressed by it, as he didn't expect such a high-level movement. However, Joman also unleashed his own flow, and and the subsequent strike from his hatchet blasted Lo violently to the very back of the train car. Joman commented that the young man would have had a brilliant future ahead of him and said it was a pity to have to end it so soon. Lo got up severely injured and thought to himself that this man was truly powerful, being on a level clearly far above his own. He noted that, unlike himself, the assassin was already completely accustomed to using the flow, which made him deduce that he might be one of the elite members of Despada that Luke had mentioned earlier. Lowy decided he would try to strike back utilizing his own flow. He bolted forward at high speed, but the assassin managed to dodge easily with just a small sidestep. Joman commented that the lad's technique still lacked polish and thought to himself that the boy was a massive waste. He evaluated that the young man's volume of prana seemed like a true blessing from the heavens, and that normally, if someone is born with that much power, someone would have forced them to learn how to use it properly. He theorized that Lo had perhaps grown up in a place where power was rejected, which ultimately prevented him from capitalizing on all the talent he possessed. Joman concluded that he needed to defeat him before he turned into a full-blown monster, admitting that if the boy's flow had been perfect, the fight could have been an issue. Once again, in the blink of an eye, the assassin clashed his hatchet against Lo's sword. The moment he executed the block, Lo thought he already knew exactly what he needed to correct in his movements. The first point was that he hadn't been able to control the flow properly. The other point was that for some reason he ended up detonating his own prana against himself. Joman observed his reaction and wondered if the young man was trying to use a self-destruction tactic. Lowy noticed that his flow and the Sword Saint style were not in sync. As things stood at that moment, he basically couldn't use both at the same time. Because of this, he kept firing gales toward the assassin, who evaded by using the library shelves. The man remarked that it was a good sword art, but commented that if it overburdened the boy that much, it was a waste of his gift. Next, the assassin hurled his hatchet and caught it the very next instant, trading blows that were heavily wounding Lo. They were heavy strikes that he couldn't block. Lo knew that, at that angle, his sword would shatter, because the assassin was striking precisely where he could break both his body and his weapon. Lowy knew that the stronger a person was, the more they thought during a fight. He felt he shouldn't be losing in terms of flexibility, especially since he had faced so many stronger opponents. He figured that the Sword Saint style is in constant change, so he focused and unleashed two techniques simultaneously, the Half Lotus and the Gale Slash. At first, Joman even thought the brat was an idiot for using the same technique, but upon blocking, he noticed it was different. It was a flurry of slashes at high speed, like thousands of arrows. The cuts were overlapping wherever they touched, but the problem was, they were incredibly light. Joman mocked that it didn't matter how many times he landed a hit, because the strikes were just too weak. Lo replied that this was exactly the point, and that he did it on purpose. In exchange for speed, every single strike of the Gale was weak. If he made them all explode right then, it wouldn't have the power of the Half Lotus, but it was still more than enough to pin the assassin in place. Then, he charged forward with a strike that was hard to control. He utilized his flow, which he still didn't know how to use very well, combining it with a simple strike without using the Sword Saint technique, but still overlapping all the other Gale cuts. With that, he carved a massive gash across Joman's chest. Just when Lo thought he had won and sheathed his sword, he fell to his knees, his body racked with extreme pain. Joman warned him that his axe was coated in a deadly poison that could kill with a mere scratch. Lo realized he had been infected back when his opponent threw the axe. To make matters worse, the assassin simply crushed the antidote vial, snarling for the monster to just die already. By the time the others arrived, the assassin was already dead. Aurelia noticed instantly that Lo was poisoned and that the vial had been destroyed. Despite this, Lo asked her to step back a bit, as he wanted to test something. He recited his incantation, which was his very own technique. Luke thought that maybe he really could detoxify himself. If her theory was correct, he would indeed be able to rid himself of something inconvenient to him, which was the poison. And it actually worked, leaving the young man completely purified. Later on, an announcement was blaring over the train's loudspeaker, stating that the surprise performance held in the department store carriage was coming to an end. The notice asked all passengers who were about to disembark not to forget their belongings. Aurelia commented that they made the announcement exactly as they requested. Tomas snapped back that of course they would, asking if she had any idea how much money he had invested in that train. Meanwhile, Lo was stretched out wide, completely unable to move. The poor guy. He commented that Tomas managed to cover up the fight in the library carriage with a lot of skill too. Aurelia mentioned that it felt a bit forced, and that maybe people didn't quite buy the story about it being an improvised performance by artists. But she reasoned that the justification was what mattered. As long as they had one, the rest could be settled by giving out some compensation as an apology. Loe asked what they had given as compensation, and Luke, for some reason, thought it best to explain that later. There was a huge question mark in the air about what had really happened to the artwork all of a sudden, and what kind of compensation they could have possibly given to the people. Luke continued the conversation, saying that through this incident, she realized what kind of ability his art truly was. The core of his art, the heavenly spirit descent, was pure survival. It seemed that the technique automatically eliminated any threat to his life, such as attacks against him, things that could cause pain, or even direct death, like the poison. But she pointed out that even for a skill that broke the laws of the world, the price was far too high, and asked what would happen if he couldn't move. He replied that his body felt like lead, but honestly, he didn't think the price was too high since he was alive, and that was the bottom line. He couldn't understand why she thought it was a high price for him to just stay still for a little while. Luke explained that the important part was how he used the technique. The effect only lasted for 5 to 10 seconds, but he became invincible whenever he activated it. Basically, he would be invincible for the next 10 seconds, and he needed to think about that strategically. Lo responded that such a strategy would then be fundamental. Taking advantage of the moment, Aurelia asked how he had defeated that assassin. Lo explained that he applied the lotus and turned all the cuts into gales, and from there, he prioritized landing the hits. She replied that in that case, it was a lotus specialized in containment. She explained that the gale and the lotus were basic techniques that anyone was free to apply, even within the Sword Saint style. Especially with the lotus, it was possible to substitute it with various things. He could launch it straight at the enemy, throw any random object, or even use a light touch. She concluded by saying that the focus of the Sword Saint style was flexibility and constant change, and that he had finally become worthy of that style, meaning they could move on to the second lesson. Lo chimed in that honestly, Aurelia was a great teacher, even better than Adol. Hearing this, she instantly put her sword to his neck, barking that such a claim was absurd, as Lord Adol's teachings were the best in the world. Lo simply countered that Adol just taught half-heartedly anyway. She asked if he was doing that on purpose, just to provoke her. She was really drilling him with that question, but Lo honestly thought he was just trying to compliment the girl. Well, anyway, she sheathed her sword, noting that since Lo had defeated a high-ranking member of Despada, there was a solid chance the enemy might actually back off. But Luke cut in, saying there was no way that guy was from the high ranking. She asserted that he was really just a regular member. Lo, wide-eyed, asked if they were truly that powerful. She replied that the very moment they were ambushed, they had already lost. If that guy had actually been a high ranker, their heads would have sent flying instantly. She concluded that the fight was far from over, and that they had just gotten incredibly lucky. Meanwhile, at one of the stations, the Tela Central Station, a clown was juggling knives. He thought to himself that if the kid failed, he would have to step in too. He reflected that the other guy had only been doing desk work lately, and must have been rusty, muttering with a heavy sigh. Man, he actually lost. What a pain. But he reasoned that this whole mess was messing with their operations too, so there was no way around it. The moment someone dropped a small coin for him, he leaped to catch it, shouting, "Mine! It's mine!" He thought to himself that his old habits from his days as a beggar were kicking in all over again. But then, out of nowhere, someone walked right past him with a highly exotic-looking face, and it was none other than that Ouroboros robot. He muttered that he was finally heading home after a very long time, and that there was someone he desperately wanted to see. The next morning, Lo woke up feeling completely refreshed. He asked if anything had happened while he was asleep. Aurelia replied smoothly that no, everything had been perfectly quiet. Lo then asked how far they actually were from the Republic now. Luke answered that since they left Tela Central Station the previous night, they should be about halfway there. Tomas chimed in, announcing that it was almost lunchtime. He warned them that he would be eating inside his room this time, so he asked them to call room service. Loe thought it was a good thing Tomas had become cautious, because ever since they were attacked, the guy was absolutely terrified. Aurelia agreed, but she had a request of her own. She reasoned that the assassin Lo took down was already highly skilled, so if an even more powerful one showed up, there was something seriously wrong with this story. She directly asked if Mr. Tomas was hiding something from them. Tomas flinched, getting instantly nervous. What do you mean by that? Aurelia stated that he himself had explained the enemy was an assassin sent by a rival company, but it made zero sense to hire someone of that caliber for a simple commercial dispute. She argued that there had to be another reason they were pursuing him so relentlessly, demanding that he spill the truth. She warned him that if he kept his mouth shut, they would cancel the mission right then and there. Tomas started sweating bullets, and Lo, a bit surprised, asked if they could actually do that. She replied that the responsibility of explaining the entire situation fell squarely on the client. She explained that if they kept going blind, they would be walking into battles far more dangerous than what the payout was worth. She reminded him that fortunately, they had an exclusive appraiser on their side, so the department would back them up completely. Tomas cracked under the pressure, stammering that fine, he would explain everything and even pay them more. No problem. He begged them to please keep protecting him. He finally confessed that in this negotiation, he was planning to secure the mining rights for a rare mineral called insect steel. Luke spoke up, explaining that insect steel was the raw material used to make papillion. Lo, completely lost, asked what that was. She explained that it was a notorious type of drug. The main ingredient was the processed powder of the insect steel. She said it was an infamous substance because it was incredibly simple to produce, as long as you had the materials. She added that while a monopoly was difficult, with the market demand constantly expanding, that wasn't an issue. The drug was widely used to fund cartels or as a source of side income. Tomas sighed and admitted that several criminal organizations used papillion as a way to rake in cash, and that Despada was one of them. Aurelia's eyes narrowed as she asked if that meant his rival company wasn't another merchant business at all, but rather a criminal syndicate, including Despada. He nodded nervously, confirming that yes, that was exactly it. Loe looked at him dead on and asked why he even needed the insect steel, questioning if he was manufacturing papillion himself. Tomas Thomas panicked, repeatedly denying it. No, I swear it's not for that, giving absolute certainty to his words. Loe shrugged and said that in that case, he would continue with the mission. He then asked if this situation was just like the Azabun forest, wondering if the mission's difficulty spiked, their ranking would shoot up faster too. Luke confirmed that yes, it made it much easier to climb the ranks. Aurelia agreed, adding that Tomas definitely needed to reflect on his shady actions, but she pondered that, for them, Hunkers was a massive opportunity. It was a high difficulty mission they usually wouldn't be able to snag, and it had basically fallen right into their laps. She said that if they succeeded, the rewards would be absolutely massive. Lo asked if she also had a personal reason for wanting to raise her rank so badly. She snapped back that of course she did. It was to inherit the Sword Saint style, as she still hadn't given up on it. She explained that if she reached the absolute top of the knight rankings, Lord Adol might finally change his mind, but since they were companions now, it was time to resume their training. She commented that the enemy's combat power had vastly exceeded their expectations, so they were going to tighten up their regime a bit more. She asked if he had already mastered the flow, stating he should have realized by now that it fundamentally changes the nature of combat. To demonstrate, she channeled her flow and with a sharp flick of her finger, cleanly snapped the head off a metal spoon. She declared that the goal of Lesson 2 was maintaining the absolute stability of his flow. Specifically, she told him that he needed to go outside and run right alongside the speeding train. Lo gasped in pure shock. Wait, how on earth am I supposed to do that? Meanwhile, outside, that same robot was holding a tiny mechanical insect against the window, spying directly on Lo Tuli. He was accompanied by 3 companions. The robot analyzed the scene, realizing it was an escort mission, and noting that, despite having just survived a life-or-death struggle in the Azaban forest, here they were, already grinding to raise their rank. He thought to himself that the boy truly desperately wanted to go to the island of the gods. However, he also noted that the other assassin from their network was getting incredibly impatient. A separate surveillance camera cut to one of the train's storage compartments. There, the clown assassin who had been juggling knives stood over the bodies of the other failed killers, having already taken them down himself. He spat coldly that they had failed the assassination and caused completely unnecessary attention. He declared fiercely, Despada has a reputation to uphold, and we have absolutely no use for loose ends like you. He knew the guards were a ranker knight and a swordsman packing some absolutely monstrous prana. Naturally, he decided he'd investigate the female knight first. Their prana carried a very distinct tingling sensation, which made tracking them down a breeze. It was right then that he noticed one of them was slipping out through the window, which was absolutely perfect. He'd just handle him outside. He whipped his knives straight toward Lo and Aurelia, but the massive robot intercepted the blades with a single precise pistol shot. The robot thought to himself that it would be pretty problematic if he interfered right now. After all, if Lo's training led to the awakening of his art, it would ultimately benefit Ouroboros. Even so, he decided he would respect the assassin's drive. An insect, one sitting right on the assassin's shoulder, that he hadn't even noticed, suddenly bit into his neck. The bug injected nanomachines directly into the clown assassin, leaving him with exactly 7 minutes until terminalization. The robot fully expected him to become an excellent test for the kid, since he had a knack for backing Lo Tuli into a corner. A bit later, Lo was in the middle of his so-called training, which honestly looked a whole lot more like pure torture. He was sprinting right alongside the train, trying his absolute best to keep pace, running and running without pause. Exhausted, he called out to Aurelia, I give up. No way I can keep this up. She sighed, muttering that he really had no shame, before pulling him back aboard with the rope. She pointed out that, unlike his prana, it seemed his physical stamina wasn't exactly infinite. He huffed back that if he pushed any harder than that, it would mess up their escort mission, though he admitted he could probably manage the training itself. He finally understood the true core of Lesson 2. Just running normally wasn't going to cut it against a speeding train. The trick was that the exact instant his foot touched the ground, he had to concentrate prana into his feet and explode forward in high velocity, keeping the flow continuous. By doing that, he could actually run faster than the train itself. The only real issue was that he had completely wiped out a few times trying to pull it off. If his output fluctuated even a tiny bit, he would go flying and smash his entire body into the dirt. Aurelia nodded, confirming that was exactly the point, but he smiled and said he'd already caught on. The crucial part was maintaining the perfect equilibrium between his body and the flow. All he needed now was a bit more practice. Aurelia was secretly startled by just how insanely fast he picked things up. But looking around, Lo asked where Luke had wandered off to. Aurelia explained she was interrogating Tomas for a quick background check, just as a precaution. Tomas himself was vehemently denying any involvement in drug trafficking, but she made it clear that if he was planning any kind of crime, she would cancel the mission instantly. Lo, however, didn't think the merchant was that kind of guy. When Tomas was bragging about his shop and praising his wares, he seemed genuinely happy. It was just Lo's gut feeling, but to him, the man was just an ordinary merchant. Aurelia conceded, reasoning that someone completely blinded by greed wouldn't sincerely praise a competitor's product. Even so, a background check was standard protocol. Besides, it turns out Tomas donated an absolute fortune to a rehab clinic for substance abuse. They decided to wait for the results of Luke's investigation, but before that, she wanted to break down Lesson 3, which was the final stage. As he might have already guessed, Lesson 3 was the the complete fusion of the flow with the sword saint style. It was something that could only be truly grasped in the heat of combat. She wanted him to fight while keeping his flow active 100% of the time, and he nodded, completely understood. And right at that moment, a perfect sparring partner fell right into their laps. The clown assassin crashed straight through the ceiling of the carriage. It was an ambush, so to speak, though the assassin didn't exactly seem thrilled to be doing it. Aurelia frowned, muttering that it was almost like they were listening in on their conversation. And who would have guessed, right? Could someone actually be listening? How about that tiny little beetle on the wall, eavesdropping on everything? I wonder if that was the culprit. Luke rushed in, hearing all the racket, but Lo yelled for her to stay back. Yet, in a single second, Luke's eyes scanned and completely analyzed everything about the assassin. Height, 180, weight, 80 kilos, a red coat matching the style of the chaotic northwestern continent, shoes and belts from the Black Riser brand, which was highly consistent with members of Despada, hypertrophied forearms, and currently unarmed. Luke warned them with a sudden panic that this time, it was an actual high ranker from Despada, and he was on a completely different level. That man was Neil, assassin rank 21. Luke screamed for them to watch out, explaining that he could transform absolutely anything he touched into a projectile, making him an absolute master of throwing. Unfortunately, she said that just a little too late, because he had already hurled an entire sofa straight at Lo. He dodged at the absolute last millisecond, and the sofa smashed into the wall, leaving a massive crack that proved just how insanely powerful that throw was. Neil casually scooped up the broken fragments of the sofa, starting to juggle them mid-air. He really was a master thrower, showcasing a skill Lo had never seen in his life. The only thing was, his eyes looked completely vacant. He was being fully controlled by the Ouroboros robot, who was actively reinforcing the projectiles with flow. Every single throw hit like a literal cannon blast. Lo barked at Aurelia to get Luke and Tomas to a safe place while he held the line. He realized that, for some reason, this guy was locking eyes only on him. Aurelia realized he was right. The killer didn't seem interested in Tomas or her at all. Lo smirked, asking if Lesson 3 was practical combat, declaring he was going to perfect his flow using this guy. Aurelia wasn't about to argue. She bolted down the corridor, shouting that she'd drop the client off in the safe room and be right back. The two locked eyes for a brief moment before Neil unleashed a hail of sharp fragments, which Lo blocked with rapid sword strikes. As he leaped to evade the next volley, he focused entirely on his flow. Right foot, left wrist, right wrist, and elbow. He channeled the prana to every single one of those points, calculating down to the millisecond how long it would take. He didn't just dodge the flying shards, he cleanly sliced several of them right down the middle, declaring right then that he would use this assassin as a stepping stone to reach the island of the gods. Now, history shows that Neil was an orphan. A traveling circus troupe had taken him in, but not to be a star performer. They intended to sell him off through their hidden human trafficking ring. To escape that mindless living hell, he secretly copied and stole the techniques of the performers. Thanks to that, he eventually dethroned their mediocre juggler and took his spot. Day and night, he threw and just kept throwing, because he knew that the moment he stopped, he would be discarded like trash. Even after the troupe went bankrupt, he kept throwing, since he had no other clue how to make a living. But that was when an assassin discovered the orphan. It was a miraculous find. He was an incredible killer, and his subconscious talent for murder completely blossomed, combining perfectly with the throwing skills he had mastered just to survive. He became utterly overwhelming. Neo, which was his actual name, slaughtered countless villains that way, climbing the ranks to become the 21st strongest assassin in the world. But right now, thanks to a mysterious scientist, he had been reduced to a mere puppet, stripped of his entire will to fight. He was simply executing orders. His next sudden movement shattered the massive chandelier hanging above them, and the knife thrower sent the glass fragments flying. They genuinely felt like cannon fire, piercing straight through the walls and tearing the room to shreds. Lo knew he wouldn't even be able to get close as long as the assassin had something in his hands to fire. The moment the wall completely caved in, Lo spotted a tiny opening and fired a gale slash, shattering the very fragments the man was about to use for his juggling. Lo decided to strike before he could reload, closing the distance instantly using his flow, but the knife thrower stomped his foot hard against the ground, kicking up an avalanche of stone and glass shards, launching them all straight toward Lo. It was a catastrophic strike. Almost the entire carriage was completely obliterated at that point, but as the thick smoke finally settled, Lo was nowhere to be found. He burst through the ceiling, piercing the assassin's shoulder, though the killer managed to dodge it by a hair. If it weren't for the very hole the assassin had made earlier, he would have died right then and there. The two of them then moved their clash onto the top of the train car. Under the howling, violent wind, Lo still managed to maintain a firm stance, his mind racing back to his master's technique. Lo had excellent examples to follow. Even if it had only been for a single year, being trained by the strongest knight of humanity carried an immense weight. On top of that, a young holy sword candidate and a miraculous assassin were masters from all walks of life, illuminating Lo's path and serving as a stepping stone toward the island of the gods. He shifted his perspective. He shouldn't have assumed he could move just like before while utilizing the flow. He couldn't even run properly, meaning there was absolutely no way he could combine the sword saint style with the flow. The style he had been using originally was merely a provisional makeshift form for when he didn't know how to to use the flow. Therefore, he would recreate the technique entirely from scratch, adapting it to his flow, to his prana, mastering everything including his own body. Finally, he would unleash the true Sword Saint style. His next strike was the blade of the island, Gale. This time, it wasn't a flying projectile of wind. It was a concentrated, highly pressurized torrent of wind that tore away part of the assassin's torso, ripping his organs out right along with it. Lo thought to himself that it worked. The combination of the flow and the Sword Saint style had finally synced up perfectly. He could finally unleash the third technique, Fury, Cataclysm, Rupture. Except, the strange thing was, the assassin didn't react the way Lo expected at all. Once again, the killer's eyes were filled with computer-like displays. The robot spoke up, stating that the Sword Saint style was indeed a fascinating subject, but that wasn't what he wanted to see. He told Lo Tuli to show him his true art. What the assassin concentrated next wasn't his own prana, it was the power of the robot. Lo noticed there were two distinct colors of prana inside the exact same person, but he stopped overthinking it, knowing he had to focus entirely on the fight. The knife shooter ripped through his own clothes. He had a hidden weapon, knives tucked inside concealed pockets. When he fired them off, Lo countered with a gale, stripping all the momentum away from the throwing knives. Lo closed the distance, dashing forward and thinking he had successfully cornered the enemy, but suddenly, his body felt incredibly heavy. Perhaps it was because he had forced the sword style alongside the flow, and his body simply wasn't prepared for that kind of strain. He had relied purely on willpower since his prana was overflowing, but the consumption rate was vastly higher than he had anticipated. When he snapped back to reality, he noticed the assassin had vanished from the train. Suddenly, an entire tree was launched straight at him. He dodged it with a high leap and realized the knife shooter was actually running outside the train, keeping pace with it while pulling up and hurling trees from the passing landscape. Loey thought this guy was absurdly powerful, hurling trees while running at the exact same speed as a train, which heavily reminded him of his fight against Dalkin. But he couldn't just let the train get wrecked by this. He saved the situation by focusing his attacks in midair. He absolutely could not afford to lose in a contest of pure firepower. However, as long as Lo remained airborne, it created the perfect opening for the robot. The assassin lunged forward and grabbed Lo by the foot. If he were thrown from here, he would die, and it would be the end of everything. Because of that, he activated his incantation. Right on cue, the robot itself appeared, claiming he had been waiting for exactly this moment. Loe wondered what on earth that thing was, questioning if it was some kind of reinforcement. The major problem was that once he activated the art, there was no stopping it. At that moment, the assassin let go of him as well. The member of Ouroboros stated that from this point forward, he would analyze Lo Tuli's art. He deployed devices that levitated all around Lo, analyzing the purity of his prana and measuring his interference capacity. However, the technique suddenly ceased, and the connection to Babel failed, mostly because his technique only lasted for a few brief seconds. The robot approached, asking if it had already stopped. Before Lo could finish asking who the hell he was, the entity replied that he had been rude to delay his introduction. He is Gem Contrato, a member of Ouroboros. Lo, however, apparently didn't recognize the name, so Gem explained that they are those who, just like the boy himself, seek the island of the gods. When the killer shooter dragged himself up, completely battered and bloodied, Gem coldly stated he had no further use for him and simply disintegrated the assassin's upper body using his pistol. The little beetle returned to Gem's body, leaving Lo to demand what all of this meant and what was going on. Gem replied that the thing on his shoulder was a cell beetle, a tiny terminal that operates on prana, which he himself developed. In addition to communication functions, it injects nanomachines into a specific target to turn them into a terminal. In short, it meant he could infuse his prana into anyone and turn them into his literal puppet. Aurelia suddenly appeared, taking in the grim situation, and instantly had to dodge a sudden shot from Gem's pistol. He warned her not to interfere, claiming that killing her would be nothing to him. At that exact moment, Lo's body emanated prana once again. Gem noted that prana generation was confirmed, remarking that Lo was the type of person who converts a sense of crisis into raw power. He then asked if Lo perhaps carried some sort of trauma related to loss, noting that if so, this process would be over very quickly. He seized complete control of the train's operating system, forcing it to accelerate wildly until it was totally out of control. Gem challenged him to show everything he had, taunting that if Lo couldn't stop it, countless passengers would die. Lo remembered his village being completely annihilated and tried with everything he had to build up his prana, but his body refused to move. Gem sighed, calling it a massive disappointment. Aurelia attempted to ambush him from behind, but one of the beetles shielded Gem with a powerful force field. Aurelia couldn't break through it even with her technique, but she managed to buy enough time for Luke to show up and rescue Lo. Gem himself stated he wouldn't waste his time chasing after him, as he had zero interest in a boy who could no longer even use his arts. Aurelia pinned him down with her sword, remarking that he certainly didn't look like a member of Despada. She demanded to know his affiliation and his ultimate goal. He drew his pistol in response, mentioning that if he were to kill her, Lo would get pretty motivated, wouldn't he? She snapped back that he couldn't even hold a proper conversation, and mocked what a cheap brain he had. And so, the combat was about to begin between Aurelia, Knight rank 305, and Gem Contrato, Prana Scholar rank 2. Inside, Luke carried Lo and asked if the train spinning out of control was that man's doing. He managed to reply that yes, it was. Luke told him to head toward the medical car, even though it was far away. Luke had also hidden Thomas in the private room back in the silver car, but she asked who exactly that man was. He answered that the man claimed to be a member of Ouroboros. Luke gasped, asking what he meant, given that Ouroboros is deeply involved in assassination, smuggling, and theft, operating as the ultimate evil organization that sits at the absolute peak of the entire criminal rankings. She wondered in terror why such feared individuals were even here, thinking to herself that maybe she should stop digging any deeper into Lo's background. He ended up in the medical car, completely wrecked, as usual, unable to move a single muscle after overusing his technique, and Luke knew full well that their enemy was indeed Ouroboros. Aurelia wouldn't stand a ghost of a chance against them, but Lo clearly wasn't in any condition to fight. If they don't stop this train, everyone is going to die. This isn't just a simple escort mission anymore. But right then, Thomas popped in to check up on Lo. Lo asked what on earth he was doing there, and Thomas replied that he would allow a bit of informality. Just this once. There was no way he was going to stay tucked away in his room in a crisis like this. Treating a bit of bran wasn't going to be completely impossible, but he was going to give it his absolute best shot. There was an adequate supply of medicine right there, along with the right equipment. The other two were left completely shocked, but Thomas just asked what the big surprise was. After all, he is the son of a pharmacist, isn't he? Luke got a sudden surge of motivation from that and begged Thomas to please look after Lo. She was going to head out there to try and stop the runaway train, promising to give it everything she had. Of course, the passengers were in a total panic, sprinting backward toward the security cabin, but Luke stopped one of them, asking if he happened to be a mechanical ranker and demanding that he help her stop the train. The guy, utterly confused, asked how she even knew he was a mechanic. She pointed out that the calluses on his fingers had a highly specific shape unique to mechanics, telling him she needed him in the conductor's cabin right now. She bolted alongside the fleeing crowd, thinking to herself that evaluators are observers, but more importantly, they are problem solvers. She rushed into the bronze dormitory and shouted, asking if there was anyone inside with a level 40 or higher in mechanics, or a level 120 or higher in Prana Scholar. Meanwhile, Thomas was gently administering medicine into Lo's mouth, murmuring that the boy must have suspected him all along, right? Just like that female knight said, he had put in a fraudulent request, a villain trying to profit off of drugs using insect steel. Lo must be thinking that's exactly what he is, right? But Lo softly replied that no, he didn't doubt him at all. Thomas was a ranker too, so Lo knew that rank 33 was an incredible number. He must have spent an absurd amount of time and effort to climb up to that position. In that case, Lo believed in his dedication. Hearing that, Thomas replied that he would save him, but just this once, alright? This next medicine could very well shorten his lifespan. It was a drastic, high-risk treatment, but it was far better than dying. He pleaded for the adventurer to protect him, saying Lo wasn't the kind of man who would stop in a place like this, was he? Back in the day, he desperately needed money. They all needed money. Thomas's family, the Belkin family. His father was a deeply kind-hearted man, but he had absolutely no head for business. Then his mother walked out, leaving the house and abandoning them entirely. From that point on, they faced immense hardships, endless, grueling days of being mocked for being a pathetic family. They needed money. Thomas thought about that every single day. Remembering everything he had learned from his father, he went on to create a medicine that could easily turn into a highly dangerous drug depending on how it was used. He started his own business and began advertising the new medicine from his pharmaceutical company all over the place. And his father, completely oblivious to the dark truth, simply did his absolute best to serve every customer who walked in. Slowly but surely, the pharmacy stopped being a pathetic household and transformed into a place filled with genuine kindness and vitality. Rumors spread like wildfire through the village, and the clientele grew rapidly. But Thomas only realized way too late that he had done something entirely irreversible. The ghosts of the past don't just disappear. He had made a complete fool out of his own father. So, he decided to spend the rest of his life atoning for his sins. One day, an evaluator approached him and asked if he would be interested in becoming a merchant ranker. He had replied that he wasn't qualified to be a ranker. The evaluator then asked if that was because of his involvement in the drug trade, causing Thomas to gasp, wondering how she knew. But the evaluator was making the offer fully aware of that fact. She also knew he had been donating enormous sums of money to rehabilitation centers as a way to atone. Her assessment was that he had successfully redeemed himself and was therefore worthy of support. He could spread his righteous will to even more people. It was only after becoming an adult that he truly realized Thomas's father was a genuinely great man who conducted honest, beautiful business. Thomas had replied to her that once he had done enough to make amends, he would hand himself over. If she could accept those terms, then he would become a ranker. At that moment, he pulled the shugan out of his bag. It could be a highly beneficial medicine depending on how it was administered. The processing and ingredients were incredibly complicated, but his company was more than capable of handling it. They needed to make this venture succeed, no matter the cost. He thought about how he was actively driving up the demand for the legitimate medicine, effectively eradicating the illegal market for the drug shugan. If he could achieve that, he would finally have done enough to redeem himself. Hearing the story, Lo asked if he could stop by his shop sometime in the future. Thomas smiled and replied that if they both both make it out of this alive, then absolutely. While Lo was being medicated, Aurelia was still desperately trying to hack through Jem's force field, but with zero success. Her blade couldn't even scratch it. Jem condescendingly explained that the phenomenon of compressing and solidifying prana is taught during compulsory education in the Republic, yet even she seemed completely ignorant of it. But she used a lightning-fast movement to slip right behind him, snapping that this wasn't a classroom. Except, he instantly fired a shot backward without even needing to look. She dodged it at the absolute last microsecond, as he remarked that the critical weakness of prana flow movement is known as the fluidity technique, a counterattack. It was far too easy to calculate her timing. Her prana was utterly tedious. Aurelia realized right then that this guy was both incredibly powerful and highly specialized. He possessed very little physical prowess, but he entirely dominated the battlefield, using pure knowledge and advanced equipment. In that case, she would just have to use overwhelming brute force firepower to smash right through him. She dropped into the stance of the Sword Saint style, third technique. The rupture is essentially a sword of pure destruction, like packing a massive heavy charge into the blade and releasing it all in a single explosive instant. The golden rule is to strike using the flat blind side of the blade rather than the edge. The blade, thickly coated in prana, becomes entirely specialized for crushing, a pure impact technique. She slammed the tip of her blade down, driving the force of the rupture straight against his shield. The resulting massive explosion made her believe for a second that she had won, but another gunshot grazed right past her shoulder, drawing blood. Jem stood there with a small wound on his neck, admitting it was a decent strike, but it fell just a bit short of actually destroying him. As his cloak ripped apart, Aurelia finally noticed the horrifying truth. He was completely robotic underneath. Jem took back what he said earlier. It seems she actually did have some value as a research subject. The Sword Saint style alters subtly depending on the wielder, especially when used by an unorthodox successor like her, but she just smirked and replied that he was acting awfully relaxed. She admitted that she was indeed a fake, but the real deal had just arrived. Lo was standing right behind the giant robot, pissed off beyond belief. Jem turned, asking if he had finally come to. Lo Tuli. Lo glared back and growled that yes, he was back to put an end to him. Finally, the real battle was about to begin. Lo Tuli, a rank 1089 adventurer, against Jem Contrato, rank 2 prana scholar. Aurelia sheathed her sword, asking if she could leave the rest to him. He confidently replied that yeah, he had this covered. She knew damn well that in her current state, she would only get in his way. All she could do now was put her complete faith in the boy, the wielder of the true Sword Saint style. Lo, already dropping into his combat stance, thought to himself that although he had managed to recover slightly, he didn't have much prana left to burn. He needed to put an end to this, and fast. His very first Gale Strike was deployed simply to test Jem's techniques. The massive robot immediately noted that the boy was incredibly fast, a seamless fusion of natural flow and raw technique. Loe, however, quickly realized that Jem wasn't just reacting to his moves, he was actively anticipating them. Sensing this, Lo unleashed a relentless barrage of Gale blasts, which slammed violently against the mechanical force fields, without leaving so much as a single scratch. Jem's automated cell beetle would instinctively deploy a barrier in direct response to an enemy's prana, but against a heavy continuous bombardment like this, the system was forced to generate multiple shields simultaneously. In other words, its energy charges were bound to deplete in no time. Realizing his defense was draining, Jem countered with his pistol, precisely deflecting the remaining oncoming wind strikes. Jem remarked that, as expected of a descendant of Babel, Lo was remarkably adept at combat. Lo snapped back, demanding to know what the hell he was talking about. Jem calmly replied that he was referring to the Island of the Gods. He teased that if Lo wanted to uncover the truth about the island, Jem could easily enlighten him. However, it came with a strict condition. Lo Tuli had to join the ranks of Ouroboros. Jem stated that the boy had officially earned the right to know. While Lo didn't possess overwhelming strength just yet, his potential for growth was immense. To prove his sincerity, Jem offered to share a crucial piece of information right then and there, specifically regarding the deep connection between Lo and the Island of the Gods. He revealed that the surname Tuli was merely taken from the village itself. The true Tuli clan, originally, never even existed, and just like that, everything Lo believed about his heritage shattered. Jem went on to explain that, a very long time ago, there lived a legendary clan known as Babul. They flatly refused to forgive the horrific atrocities committed by the Island of the Gods and took up arms against them. Ultimately, the Babul clan was utterly defeated. In order to survive the purge, the survivors scattered into 9 distinct tribes and went deep into hiding. The Tuli tribe was merely one of those hidden remnants. Lo was indeed a true descendant of Babul, meaning Tuli was nothing more than a cover name. Meanwhile, during the cataclysmic events of the past war, the Island of the Gods had also suffered significant casualties. To this day, they harbor a deep fear of the descendants of Babel, believing they are simply too powerful to be left alive. Because of this lingering terror, they have been relentlessly hunting down and erasing every single remaining survivor of the clan. That was the real reason Lo's home village was targeted and brutally wiped from existence. Lo instantly remembered his father's final words, that their ancestors had lost their way and had been completely scattered. He knew he couldn't blindly trust a monster like Jem, but he demanded to know exactly what kind of atrocities the Island of of the gods had committed. Jem countered that he couldn't disclose those details until Lo officially became an ally of Ouroboros, though he noted that those dark deeds are still actively happening to this very day. He claimed one could easily deduce this just by looking at the constant, unnatural fluctuations within the rankings. Jem stated that he himself is actively trying to reach the island of the gods. He warned Lo that by this point, the boy should realize that no matter how many lives he throws at this quest, it will never be enough. Jem then coldly asked just how much longer Lo intended to carry on with these entirely meaningless struggles. At that moment, Lo looked back and realized that his enemies had always been completely out of his league. It wouldn't have been surprising if he had died a dozen times over by now. Jem wasn't entirely wrong to call his journey meaningless, but Lo turned the question back on him, demanding to know why he had forced the train to run completely out of control. Jem nonchalantly replied that it was merely a metric to measure Lo's true strength, asking if he had a problem with that. Lo lost his temper, telling him not to give him that garbage. What Jem was doing was absolutely no different from the actions of the island of the gods, recklessly throwing away innocent lives for absolutely no purpose. It was the most evil thing a person could possibly do, and Lo declared he would never, under any circumstances, side with someone who pulled a stunt like that. Jem sighed, muttering that sacrifices must always be made for the greater good, disappointed that the boy couldn't comprehend even that basic truth. This time, Jem manipulated the mechanical barriers to completely encircle Lo. Cocking his pistol, Jem stated he had absolutely no interest in stubborn fools. Lo clearly needed to be disciplined, but right at that split second, Lo's eyes locked onto the lingering wound on Jem's mechanical neck. The damage he sustained wasn't a clean, precise cut from Aurelia. It was a silent message she had left behind for Lo to read. Use pure, overwhelming, and highly effective brute force. He immediately readied his rupture technique and slammed his blade directly against the oncoming shot from Jem's pistol. Unbelievably, he didn't just successfully deflect the bullet, he completely shattered the surrounding barriers and closed the distance between them in a flash. Jem admitted that it was indeed an astonishing display of destructive power. However, he taunted that such a technique was entirely useless if he simply maintained his distance. But as the robotic enemy attempted to dodge backward, Lo smirked, stating that the true Sword Saint style goes far beyond anything Jem's calculations could ever comprehend. He unleashed the rupture once again, but this time, he reshaped it entirely into a massive sweeping shockwave. Even though Jem desperately generated a triple-layered defense wall, it couldn't do a damn thing to halt the raw force of the rupture. In his final moments, Jem realized he was witnessing a completely different level of mastery, exactly as Aurelia had predicted. And then, he was utterly annihilated. The robot's head was violently torn clean off. The undisputed victor of the clash was Lo Tuli, a rank 1089 adventurer. The other two girls finally made their way back to the scene, relieved to see that Lo had actually won the grueling fight. However, Lo's senses were still tingling. He could still feel an active presence. Suddenly, the severed mechanical head spoke up, chuckling. Well, you got me. Aurelia gasped, demanding to know how on earth he was still functioning. The head replied that it seemed their evaluator friend already had a pretty good idea. Luke stepped forward, stating grimly that the thing in front of them was a Pranix, isn't it? Jem confirmed her suspicion. It was a puppet controlled entirely from afar via remote prana, scientifically classified as a Pranix. The entity they fought wasn't human at all, but merely one of countless drone terminals controlled by his true, primary body. Luke recognized the advanced technology, noting it belonged to the Republic of Hario. Jem agreed, boasting that the technology was easily centuries ahead of their current time. He remarked that Lo Tuli should honestly feel proud of himself, even if it was just a mere terminal. Taking it down single-handedly was no small feat. Lo glared down at the head, reminding him that he had promised to stop the runaway train if he were defeated. Jem, playing dumb, asked if he had actually made such a promise. Lo growled, calling him an absolute bastard, but Jem just laughed it off, saying it was nothing more than a little joke. Jem pointed out that, regardless of his compliance, there was no longer any reason to stop the vehicle anyway, was there? Right on cue, the speeding train finally ground to a halt. However, it wasn't Jem who had initiated the brake sequence. Jem simply chuckled, noting that they happened to have an exceptionally talented mechanical ranker on board. Luke smiled proudly, replying that it was only natural. After all, the destination of this train was Hario, the globally renowned nation at the forefront of prana advancement. It was hardly a stroke of luck that several highly capable prana-wielding rankers were traveling aboard. Luke knew it was now only a matter of time before Jem seamlessly transferred his consciousness to an entirely different terminal, but Lo stepped in, refusing to let him go, stating that the puppet had to explain itself first. He demanded to know every single atrocity committed by the island of the gods, and what the true purpose of the Babel clan originally was. He needed to know if Yuna and the rest of the people who were slaughtered were somehow still alive. Jem replied that the definitive answer to those questions was deeply intertwined with the ultimate, grand objective of Ouroboros. As long as the boy flatly refused to to join their ranks. Jem was strictly forbidden from revealing anything. However, he offered a tiny, ominous hint. He warned Lo that if he were to ever hear the true answer to that question, he would instantly plunge into a state of profound, absolute despair. Jem concluded by stating that this wasn't a permanent goodbye, but merely a temporary farewell. If Lo insisted on continuing his relentless hunt for the sacred island, their paths would inevitably cross again. Meanwhile, far away inside his original, primary terminal, Jem opened his eyes, murmuring to himself that the encounter had yielded an incredibly rich harvest. He noted that while the boy's sword techniques were currently incomplete, as expected, Lo was already capable of establishing a direct connection with the power of Babel. Jem resolved to keep a very close eye on him. Everything was unfolding exactly as their leader had predicted, but now, he had a massive amount of new research data to analyze. But the moment he turned around, Jem froze. His advanced equipment had been completely smashed to pieces. Before he could even process the sight, a blade flashed through the air, clean slicing his head off in the very next fraction of a second. Jem groaned, muttering that it seemed he was destined to be decapitated multiple times today. The mysterious woman holding the blade stepped out of the shadows, coldly stating that he clearly had no concept of real danger and had grown far too comfortable hiding behind his disposable pranix bodies. Jem demanded to know who the hell she was, but she merely countered, asking who he honestly thought she was. The moment the woman actively unleashed her prana, Jem's eyes widened in sheer horror. He realized that she belonged to the exact same Thule tribe as Lo. She glared down at him, demanding confirmation that Jem hadn't dared to lay a single finger on the boy. The sheer colossal magnitude of her concentrated prana caused the entire room to violently tremble. Jem thought to himself in panic that this woman was light years ahead of Lo Thule. She was incredibly close to completely mastering the absolute power of Babel. He knew there were only two possible fates for humans who were abducted to the island of the gods. This person, she had to be one of them. She asked coldly if Jem's true primary body wasn't present. She deduced that he had entirely converted his physical form into pure prana and scattered it across the globe, completely abandoning his mortal flesh to become a wandering consciousness. Jem gasped, asking if she truly possessed the rare ability of prana regressive tracking. The hooded woman merely smiled beneath her cloak, asking why he sounded so incredibly surprised. He knew perfectly well that with the legendary power of Babel, executing such a feat was entirely possible, and that was precisely the reason she had been deployed by her superiors, to hunt him down and execute him. As she began to softly recite her high-level incantation, Jem realized too late that he had been entirely careless in using this specific terminal as his primary hub. She possessed the terrifying power to completely erase the remaining human essence of his consciousness. Sensing his imminent demise, Jem instantly utilized his cell beetle to switch to autonomous mode, desperate to relay a final, critical warning to the leader of Ouroboros. The island of the gods has officially acquired an incredibly dangerous pawn. Immediately after the data packet sent, Jem's consciousness was completely and permanently erased from existence. The hooded vanguard of Babel stood alone in the ruins, declaring coldly to the empty room that the absolute penalty of death would inevitably fall upon any and all who dared to defy the true gods. Later on, they finally arrived at the central station of the Air Republic. Thomas mentioned that he owes the kid one, and Lo responded that this time, his gratitude feels a lot more genuine than the first time they met. Thomas replied that even though the merchant rankings are a world of mutual corruption, this time he thinks it's alright to open up a little, and thanked the boy. If it wasn't for them, Thomas would be dead. He promised he would make sure to give them a proper reward. At this point, he figures the kid cares way more about ranking than money anyway, so he told the young man to visit his shop anytime, guaranteeing a reward worthy of his efforts. Aurelia remarked that Thomas is a bit of a strange guy, and Lo agreed, but added that he's a good person. Aurelia felt the same way. Finally, they were walking through the streets of the Republic of Aereo, a beautifully designed, well-architected, and organized place. Aurelia commented that the location truly lives up to its reputation as a developed nation in Prana, and asked if Luke had been here multiple times. Luke replied that she had, just as she had already explained to Lo before. The technology of the Technology Bureau is backed by the Republic of Aereo, and Luke visited this place several times for advanced technology training. Lo noticed that this was a completely different world compared to the Kingdom of Valter. Luke said that first, they are going to update their rankings at the Certification Bureau, and offered to handle that little chore for Aurelia too, as a favor. Later on, Luke had already organized all the paperwork. She started with Lo's ranking, which jumped from 1089 to 924. He finally entered the 3-digit realm, but Lo wasn't expecting this kind of growth. Luke told him that even so, it's incredible, explaining that the higher the ranking, the harder it is to climb. Most rankers take a year or even 10 years just to cross that wall. His promotion is proof of his genuine talent. Aurelia's ranking also shot up significantly, going from 305 to 188. She replied that it wasn't bad at all, though on the inside, she was absolutely thrilled. Aurelia explained that her next step was to head to the Holy Land of Knights, the rank 11 danger zone. It was the place where the first swordmaster trained alone, the birthplace of the wise sword style. Although she has to cross steep mountains, taking a plane would make things a lot easier. Aurelia also shared that before leaving the kingdom, she heard rumors that Adol was spotted spotted in the Holy Land, and she plans to ask him if she can become his disciple. Even if she doesn't become his disciple, just being near Adol would be a great experience. She asked if Lo wanted to send a message to Adol. Lo replied yes, just tell him that he is constantly moving forward. Aurelia departed with that message in mind, and simply didn't even say goodbye. Luke remarked that they will meet up with her again anyway, since the bonds between rankers are easily broken and reforged. Someday, the time will come when they'll need to rely on each other again. Then Luke asked if they should fulfill their main goal in the city, analyzing Lo's prana. Finally, for an accurate examination, they are heading to the National Research Institution, because that place is the hub for world-class students. Surely someone there knows about his prana. Luke already had a specific person in mind, the rank 3 prana scholar, known as the Grand Professor. However, some rumors say he is a bit self-centered. His skills are highly important, and getting an appointment out of nowhere is incredibly difficult. When they arrived, the waiting list to see the guy was a whole year long. The receptionist stated that this was the earliest possible slot. Luke replied that she couldn't wait that long. Meanwhile, Lo noticed that the Republic used pranix to assist people as well. Luke asked if the young man was focusing on the current situation, and commented that handling negotiations is also the job of appraisers. She told Lo to hold on, as she would find a way to get them a meeting with the professor. She whispered a bunch of things into the receptionist's ear. Poor thing. Suddenly, a panicked doctor carrying several documents rushed past Lo, begging for his help. He just wanted to borrow a bit of energy to run a pranix. Lo replied sure, of course, and followed the doctor to the laboratory. Later, he found himself inside a giant glass beaker. Wait, what? The doctor explained that the professor started another completely crazy research project, so he is low on energy, and asked Lo to release his prana into this device while he handles the containment. Lo replied that it was all good. When he released his prana, the doctor noticed it was a very beautiful color, except, suddenly, the prana gauges went completely through the roof, and Lo shattered the glass. Right then, the professor appeared, demanding to know whose prana that was. The other doctor explained it belonged to that boy right there, but the professor shouted that he wanted to know the purity. What is the purity of his prana? It was vibrating so intensely. It's the first time he has ever witnessed such a phenomenon. This doctor introduced himself as Newman Leonar, rank 3 of the prana scholars, the Grand Professor. Luke came running into the lab with a receptionist, telling Lo that she managed to get an appointment 6 months from now, only to notice that Lo was already hanging out with the Grand Professor. When she realized it really was the Grand Professor, she passed out cold. Lo apologized for that. She asked the Grand Professor if he thought he was available to analyze his prana. Newman Leonar replied that, judging by how she put it, he assumes the other places failed to do so. Luke replied that the appraisal office of the Kingdom of Valter said measuring it would be difficult there, and sent them here. The professor answered that he is one of the people who developed the prana measurement services at the appraisal office. The functions were indeed heavily simplified, but with the prototype he has here, they will definitely be able to analyze it. Loe went back inside that glass capsule and activated his enchantment. It was truly incredible, according to the professor himself. After using the technique, he felt pretty weak. This time he didn't end up completely paralyzed though. He was actually doing better. The professor immediately got straight to the conclusion regarding Lo Tuli. The purity of his prana was fluctuating. The higher the purity of prana, the better it is, and it also increases the effectiveness of skills. Purity can be enhanced through training, but usually, the change is gradual. Regardless, Lo's purity is rising and falling irregularly. It is noticeable when the skill is active. His prana wants to increase its own purity, and the professor asked if he didn't find that fascinating. It's as if his prana is alive, waiting to hatch, trying to break the shell. Lo asked if he is still evolving. The professor said yes, precisely. Luke wondered to herself if it's still incomplete, completely unsure of what kind of monster Lo will turn into once he becomes whole. The professor was analyzing the data on the computer, mentioning that since they were measuring it anyway, he had also checked his total prana capacity, revealing that he is currently in 3rd place, which is pretty good. Luke responded with a nod, but then paused, her eyes widening. Wait, what did you just say? Third? Third? In the entire world? Third? The professor deadpanned and said, yeah, that's exactly what he just said. Duh. Luke thought to herself that Lo is truly incredible. If she hadn't met Lo back then, she might be living way up above the clouds by now. The island of the gods. She used to think it was a completely impossible goal, but now, it's actually starting to feel real. She went straight to updating his rank. While the professor asked, aren't you surprised, kid? Lo calmly replied that Luke was already doing enough being surprised for the both of them, making the doctor chuckle. You've got good company, young man. You better value this appraiser of yours. The professor then asked if Lo would mind staying a bit longer to run some more detailed analyses the following day. Lo replied that no, he didn't mind at all. Everything was fine. The professor then sighed, admitting it would be a whole lot easier if that guy were here. Where on earth was he wandering around? That idiot Gem. Lo instantly stood up, questioning him. Gem, could you tell me more about this person? He thought to himself that he couldn't let this opportunity slip away. This was a direct clue about the island of the gods. The professor explained that Gem was an excellent guy, an outstanding assistant. He was the only one who could ever keep up with Newman Leonor in this laboratory, and he had even surpassed him in the rankings. But one day, Gem lost his older brother. The very day after that happened, he vanished vanished into thin air and never came back. Either way, the professor cut the conversation short, saying it was already late and that Lo should return the next morning, to which Lo replied by thanking him for his time. Later that evening, they were staying at the station hotel in the Republic of Aereo. Luke asked if Jem was truly the professor's assistant, realizing there were still so many things she herself didn't know about Ouroboros. So, until they actually find Jem, they won't truly know what the other members have in common with Lo's analysis results. They figured they would listen to what the professor had to say the next day, which might finally reveal why Ouroboros has been relentlessly pursuing Lo. Lo silently pondered that this mysterious group was also aiming for the island of the gods. Meanwhile, back at the laboratory during the dead of night, someone had completely broken into the place. This intruder was cornering the professor, and she looked just like a fairy. The professor barked at her, saying he had dedicated 70 years of his life solely to research, so he didn't have any money to hand over to thieves like them. But she simply smiled and replied that they didn't want his money, they wanted his brain. She revealed that Jem is dead. The professor, shocked, asked if they really knew him, and she replied that yes, they were comrades. Because of that, they wanted the professor to replace Jem, all for the sake of Ouroboros. A short while later, that very same user of the Thula power stopped by the laboratory as well. She immediately noticed that people had been there until very recently, but someone else had beaten her to the punch and taken the professor first. The next morning, when Lo and Luke arrived back at the research department, they found the entire place in absolute chaos. That first doctor from before frantically informed them that the Grand Professor had been kidnapped. They rushed into his private lab to analyze the evidence, and the doctor pointed out clear signs of a struggle in the room, making it safe to assume it was indeed a kidnapping. Lo asked if he had any inkling of who might have done it. The doctor replied that he didn't, but he knew exactly where the professor was located. They had actually planted a microtransmitter inside the professor's glasses because the old man has a bad habit of wandering off aimlessly whenever he gets lost in thought. So, just to avoid losing the old geezer, they rigged his glasses. The real problem wasn't his coordinates, but the enemy's fighting power. Even if they knew where he was, blindly invading the place was a massive gamble. Hearing this, Lo stepped forward and said he would go rescue the professor. The doctor let out a sigh of relief, saying he was counting on them, and told them to take this tool along. He handed Luke a prototype, tactical analysis lens, which could visualize the flow of the surrounding prana structure, and basically gauge its raw power output. Luke was completely ready to move out too. Together, they tracked the signal to the designated spot, which looked like a massive, abandoned castle. They pushed open the grand doors of a completely empty, dark, and freezing hall, immediately noticing fresh, clear footprints. But suddenly Luke jumped in surprise, as the device started fiercely chiming. The lens detected a massive cluster of prana signatures. It turned out to be a horde of robots that looked exactly like Jem. They all fired their prana beams simultaneously, but looking through the lens, Luke quickly realized these weren't actually Jem or his personal puppets. They were just mass-produced soldiers. She called out, informing Lo that they weren't being remotely controlled. They were completely autonomous pranics units. Loe blocked the oncoming strikes, thinking to himself that this was actually a lot better. If Jem had somehow figured out how to multiply his own body, it would have been a terrifying situation to deal with. Without wasting a second, he unleashed his rupture skill, completely shattering the entire front line of robots. However, there were just too many of them. Luke scanned the area with her lens in another direction, and spotted two distinct prana signatures that were completely different from the regular pranics. Lo grabbed Luke tightly and dashed straight toward that exact direction. Even with the continuous barrage of pranics laser fire chasing his heels, he kept charging forward. Halfway through, the very walls of the corridor suddenly began to shift and slide, threatening to crush both of them to death. Luke frantically realized she needed to find a weak point with the lens right this second, and she noticed that prana was permeating through the entirety of the moving walls, actively shaping them. She screamed out the info that the walls weren't mechanical at all. They were entirely coated in thick prana, but there was absolutely no time to sit around and plan, as the walls were rapidly closing in, crushing them along with the rogue robots trapped in between. Lo didn't blink. He simply detonated everything in his path with his rupture, blasting them clean through to the other side of the corridor. There, they came face to face with Luvia, a prominent member of Ouroboros, who possessed a fairy-like appearance. She mentioned she had heard all about him through Jam, and offered a cold welcome to Lo Thula. Lo immediately noticed that her wings were completely fake, and his skin was fiercely tingling because she was emanating a staggering, suffocating pressure of prana. He demanded to know what her relationship was with Jam, and she casually replied that they were comrades belonging to the exact same organization. She added that this was the reason she felt so incredibly heartbroken when she discovered that he had passed away. Lo pressed further, asking if he was truly dead. Luvia pulled out Jem's little mechanical beetle, stating that he had delivered a final message right after his demise, which was exactly how she found out about him too. She confessed she was rather surprised he managed to track down this hidden facility. He flatly replied that he just followed the transmitter's signal. Luvia smiled, musing that the title of the Grand Professor wasn't just for show, and to think he would keep a transmitter on him for emergencies. But Lo cut her off, muttering that apparently it's just because he's a forgetful old man who wanders around. Shaking it off, Lo looked her dead in the eye and demanded she release the professor immediately. Luvia replied that she couldn't do that, as he he needed to do something for Ouroboros first. Suddenly, her wings fluttered, spreading a strange kind of pollen into the air. The fine powder drifted directly toward his sword, and Louis couldn't unsheath it. Luvia told him not to misunderstand, explaining that Gem hadn't lost to him, and that he shouldn't underestimate Ouroboros. Louis kept pulling, but he absolutely could not draw his blade. It felt as though something was forcefully holding it in place. Luke, peering through her lens, noticed that it was exactly the same type of prana that had been permeating the walls. However, Louis released his own prana and channeled massive raw strength to yank the sword out. The sheer pressure was so immense that even the floor beneath them began to crack. Luke realized with shock that his prana was reacting in the exact same way as when he uses his skills, even though he hadn't even activated one. After a monumental effort, Louis finally unsheathed the sword, and his gale slash managed to slice off a wing. Well, just a tiny fraction of one of Luvia's wings. She immediately apologized to Louis, admitting that she had drastically underestimated him. That being said, she suggested they could come to an agreement. She couldn't give the professor back just like that, but if he did her a favor, she could return him. Luke, however, spoke up and said no, stating that they had to confirm the professor was safe first, because otherwise, the deal would make absolutely no sense. Luvia replied that yes, that was only fair. And at that exact moment, the professor was actually living his best life. He was super pumped up with a massive helmet resting on his head, staring at all the high-tech equipment around him, looking genuinely overjoyed. The professor shouted out that he was right in the middle of the best part, okay? He literally ordered them to leave him in peace. Right after that, the wall slid shut again. Luke asked if he had actually even been kidnapped, while Louis responded that, even so, they couldn't just leave him like that, right? Luvia stated that he was currently replacing Jam, and she promised they would treat him with the utmost respect. Louis then asked what the actual terms of the agreement were. Luvia explained that the one who killed Jam was an assassin sent directly by the Island of the Gods, and she wanted Louis to capture this assassin, or he could just kill them. She asked if he could do that for her. Louis realized that this assassin was a direct clue sitting right on his path, so he replied yes, stating that he was in and accepted the deal. They shook hands to cement the contract. Luvia went on to explain a bit of the operation. The assassin from the Island of the Gods is actively targeting Professor Newman Leonard. The enemies already know she is keeping the professor safe, so they are actively tracking her prana. Louis asked if it was just a matter of time before they located this hideout. She replied that she had created a decoy as a countermeasure, leaving a high concentration of her prana inside a completely different set of ruins. Louis asked if she had left her own prana behind, and Luke asked if she was really like a fairy. She replied yes, explaining that they can transmute their prana into a fine dust. Luke gasped, mentioning that it was her very first time seeing someone from the fairy tribe, noting that they have never been registered on any ranking and are considered a mythical race. Luvia replied that they aren't interested in the affairs of the world, but she still has to hide her wings and register under a fake name. From what she could recall, her alias was actually ranked #1 on the prana control leaderboard. When Luke checked her rank cell to verify, her jaw dropped. It was absolutely true. She had been registered 3 years ago and was later removed after going missing in action. She shrugged and replied that she only wanted an ID card. She added that everyone from the fairy tribe is excellent at prana control, and she was particularly talented, but she was no match for her little sister. Lo asked if her sister was also an Ouroboros. She replied that she hoped so. The duo didn't really understand much of that family dynamic, but she quickly brought the conversation back to the plan. She explained that there was a very high chance the assassin would take the bait of the prana dust she left behind, so Loa concluded that he would ambush them. That was the plan, right? Luvia said exactly, and told him she would give them the exact coordinates. She anticipated the assassin would show up tonight, and warned him to be extremely careful. Later that night, they were waiting inside the abandoned building, and Luke suddenly detected someone approaching with slow, deliberate footsteps. The hooded figure stepped inside, but Lo instantly brought his sword right to their neck, ordering them not to move. The figure spun around rapidly, parrying his blade with their own. Suddenly, the intruder froze up and stopped moving, and Lo seized the opening, striking forward and tearing the hood completely open. At that exact moment, his eyes went wide as he realized, was that Yuna? At least, it looked exactly like her. Lo asked in complete shock if it was really her. She immediately bolted from the spot and leaped clean out the window, but he chased right after her. Loe thought to himself that it was definitely Yuna. There was no way he would ever mistake her. He activated his new skill to deflect with the flow of prana, allowing him to easily catch up to her by vaulting across the rooftops, and he shouted, asking why she wasn't responding to him. But the very first thing she did as he closed the distance was recite the incantation for the celestial spirit, the exact same ability he used. Lo knew that the form didn't last very long. He felt terrible for her, but he was going to try to restrain her until the time ran out. He struck continuously for a few seconds, unleashing his multiple gale slashes fused with lotuses. But something was fundamentally wrong. The effect wasn't wearing off at all. Perhaps that was the fully perfected form of the celestial spirit. Right then, the girl, still enveloped in the celestial spirit body, threw herself off the edge of the building. She definitely landed alive, but Lo was unable to pursue her any further, leaving him to wonder in agony if the assassin who brutally murdered Jam was actually Yuna. Needless to say, he was not even even remotely satisfied with how things turned out. They returned to Luvia's ruins, but Lo walked in with a dark, furious expression. She noticed things hadn't gone smoothly, but before she could say more, he aggressively grabbed her straight by the throat. She gasped, choking out that she didn't recall giving him a reason to do this. Lo growled, asking who exactly she was looking for, because he now knew she was tracking Yuna. She replied that she honestly had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. Lo finally released his grip, stating that he had run straight into the assassin Luvia had mentioned, but that the assassin was someone he knew personally, someone abducted by the island a long time ago, his own childhood friend. Luvia then realized what had truly transpired, and she replied that it was nothing more than a mere coincidence. It was a scenario they could have technically foreseen, even if the chances were astronomically low. She added that she never wanted to hurt Lo, but it remained an unchangeable fact that this person had killed Jam. He snapped back, stating that his friend would never kill another human being, but Luvia asked him if that was truly the exact same person he used to know, if she hadn't changed at all, and if he was absolutely certain of that. Lo paused as a painful memory flashed through his mind. She had indeed looked completely different, bearing no resemblance to the gentle girl he once knew. He then asked what she planned to do with the assassin once they captured her. Luvia replied that she had originally been planning cold-blooded revenge, but decided against it because she didn't want to break his little heart. Loe scoffed, asking what kind of people they even were, menacing innocent lives indiscriminately, only to turn around and talk about avenging a fallen comrade. Their actions were completely contradictory, because at the end of the day, they kill innocent people. But Luvia countered, stating that Ouroboros is their family. She explained that they are the weak who couldn't protect themselves alone, and they can only manage to do so by working together. They are the outcasts of the world who lost their place, and because of that, they do not hesitate to commit crimes in the name of Ouroboros. Because if they don't act this way, they can never reach their dream. Lo didn't give an answer, mostly because he has a dream of his own too. Suddenly, the walls shook violently. Luvia asked if it was the professor causing trouble again. In fact, a few machines had crashed inside the room, but the professor was looking absolutely overjoyed. He shouted that the project is complete and that he finally managed to pull it off. He finished it perfectly, commenting that such a task was mere child's play for someone like him. The theory that Gem left behind was indeed correct. Colliding inverted prana wavelengths completely annihilates the prana target. With this breakthrough, he developed the prana nullification device, the Skyfall Wedge. Loe asked what exactly that machine was. Luvia explained that this device is going to be their ultimate trump card, the professor's grand masterpiece, and that with this wedge, she is going to bring down the island of the gods. She told the professor he had her deepest gratitude, but he scoffed and replied that should be his line. The old man explained that Gem's blueprints and designs were completely flawless, and he had simply moved his hands according to the instructions. In the end, he felt like he had one final collaboration with his foolish apprentice, allowing him to converse with that boy for the first time in a very long while. Luvia then asked why Lo wouldn't just join forces with them. She explained that their biggest risk right now is having the celestial wedge destroyed, and to prevent that from happening, she absolutely needs to kill the assassin. The decoys where she left her prana were being destroyed one after another, so his childhood friend is certainly going to arrive here very soon. Because of this, she needs him to intercept her, and she promised she won't kill the girl, only incapacitate her. Lo thought to himself that, with the way Yuna was right now, he wouldn't be able to stop her on his own. He replied that fine, he would cooperate. Luvia smiled, stating that this time, they are definitely going to capture her. Meanwhile, later on, the assassin was already standing just outside, completely ready for another attack. After a short while, they were just waiting around. Luke stayed on guard, tracking everything with her lens. Luvia took advantage of the quiet moment before the fight began to share a dark secret about the island of the gods with Lo. She revealed that the island completely brainwashes every single human it captures, strips away their exceptional powers, trains them, and turns them into mindless soldiers. Lo asked if that was what they did to Yuna, and the fairy replied that yes, most likely. She explained that their sole objective is to eliminate any threat to the island, which is exactly why the professor is also being targeted, since a mind capable of creating a weapon that threatens the island is nothing more than a nuisance and a massive obstacle in their path. Lo recalled Gem saying that the island of the gods continues its barbaric and terrible deeds, and he asked if this was what he meant, turning innocent people into tools of war. She replied, no, because the sins committed over there run much deeper than that. At that exact moment, Luke sharply warned them both that she had arrived. Sure enough, there was Yuna, walking forward, enveloped in the raw power of prana and the celestial spirit incantation. Her very first move was to flash directly behind the fairy in the blink of an eye, but Lo managed to keep up with her speed and blocked the strike. Luvia remarked that that was incredibly close, and while airborne, she scattered her pollen, instantly creating thick roots to bind Yuna's legs. Or at least, they were supposed to trap her, but the girl sliced through everything with a single fluid spinning motion. Luvia began to fully understand the terrifying reason why she had been chosen to be a soldier. Loe managed to strike back, unleashing a gale force windblade, while the fairy continued her synchronization synchronized assault, molding the earth and the surrounding roots all over the battlefield. Capitalizing on this opening, Lo triggered his rupture, blasting Yuna clean through multiple stone walls. He successfully managed to keep her pinned down with his relentless strikes and screamed at Luvia to attack with everything she had, even if he himself got caught in the crossfire. High above the chaotic combat, Luvia smirked, stating he didn't even need to tell her. She rained her pollen over the entire ruins, transforming the landscape into a colossal stone hand designed to crush the opponent like a mere fly. When the massive ruins collapsed violently over the two of them, they both emerged completely intact. Thanks to the defense of the celestial spirit descent, they collided fiercely using the exact same power, and Lo strained with every ounce of his being to keep the ability active, thinking that if Yuna could pull this off, then he damn well could too. Yuna briefly noticed that the boy was actively learning just by observing her prana, which was truly mind-blowing. The two clashed at point-blank range, and their exploding prana lit up the entire night sky, creating a beautifully surreal scene to behold. Luke watched from a distance, realizing that absolutely no one could interfere in that combat, as that realm belonged entirely to the two of them. Lo maintained the celestial spirit descent for so long that his conscious mind was suddenly pulled away to a completely different place. He abruptly found himself standing back in the middle of an ancient tribe, leaving him completely bewildered as he wondered, where on earth am I?